Since 1984, the world of Transformers has given us stories about leaders, soldiers, and the weight they carry. Characters like Optimus Prime, Ultra Magnus, and Rodimus aren't remembered because they're the strongest. They're remembered because of the choices they made when things were the hardest. This collection moves through those moments: responsibility, doubt, sacrifice, and what it costs to keep going anyway. You don't have to follow every detail. You can just listen or let it play in the background while you rest. Each chapter stands on its own. There's nowhere you need to get to. So take a breath, settle in, and we'll start at the beginning. Thanks for being here, and as always, stay handsome.
It happened in 1986, not on a battlefield, not with fanfare, but in a darkened movie theater, surrounded by popcorn and wide-eyed children who thought their hero would always win. And then he didn't. Optimus Prime died. And for millions of kids, now grown men, that loss was real. We saw it, we felt it, deep in our gut, because when that voice went silent, it didn't feel like fiction. It felt like the end of something sacred. He wasn't just a robot. He was a symbol of something we've never seen, a leader who chose mercy over might. So before we trace the wars and timelines, we have to ask something deeper. Why do we still cry, even when we know he'll come back? What makes Optimus Prime more than a character? What makes him a symbol? It happened in a darkened movie theater. A hero's death played out in flickering light and trembling sound. Not for glory, not for power, but for others. Optimus Prime fell, and with him, an entire generation's certainty that heroes always survive. It wasn't just another Saturday morning cartoon. It was traumatic, a generational wound, delivered in Peter Cullen's trembling voice. For a moment, maybe the first in many young lives, we realized something horrifying. Good men can fall. Heroes don't always win, and sometimes the leader dies first. No resurrection, no reboot, just silence, just grief. That death wasn't just a plot twist, it was a loss of innocence, because Optimus Prime wasn't just a character, he was a moral compass, a father figure, a myth given metal and voice, and in that moment, the mask of invincibility shattered, revealing something rarer, something sacred, a hero who doesn't lead to conquer, but to care. For a generation of boys, and let's be honest, a generation raised on phrases like man up and be strong, Optimus Prime offered something radically different, not rage, but resolve. He didn't bark orders, he didn't need to. He became the symbol of restraint in a world that rewards rage. In his voice, we heard calm conviction. In his choices, we saw the courage to forgive. In a world that measures strength by domination, he measured it by mercy. And that choice, quiet, unwavering, selfless, became his legend. Because when we were told that strength was loud, Optimus Prime proved that strength could whisper. And maybe that's why he stuck. Decades later, he's still everywhere. In our culture, in our shorthand, in our souls. He's the voice we imitate when we want to sound wise. He's the posture we mimic when we want to look strong. He's the lesson we return to when we're lost. Because every generation needs a hero who chooses mercy over might. Every child who watched him fall grew up to carry that voice inside them. That deep, calm conviction that doing the right thing still matters, even when it costs you everything. The franchise moved on, of course. There were reboots, explosions, shiny new faces, but through it all, Prime remained. In the cartoons, his silhouette is unmistakable. In the films, his voice cuts through the chaos, steady as ever. And in our minds, he occupies that strange, mythic space between parent and prophet. He's not just a robot, he's the ideal, the living symbol, the impossible standard, the reason we believe in leaders at all. And yet, we know how his story ends. Over and over again. He dies. He rises. He sacrifices again. We know it. We've seen it a dozen times across a dozen timelines. And still, we cry. And why? Because grief isn't just about what we lose. It's about who we remember. And when Optimus Prime dies, we don't just mourn a character. We mourn certainty. The certainty that doing the right thing is enough. That noble leaders can endure. That the good guy will make it to the end. And in a world that feels increasingly cynical, where integrity is mocked and kindness mistaken for weakness, Prime's fall hurts even more, because it reminds us what we've lost. Belief. Belief in goodness. Belief in decency. Belief that sacrifice still means something. Optimus Prime never asked to be mythic, but he became a myth anyway. Not because he was flawless, but because he wasn't. Because he stumbled. He doubted. He lost more than he ever won. And still, he stood. That's what made him timeless. Not the guns, Not the Matrix, not even the truck, but the truth he carried, that leadership is not about power, it's about service, that the ones who carry the heaviest burdens often do so alone, and when they fall, they do it quietly, without applause, without reward, because someone has to. So when we cry for Prime, we're not just crying for a fallen Autobot, we're crying for every man who never got to say goodbye, every father who tried to do the right thing and failed, every leader who carried more than he could bear without ever asking for thanks. We cry because the world tells us that kindness is weakness, that mercy is for fools, that strength must shout, and Prime proves them all wrong. He's strength in silence, power in service, grace in the face of war. He's what we wish leadership still looked like, selfless, humble, unwavering, and that's why he endures. That's why, 40 years later, a generation still grieves when he falls, because somewhere deep inside, we want to believe that leaders like him still exist, that sacrifice still matters, that the flame will never go out, because Optimus Prime didn't just define a franchise, he defined what it means to lead with grace in a world that rewards domination. But symbols don't make themselves. They're forged, not in victory, but in fire, in sacrifice, in choices no one else wants to make. And the truth is, Optimus Prime wasn't born a leader. He didn't start out with a title, or a crown, or a matrix in his chest. He was just a worker, a record keeper, a nobody named Orion Pax. And when the world broke around him, when Cybertron turned cruel, he didn't rise because he was the strongest. He rose because no one else would, because someone had to carry the weight, someone had to answer the call, even if it cost him everything. Have you ever been chosen for something you didn't ask for? Not a gift, not a blessing, but a burden. This was the fate of Orion Pax. Before the wars, before the Matrix, before the name Optimus Prime echoed across galaxies, there was only Orion, a clerk, a thinker, a dock worker, a student of logic and history, not of war. In most continuities, Orion wasn't forged for greatness. He was a data archivist, a functionary, an idealist, and above all else, a believer in peace. He lived in a world already fracturing. Cybertron was rusting from the inside out. The caste system had hardened. Freedom had become a privilege, not a right. And in that age of quiet tyranny, Orion dared to ask questions. He dared to care. In some worlds, he admired heroes like Megatron. Before the fall, yes, Megatron, the revolutionary, the laborer who stood up against the elites before the monster. In IDW, Orion was a student of Zeta Prime, but disillusioned by corruption. He saw the Senate for what it was, self-serving, bloated, blind. And when his voice no longer mattered within the system, he stepped outside it, not with violence, but with truth. He stood in the forum. He tried to find another way, and he failed. Because some wars can't be argued out of existence. Some battles come whether we want them or not. So when the time came to choose a Prime, he wasn't the obvious choice, not the strongest, not the loudest, but the one who believed. The matrix of leadership didn't seek a conqueror, it sought conviction. It chose a spark that still hoped. It chose Orion. And from that moment on, the burden was his. In almost every telling, the matrix was not a reward, it is a cross. It doesn't grant power, it grants responsibility. The power to make impossible decisions, the power to watch friends die, the power to sacrifice what you want for what others need. To be a Prime is to bleed. Quietly. Daily. To be a Prime is to wear the mask, so no one sees the pain beneath. That's the weight Optimus carried, not just through wars, but across timelines. In Transformers Prime, he was once a humble archivist mentored by Alpha Trion. He rose not through force, but through wisdom, through humility. And when Megatron, his friend, his brother-in-arms, rejected unity for conquest, Optimus didn't chase vengeance. He carried the flame, even when it meant standing alone. In War for Cybertron, we see another version, a soldier this time, a warrior, but still a reluctant one. He doesn't crave the Matrix, he doesn't want the title, he only wants peace. And yet, peace will not come, not without sacrifice. So again, he chooses. Not because he believes he'll survive, but because someone has to. But what makes that choice even more powerful is how costly it becomes. Because the Matrix doesn't just light the way, it scorches the one who bears it. In IDW, Orion Pax is forced to watch the collapse of his ideals. He rises as Prime not with glory, but with grief. The Senate falls, Megatron ascends, and the war tears Cybertron in half. He's no longer the dreamer, he becomes the one who must hold the line. Even when peace seems impossible, even when unity crumbles, even when he begins to lose himself. There's a moment in the IDW continuity, just after Zeta Prime's death, where Orion stands before the Matrix and hesitates. He doesn't want it, not out of fear, but because he still hopes someone better might take it instead. But no one comes. No one else will carry the weight, so he does. And in doing so, Orion dies, and Optimus Prime is born. He doesn't just become a leader, he becomes a symbol, not of strength, but of sacrifice. He surrenders his identity, his peace, sometimes even his spark, because leadership, real leadership, is not about commanding others. It's about protecting them. It's about choosing the hard road, the lonely one. In Transformers Prime, we see his pain most clearly. Every decision he makes is filtered through loss. Every moment of peace is shattered by necessity. He's not allowed to rest, not allowed peace, not while others still suffer. And yet, he endures, because someone must. Let's not forget what he could have become. Megatron faced the same crossroads. Both Orion Pax and Megatronus saw the same injustices. They both saw the rot. They both believed in change. But where Megatron chose control, Orion chose service. Megatron saw the system and said, burn it. Orion saw the system and said, heal it. Megatron demanded obedience. Optimus offered grace. And in that ideological clash, two paths emerged. One shaped by ego, the other by sacrifice. One chose domination, the other chose to carry. There's a reason the Matrix didn't choose Megatron. It wasn't about strength. It was about the willingness to serve, the willingness to lose, to suffer, to lead without reward. Because Prime was never about glory, never about power. He doesn't want to be a Prime. He chooses to be one, and that choice echoes across every timeline. In Aligned, we see it in his mentorship. He lifts up RC, Bulkhead, Bumblebee, not with commands, but with trust. In G1, even after countless battles, he remains calm, steady, compassionate, a general who'd rather negotiate than destroy. Even in War for Cybertron, where the edges are sharper, the wounds fresher, he leads with restraint, because restraint is not weakness, it's strength refined. And in every version, the restraint is not passive. It's active, intentional, power held in check for the sake of others. In IDW, the cost becomes staggering. He loses comrades, he buries friends, he witnesses atrocities and wonders if anything he's done matters. And still, he carries the Matrix, not because he must, but because no one else will. There's even a moment late in the war when he almost gives it up, when he questions if the symbol means anything anymore, but because the meaning isn't in the Matrix itself, it's in how you carry it, and Prime carries it with honor. So if you've ever been the one people turn to, not because you're the smartest, not because you're the strongest, but because you're the only one who won't walk away, then you already understand him. Optimus Prime doesn't lead because he's destined. He leads because he decides to, again and again and again. He chooses the burden, he chooses the path. He chooses to stand even when it breaks him. And that's the myth he becomes. Not the warrior, not the general, not the truck, but the one who says yes when everyone else says no. The reluctant king, the chosen servant, the burden bearer who refuses to lay it down. And that way, he echoes legends beyond Cybertron. Aragon, who resisted the crown until his people needed him. Moses, who stuttered through the burden of leading his people. King Arthur, raised in obscurity until destiny called him to the sword. Each of them chosen, each of them reluctant, each of them refined by sacrifice. Optimus Prime is not Cybertron's strongest warrior, but he is its truest leader. So if you've ever felt like that weight is too much, if you ever carried something no one else can understand, if you've ever stood at the edge of choice, knowing that stepping forward might break you, then you already understand him. Optimus Prime isn't great because he wins. He's great because he chooses to fight for those who can't, because he carries the burden even when it hurts, even when it breaks him, even when no one thanks him, because someone has to, and that is the choice that made him. Before we step away from the leader who carried the world, not because you wanted to, but because someone had to. Make sure to follow or subscribe to Disassembled Heroes and Villains on your favorite podcast app. Each week we unmask the legends and tyrants who shape pop culture and ask what their stories reveal about us. Next week, we'll leave the burden of mercy behind and step into something darker. He was once a voice for the voiceless, a revolutionary who dreamed of peace and learned to kill. He says he fights for freedom, but his empire is built on chains. He has no gods, no mercy, only the truth he carved into Cybertron with his own hands. Peace through tyranny. Next week, we meet the warlord who shaped the Decepticons, the fallen brother of Optimus Prime, the monster who rose from the mines to challenge the stars. Next week, we face Megatron of the Transformers. Now, back to the story of the reluctant king, Optimus Prime. There's one crucial fact that no one tells you about carrying the mantle of leadership. It's a burden like no other. Optimus didn't become a legend because he was powerful. He became one because he kept walking after everyone else was gone. Cybertron fell, the war never ended, and one by one, so did the people he loved. Because leadership doesn't just demand strength, it demands sacrifice. So what does it cost to be the Prime? What does it take from you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the symbol? So now, let's face the truth behind the legend. Not what Optimus became, but what he gave up to become it. What part of yourself did you lose when you stepped into responsibility? Not the grand sacrifices, not the heroic moments, but the quiet ones. The hobbies you abandoned, the friendships that faded, the version of yourself you left behind, because someone needed you to be something else. That's the weight Optimus Prime carried. Not just the Matrix, not just the wars, but the slow, grinding erosion of everything he was, before he became what everyone else needed him to be. He lost his world. Cybertron didn't fall in a day. It died slowly, rusting, fracturing, bleeding energon into the void. In G1, the war consumed the planet's resources until there was nothing left. The Autobots and Decepticons fought over scraps of a dying world. By the time Optimus launched the Ark, the ship that would carry his people to Earth, Cybertron was already a tomb. He didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because staying meant extinction. When he looked back at his homeworld, fading into the distance, cold and lifeless, he knew he'd never see it whole again. In IDW, the loss is even more brutal. Cybertron doesn't just die, it's murdered. The Senate's corruption, Megatron's revolution, the Decepticons' conquest, Optimus watches his world tear itself apart, not from external threats, but from within. The cities he's walked as Orion Pax, gone. The archives he studied, burned. The ideals he believed in, shattered. But when he finally evacuates the planet, when he orders the Ark to launch, leaving millions behind, he doesn't do it as a hero, he does it as a survivor, haunted by the faces of those he couldn't save. In War for Cybertron, the fall is apocalyptic. Megatron doesn't just conquer Cybertron, he poisons it. Dark Energon, the corrupted lifeblood of the planet, spreads like a cancer. Optimus watches as the world itself turns against them. The ground cracks, the skies darken, the core destabilizes. And when he makes the call to abandon Cybertron, to launch the Ark into the unknown, he's not saving his people. He's watching them become refugees, homeless, scattered, broken. And he carries that weight because he's the one who gave the order. But losing a world is only the beginning. He lost his mentor, Alpha Trion, the one who found Orion Pax broken in the streets, the one who rebuilt him, the one who said, "You will become Optimus Prime." In G1, Alpha Trion sacrifices himself to save Optimus during a Decepticon assault. And Optimus, still young, still learning what it means to lead, watches his mentor die. He lost his comrades. Ironhide, Jazz, Prowl, Elita 1, Bumblebee, names that echo across timelines, each lost a different kind of wound. Ironhide was his anchor, the old war dog who never flinched. Jazz was his spark, laughter and music in the dark. Prowl was order, the mind that mirrored Optimus's logic. Bumblebee was hope, young, bright, unbroken. In Transformers Prime, Bumblebee loses his voice, ripped out by Megatron during the war. And though he survives, Optimus carries the guilt because he wasn't there, because he couldn't stop it. Every time Bumblebee communicates through radio clips, fragmented, broken, Optimus hears the voice he used to be whole, the scout who sang, who laughed, who reminded them all what joy sounded like, now silent. And Optimus never stopped blaming himself. In the 1986 movie, Ironhide dies without final words. Jazz falls moments later, and Optimus, bleeding and broken, carries their deaths into his final battle, not as a general, but as a friend, saying goodbye. In Transformers Prime, Cliffjumper dies in the series premiere. Optimus doesn't witness it, he arrives too late. And when he finds Cliffjumper's body, corrupted by Dark Energon, reanimated as a mindless Terracon, he's forced to destroy what's left of his friend, twice. Once in life, once in death. In War for Cybertron Kingdom, Elita 1 stays behind. She doesn't die, but she's lost to him all the same. As the Ark launches, as Optimus leads his people into the unknown, Elita remains on Cybertron to fight, to resist, to hold the line. In G1, she was Ariel, the one who knew him before the war. In War for Cybertron, she was his equal, a warrior who challenged him, believed in him, loved him. She stays not just out of duty, but because she sees what Optimus cannot, that someone must remain, or there will be nothing left to return to. He doesn't say goodbye, because saying it makes it real, so he watches her through the viewport, her silhouette growing smaller, until she's just a memory. He doesn't beg her to come, he doesn't argue, because he understands sacrifice. He's made it 1,000 times, but that doesn't make it easier, and he turns away, because leaders don't get to grieve, not yet. But then, he lost himself. In the Bayverse, grief becomes the lens of friendship. After the Battle of Chicago and Dark of the Moon, after watching humans die by the thousands, after seeing his Autobots executed in the streets, Optimus changes. He's colder, harder, more willing to kill. In Age of Extinction, he tells Cade Yeager, "I'm done saving humans," not because he's cruel, because he's broken. He's carried the weight for so long, protected a species that fears him, betrays him, hunts him, that he finally cracks. And when he executes Attinger, the human who orchestrated the Autobot genocide, he doesn't hesitate, because the Optimus who believed in mercy, the one who always chose peace, died in Chicago. In Transformers Prime, the loss is even more intimate. At the end of Season 1, Unicron awakens, and the only way to stop him is for Optimus to sacrifice the Matrix of leadership. He knows what that means. The Matrix isn't just a weapon, it holds his memories, his purpose, his identity. And without it, he won't be Optimus Prime, he'll be Orion Pax again, the archivist, the idealist, the one who still believed Megatron was his friend. And he does it anyway, because someone has to. When he wakes, he remembers nothing, not the wars, not the Autobots, not the sacrifices. He believes Megatron is Megatronus, his ally, his brother, and Megatron uses him, exploits him, until the truth shatters him. When his memory is returned, when the Matrix is restored, Optimus doesn't rejoice, he mourns, because for one fleeting moment, he was free. Free from the burden, free from the pain, free from the name Prime. And now, he must let that freedom die. Even beyond the war, the losses persist, fragments fall away, the friend, the student, the dreamer, and their place, a symbol, a legend, a leader who walks alone. When Megatron loses, he weaponizes it. Every betrayal becomes justification, every death becomes fuel. He builds momentum in his pain, empires, armies, ideologies. He makes the universe bleed because he bled first. Optimus does the opposite. He turns inward. Every loss becomes a reason to protect what's left. Every death becomes a vow. No more, not on my watch. He doesn't build momentum, he builds shelters, not for glory, but because someone has to. But that restraint, that refusal to let grief become rage, it carves him hollow, because anger was release. And Optimus never releases. He holds it, compresses it, until the weight of every loss becomes the foundation he stands on, unshakable, unbending, alone. So when the Matrix is heavy, when the cheers are gone, when every friend has fallen, he still leads, because someone must. And that, more than any victory, is what makes him a Prime. Not glory, not triumph, but the willingness to lose everything and still stand. After everything he's lost, his planet, his brothers, even himself, rage would have been easy. No one would have blamed him. Strike back, burn it all down, become the war that stole everything from you. But Optimus Prime isn't defined by what he destroys. He's defined by what he refuses to, because the hardest choice isn't to fight, it's to not. To stand in front of the enemy who betrayed you and let them live. So if strength is sacrifice, then restraint is the wisdom to know when sacrifice ends. And when was the last time you chose not to fight back? Optimus Prime could crush almost anyone in his path, but he doesn't. And that might be the single most misunderstood part of his character, because when people think of Optimus, they think of strength, power, a warrior with an axe of blazing energy and a voice that thunders with command, but they forget the truth beneath the surface. Optimus doesn't want to fight, he chooses not to, and that choice, again and again, is what makes him a leader. In Transformers Animated, we meet a younger, less refined Optimus. He's not the Prime yet, not the myth, not the icon, just a bot with ideals, something to prove. And in this version, he fails. Not because he's weak, but because he lets anger lead. After being framed and betrayed by Sentinel Prime and Alpha Trion, Optimus faces a choice: expose the conspiracy, take revenge, burn the system to the ground, or walk away. He walks away. He watches Sentinel take the glory he earned. He sees the system that betrayed him continue unchallenged. Every day, he carries the weight of knowing he could have exposed them, could have burned it all down, and he doesn't. Not because he's weak, but because he knows what rage does to leaders. He's seen it in Megatron, felt it rising in himself, so he swallows it, buries it, chooses the long road over the easy strike. And that choice, quiet, invisible, unrewarded, is what makes him worthy of the Matrix. Even after exile, even after disgrace, he doesn't seek vengeance. He chooses growth, patience, restraint. Because the kind of leader Cybertron needs isn't the one who fights back first. It's the one who learns to wait until the strike matters most. Animated Optimus doesn't become Prime through combat, he becomes Prime through discipline. And in a culture that celebrates dominance, that's a radical idea. Across generations, Optimus Prime has stood before Megatron, his oldest friend, his deadliest enemy, and held back. He could end it, he could kill him, and sometimes Megatron even begs for it, and still, Prime refuses. In G1, clearest moment of restraint comes in the return of Optimus Prime. When the hate plague sweeps across Earth, turning friend against friend, Optimus is resurrected to bring hope. And when he faces Galvatron, Megatron's twisted evolution, there's no joy in the fight, no glory. Optimus defeats him, but he spares him. Galvatron lies broken at his feet. The hate plague still rages on. The war could end here. One strike, one execution, one final act of justice. And Optimus lowers his weapon. He doesn't gloat, he doesn't preach. Because even in G1, where battles were simple, heroes were clear, and the villains wore their evil openly, Prime understood something the war forgot. The cycle only breaks when someone refuses to strike back, because even in the darkest hour, Prime believes in a better way, not because it's easier, because it's harder, because anyone can destroy, only the strong can choose not to. The real test of leadership isn't how much power you wield, it's how much you're willing to hold back. In Cyberverse, we see another side of Mercy. The war is brutal, Bumblebee is damaged, Hot Rod is haunted, the Allspark is lost, and still, Optimus offers second chances to Starscream, to Megatron, even to Tarn, whose ideology once devoured whole worlds. He forgives when others demand spilled energon. He trusts when no one else can, because he isn't trying to win. He's trying to redeem. He remembers what they were before the war. Megatron, the poet. Starscream, the seeker. Tarn, the idealist. And he refuses to let the war define him forever, because Optimus Prime doesn't just see what you are. He sees what you still could become, even when no one else does. That's not naivete, that's faith in the spark, and faith, more than firepower, has always been his greatest weapon. But even Restraint has its limits. In the Bayverse, we watch Prime's code tested like never before. By Revenge of the Fallen, the Mercy begins to crack. The horrors of war, Jazz torn apart, Earth scarred, splinter his faith. By Age of Extinction, the Autobots are hunted, their allies gone, and Optimus changes. His voice hardens, his optics burn red, his mercy turns to anger. When he says, "I'll kill you," it isn't posturing, it's grief, sharpened by rage. Because even a Prime has limits. Even the most merciful leader can break. When he executes Attinger, when he ends Sentinel Prime, he becomes, for a moment, the thing he swore never to be. And here's what makes his story sacred. He comes back, again and again. In the last night, after Quintessa corrupts him, after he swears vengeance on humanity, he finds himself again. He reclaims his soul. And in that moment, Optimus reminds us, restraint isn't just about sparing others, it's about saving yourself. Mercy doesn't mean weakness, it means choosing not to become the monster the war made you. In Transformers Prime, restraint takes on its purest form. Optimus loses everything, his memories, his identity, his name. He becomes Orion Pax again, the idealist who still believes Megatron is his friend, and Megatron, ever the deceiver, uses him, twists him, turns him into a weapon against his own people. When Optimus finally remembers, when the truth hits him like a heat of a dying sun, he has every reason to kill Megatron, every right, but he doesn't. Because if he kills in rage, he proves Megatron right. At the war made monsters of them both, so he lets him live. Not because Megatron deserves it, but because Optimus refuses to let hate decide who he is. And that's the real strength, not in the strike, but in the staying of the hand. But that's the difference, isn't it? When Megatron is betrayed, he burns the world. When he's wounded, he demands retribution. When he's wronged, he makes the universe bleed. Every loss becomes a weapon. Every betrayal becomes fuel. He builds monuments to his pain. Empires, armies, ideologies. But Optimus? He rebuilds what's left. He forgives, he spares. Not because he's blind to evil, but because he sees it too clearly to repeat it. The true power of leadership isn't fear, it's faith. Faith that mercy can break the cycle. Faith that peace is worth the pain it costs. Faith that you don't have to become what you hate to defeat it. Because when the war finally ends, only one kind of leader still stands, not the one who struck first, but the one who held back. We often mistake strength for domination, for decisiveness, for loud commands and close fists, but real strength, the kind that outlasts wars, is restraint. The ability to carry the power of a god and choose not to use it, because the choice doesn't just save lives, it saves your soul. But let's be clear, Optimus is no pacifist. When the time comes to fight, he fights harder than anyone else. He leads charges, he makes sacrifices, he dies standing. But the moments that define him are the ones where he waits, where he forgives, where he believes in the spark inside even his enemies. Because the Matrix doesn't glow for warriors, it glows for those who chose mercy in the face of war. Ask anyone who grew up with Optimus Prime. They'll tell you about the battles, the speeches, the axe, the death in 1986 that shattered a generation. But they'll also tell you this: he never struck first. He tried to understand, he gave warnings, he offered peace. And when it failed, only then did he rise. Because Optimus Prime isn't just a general, he's a shepherd, guiding his people not to victory, but to grace. And grace is never earned by violence, it's earned by restraint. There's a strange thing that happens when you carry the Matrix long enough. People stop seeing you. They see the symbol, the legend, the icon, and slowly, piece by piece, you start to disappear. Because being a Prime isn't just about leading, it's about embodying something greater than yourself. A myth, a prophecy, a phrase whispered across dying stars, till all are one. But what does it cost you to become that phrase? What happens when the leader becomes the monument? When the name Optimus Prime stops meaning you and starts meaning everything? Let's talk about the burden of being a symbol, and the pain of being seen, but never truly known. Optimus Prime is more than a leader. He's a myth, a banner carried into battle, a voice etched into memory, a symbol whispered across galaxies. Freedom, justice, mercy, until all are one. But what happens to the person beneath the symbol? What happens to the spark when all anyone sees is the Matrix? Because here's the secret no one wants to talk about. Symbols can't bleed. And Optimus Prime, he bleeds more than anyone. Nowhere is that cost clearer than in IDW's 2005 continuity. In this universe, Optimus isn't simply revered, he's deified, a living legend held to impossible standards, even by those he once called friends. But when the war ends, everything changes. Optimus steps down, he lays down the title of Prime and tries to return to being Orion Pax, a citizen, a servant, a soul. And how is he met? With hatred. Spike Witwicky, the human he saved countless times, testifies before the council. Optimus Prime brought this war on Earth. Millions died because he chose our planet as his battlefield. RC, his own soldier, refuses to speak to him. When he tries to apologize, she turns away. You don't get to apologize for a war, Optimus. You'll get to live with it. And on Cybertron, the new government erects monuments, not to honor him, but to remind future generations of the cost of his leadership. He doesn't defend himself. He could list every battle, every sacrifice, every moment he chose mercy over vengeance. He could remind them that he never wanted this war, that Megatron started it, that he only tried to end it, but he doesn't. Because a servant doesn't demand gratitude. He just walks away, alone. Because the cost of being a symbol isn't just being misunderstood. It's accepting that you'll be blamed for the very thing you died trying to prevent. In Netflix's War for Cybertron trilogy, we see a version of Optimus that's raw, exhausted, diminished. He's not the stoic pillar we remember. He stumbles, he doubts, and in one moment that shatters the illusion, he looks at Megatron and whispers, "I'm tired." It's not a battle cry. It's not a threat. It's a confession. His voice cracks when he says it, not from damage, from weight. Because this is the Optimus who's watched Bumblebee tortured, who's carried Elita 1's broken body, who's made impossible choices, sacrificing cities to save planets, abandoning soldiers to protect civilians. Every decision carved a piece of him away, and the worst part, he can't even grieve properly. Because when you're the symbol, your pain isn't yours. It's a liability, a crack in the armor, a weakness enemies exploit and allies fear. So he buries it, carries it, lets it calcify into exhaustion so deep even his spark dims. And the only person who understands, the only one who carries the same impossible weight, is Megatron, his enemy. Because at least Megatron knows what it costs to be more than yourself, even if they choose opposite paths. What does it even mean, the phrase we chant with such reverence, till all are one? It sounds beautiful, noble, unifying, but think about what it demands. Not victory, not justice, unity. In a galaxy splintered by war, history, and hate, Optimus Prime is expected to unite them all, not just win the war, but heal the world. And the truth is, he tries, again and again, across every continuity. In G1, he offers Megatron peace treaties. Megatron rejects every one, but Optimus keeps offering, because unity demands hope, even when hope is foolish. In Animated, he welcomes Decepticon defectors into Autobot ranks. His own soldiers protest. They're the enemy, but Optimus insists they don't have to be forever. In Prime, he spares Starscream, again and again, despite every portrayal. Ratchet begs him to end it. He'll never change Optimus, and Prime replies, and I'll keep giving him the chance. In Cyberverse, he forgives Megatron, actually forgives him. After millions dead, after Cybertron shattered, after everything, he extends his hand. Some call it wisdom, others call it madness. But here's what they miss. Optimus isn't naive. He knows most won't change. He knows forgiveness is often wasted, but he offers it anyway. Not because he's blind to evil, but because unity can't build on vengeance. And if the cost of till all are one is that he must forgive the unforgivable, then he'll pay it, even if it costs him everything. Even if it cost him himself. And what happens when that symbol is corrupted? Enter Shattered Glass, a universe where the mirror breaks. Here, Optimus Prime is no hero. He's a warlord, a conqueror, a fanatic who believes that only through domination can peace be achieved. And the most chilling part, he uses the same words, he claims the same values. In this universe, Optimus doesn't spare enemies, he re-educates them, forced loyalty, brainwashing disguised as mercy. He doesn't welcome defectors, he demands conversion. Join us, or be destroyed. He doesn't offer peace treaties, He issues ultimatums. Unity through submission. And the most horrifying part, he believes he's right. He looks at his empire and sees order, peace, unity. Because when you twist the symbol till all are one and becomes all will obey, the hero becomes the tyrant and no one stops him. Because he's still Optimus Prime, the name still carries weight, the symbol still inspires, even when it's corrupted beyond recognition. Shattered glass is a warning that even the most sacred icon can be twisted, that heroism without humility becomes fanaticism, that legacy without introspection becomes dogma, and the more we elevate our heroes beyond criticism, the easier it becomes to turn them into monsters. But here's what separates every other Optimus from the tyrant. He doesn't want to be worshipped. He wants to serve. In every universe, except Shattered Glass, Optimus is chosen, not self-appointed. He hesitates to take the Matrix. He questions his right to lead. He walks among his people, not above them. The Matrix is not a crown, it's a burden. And the moment someone seeks it for power, they are unworthy, and that's the difference. Shattered Glass Optimus believes he deserves to rule. Every other Optimus believes he must serve. And that single distinction, humility over pride, service over dominion, is what keeps the symbol from becoming the monster. And this is the tragic tension at the heart of Optimus Prime. To inspire, he must become more than himself. But the more he becomes the symbol, the less he's allowed to be a person. He can't falter, he can't grieve, he can't say, I don't know. Because the universe needs a Prime, even if that Prime forgets who he is. Even if the name Optimus becomes a mask worn by 1,000 weary sparks over eons. Even if the cost of being the icon is never being seen again. So what do we do with this? What do we do with a hero who never asked to be one? More importantly, what does it cost to be the symbol instead of a person? Because now you know, it costs everything. Maybe we stop asking our leaders to be flawless. Maybe we remember that strength includes doubt, that heroism includes weariness, that the greatest leaders are not those who shine without blemish, but those who carry the burden even when they break. So what does it cost to be a symbol instead of a person? It costs your name, your rest, your right to be wrong. It costs the ability to say, I don't know, or I can't, or I'm scared. It costs every moment of vulnerability, every private grief, every quiet doubt, because symbols don't bleed. They don't break, they don't ask for help, they just endure. In Optimus Prime, he's been enduring for millions of years, not because he wants to be a symbol, but because someone has to carry the light, even when the light burns you alive. There comes a point where every leader, every symbol, faces the same question. How far are you willing to go to stop the darkness? Because even light casts a shadow. Optimus Prime has carried mercy across galaxies. He's chosen restraint when war demanded rage. But what happens when mercy fails? When every act of compassion is met with betrayal, when peace is a luxury no one can afford. The Autobots needed a savior, the universe demanded a soldier, and somewhere in between, Optimus began to change, because sometimes, to destroy the monster, you risk becoming one yourself. Optimus Prime has always fought to protect life, but not every battlefield leaves space for mercy. There's a moment in every war when the enemy won't surrender, when the violence won't end, when peace seems impossible unless you force it. In that moment, even the noblest hero faces a terrible question. What if the only way to stop the monster is to become one? That's the temptation. The cost of war isn't just the lives lost, it's the soul that's tested. And Prime, he's failed that test. He's crossed the line. He's justified it. And in some universes, he never comes back. So here's the question that haunts all of us. How far would you go to stop a monster? Let's begin where it all started. In the original Generation 1 continuity, Optimus Prime was a paragon of virtue. He believed in freedom, redemption, and second chances. He didn't just fight to defeat the Decepticons, he fought to preserve what they could still become. But even here, the cracks began to show. He spares Megatron again and again, hoping that mercy might awaken something buried deep inside. He offers peace, diplomacy, even friendship. But that mercy came at a cost. In Transformers the movie, Megatron begs for compassion, and Prime hesitates. It's not weakness, it's hope. But Hot Rod intervenes. Megatron strikes, and Prime dies. He chooses mercy, and it killed him. The moment echoes across every future continuity. It's not just a dramatic death, it's a warning. Here's the truth every leader dreads. What if I was wrong? What if my mercy doomed us all? That doubt becomes the seed, and in every continuity that follows, Prime remembers. He remembers what his mercy cost, and in some timelines, he wonders if maybe, just maybe, he should have struck first. Fast forward to the War for Cybertron trilogy. The world is crumbling, Megatron controls the media, the Autobots are outnumbered, outgunned, and betrayed. And Optimus? He's still trying to lead, still clinging to hope, but that hope is eroding fast. His voice is ragged, his optics dim, his own team second guesses him. There are no easy victories, no rousing speeches, just survival. And the cost of that survival is his soul. When he says, I'm tired, it's not resignation, It's confession. He's tired of watching friends die, of watching mercy fail, of being the only one trying to remember what peace felt like, and slowly, incrementally, he begins to change. He kills without hesitation, he sacrifices civilians to save the planet, he calculates lives like variables, not because he's cruel, because he's tired, and that's the danger. Because this isn't a dramatic fall, it's a slow erosion, a compromise here, a decision there, until one day, mercy isn't a virtue, it's a luxury he can't afford, and he stops asking the question altogether. But then, there's the IDW universe, the most complex, the most political, the most human. Here, Optimus isn't a mythic figure, he's a politician, a general, carrying the consequences of millions of years of war. He's respected, but not loved. He's obeyed, but not understood. And in that isolation, something inside him hardens. He launches preemptive strikes. He takes Earth under Cybertronian control, not out of conquest, but out of a desperate need to protect both worlds. He orders Black Ops missions, collateral damage, assassinations. That's the moment. Not when he kills, but when he stops seeing killing as a failure, when it becomes strategy. Not in anger, in cold logic. Because what IDW Prime knows, idealism doesn't win wars, strategy does. So the compromises begin. He executes Decepticon prisoners, not in battle, but after surrender. He alienates loses Jazz and watches old allies question who he becomes. But he doesn't stop, because someone has to make the hard calls. Someone has to protect the bigger picture. But here's the tragedy. He starts to believe the person can also be good. And in that belief, Optimus Prime becomes something else. Not a tyrant, not a villain, but a bot who's forgotten what he's trying to protect in the first place. But then, there's the Bayverse, the darkest mirror, the worst case scenario. This is the Optimus Prime stripped of restraint, broken by betrayal, pushed past every moral line, till all that remains is fury. By Revenge of the Fallen, he's not just defending Earth, he's hunting. When he says, "Give me your face," it's not theatrical, it's psychological horror. This isn't battlefield survival, this is execution. He rips Megatron apart. He tears the fallen spark from his chest. He shoots Sentinel Prime in the back. Not because he must, because he wants to, because the war never ends, and Prime no longer believes in redemption. In Age of Extinction, it only gets worse. Hunted, betrayed, dismembered. When he returns, he tells Cade Yeager, "I'll kill you," and he means it. He's no longer a guardian, he's a wrathful god. By the last night, he's so far gone that it only takes a whisper from Quintessa to turn him into Nemesis Prime, a pawn of evil, a monster in a hero's armor. But here's the most terrifying part. Bayverse Optimus isn't evil. He's a logical conclusion of every compromise, every loss, every failure. He's not a villain. He's a hero who stopped believing in heroes. Remember G1 Optimus? The one who hesitated with Megatron and died for it? Bayverse Optimus learned that lesson. He never hesitates. He strikes first, kills without mercy, executes without trial, because he'd rather be the monster than the martyr, and that's more dangerous than any Decepticon. But even at his worst, even in timelines where he loses everything, Optimus Prime never stays gone. Not forever, because what makes him extraordinary isn't that he never fails, it's that he returns. In Transformers Prime, he executes Megatron, but later, he spares Starscream. In Cyberverse, he forgives Megatron and invites him to rebuild. In IDW, he steps down as Prime, not in weakness, but in recognition that he's no longer the leader they need. So what makes Optimus different? Why can he come back from the abyss when others can't? Because he never stopped asking the question. Even at his worst, even when he's ripping faces off, there's a part of him that whispers, "Is this who I am?" Megatron stopped asking. Shatterglass Optimus stopped asking. But Prime, he never stops. And that's what saves him. And in doing so, he reclaims the most important part of himself, his humanity. Because it's easy to fall into brutality, to answer evil with evil, to kill the monster by becoming it. But Optimus Prime teaches us something harder. That leadership isn't power, it's restraint. And mercy isn't weakness, it's courage. The courage to not take the shot, to not cross the line, to remember the spark inside even your enemy. So how far would you go to stop the monster? Would you kill? Would you betray? Would you become something unrecognizable, even if it meant the war would end? That's the tension we all live with. The leader who considers cutting corners. The parent who would do anything to protect their child. The soul who wonders, am I still the good guy? Optimus Prime had asked the question, and sometimes he answered it the wrong way. But he comes back. He chooses differently. He remembers. Because the line between hero and monster is razor thin. It's not marked by strength, but by principle. And the ones who walk it with courage, that become something even rarer than icons. They become true leaders. Because sometimes you become what you hate to protect what you love. But the real hero is the one who refuses, who stays righteous even when surrounded by darkness, even when it would be easier to fall. So what happens when the battle ends? When the smoke clears and the monster is dead? That's the moment most warriors dream of. But for Optimus Prime, It's the hardest part, because once you've seen how far you're willing to go, how do you come back from it? How do you look your enemy in the eye and still believe they're worth saving? How do you extend a hand to the very one who tried to destroy everything you love? Mercy isn't just hard, it's unbearable. Because in a world that rewards cruelty and glorifies vengeance, compassion doesn't make you look brave, it makes you look weak. But that's the final lesson Optimus teaches us. That true strength is choosing grace when the world demands wrath. In his greatest act of leadership, not with a weapon, but with an open hand, he reveals the final truth. Sometimes, the only way to stop the cycle is to forgive the one who broke it. Some leaders win through power, others win through fear, but Optimus Prime, he wins through mercy. Again and again, across timelines, battles, and shattered realities, he chooses restraint when he could have struck, compassion when he could have condemned, and in doing so, he proves one thing above all. In a universe addicted to war, mercy is rebellion. Let's begin where most wouldn't, the original Transformers movie in 1986. Optimus Prime has Megatron beaten, broken, disarmed. The warlord who murdered countless Autobots, who razed cities, shattered planets, nearly killed Prime himself, now lies at his feet. The crowd expects it, the world demands it. One final blast, one clean execution, but Optimus doesn't. Because for him, leadership has never been about dominance. It's about restraint. Killing you is not the right way. He knows Megatron will return. He knows that mercy could doom Cybertron, but he does it anyway. But what does that mercy cost him? Everything. Because Megatron doesn't accept grace, he exploits it. Hot Rod intervenes, Megatron strikes, and Optimus Prime dies, killed by the very mercy he extended. Because even in his final moments, he doesn't regret it. Because some principles are worth dying for. Because justice without mercy is just vengeance with armor. And real mercy, it's grace offered even when it's undeserved, even when it costs everything. Mercy, Prime teaches us, isn't weakness, it's strength without cruelty. And in that moment, he becomes more than a leader, he becomes a revolution. Fast forward to Transformers Animated, a younger Optimus, less certain, still growing into the mantle of Prime, but the lesson unchanged. At the climax of Endgame, Megatron is once again defeated. Optimus has the power to end it, to kill him, to end the threat forever, but he doesn't. He doesn't do it because he remembers what it cost him the last time he chose violence. He remembers what he almost became. This Optimus arrests Megatron, chains him, brings him in alive, despite the protests of his own team, despite the suspicion of Earth's government, despite knowing full well that mercy might come back to haunt him. But Optimus Prime holds the line, because mercy doesn't just spare the enemy, it protects you from becoming one. In the aligned continuity, from War for Cybertron to Transformers Prime, we see another side of this mercy, one rooted not just in survival, but in redemption. In Transformers Prime, after countless betrayals, Optimus still says to Megatron, you can still be saved. Not with condescension, not with manipulation, but with genuine belief. Even after everything, Prime still sees the possibility of change, and for a brief moment, Megatron takes it. During the Unicron arc, he stands beside his former enemy, fights for a different future, but it doesn't last. After Unicron falls, Megatron returns to war, the Alliance shatters. And Optimus, he doesn't say I told you so, he simply mourns. Because he saw what Megatron could have been, and that glimpse, however brief, was worth the risk. Optimus doesn't gloat, doesn't punish, doesn't say I told you so. He simply offers dignity, and that is grace. Grace that says, I remember who you are, not just what you've become. Because mercy isn't just letting go of wrath, it's extending the belief that someone is more than their worst day. That even Megatron could still choose peace. And yet, that mercy comes at a cost. Optimus Prime is mocked, labeled weak, soft, foolish. His own troops question him. He'll never change, Prime. How many chances are you going to give him? Do you want us to lose? Because in a world that worships power, cruelty looks like strength. And compassion looks like surrender. But here's the truth. Mercy is the most dangerous thing a hero can do because it defies the world, defies instinct, defies everything evolution taught us about survival. Mercy is vulnerability in a battlefield of violence. It's the decision not to strike, when every part of you wants to. Optimus makes that decision again and again, not because it's easy, but because it's right. But not all mercy is pure, and no version of Optimus proves that better than shattered glass. In this twisted mirror, mercy becomes a weapon. Optimus still preaches redemption, still offers second chances, still speaks of forgiveness, but it's a lie, a leash, a smile hiding a tyrant's hand. Enemies aren't spared because they've earned it. They're spared because they're useful. Because obedience is easier than annihilation. Shattered Glass Prime doesn't forgive. He indoctrinates. Captured Decepticons aren't given trials. They're given re-education. Dissenters aren't debated. They're reformed. And those who refuse, they disappear. Not killed. That would be too honest. Just erased. Their sparks reprogrammed. Their memories rewritten, until they become exactly what Optimus needs them to be. That's not forgiveness. That's annihilation wearing a smile. Join us or be forgotten. His mercy is conditional. His grace is performative. It's mercy without truth, forgiveness without repentance, grace without justice. And that's not mercy, that's exploitation. True mercy says, I forgive you, but you must change. False mercy says, I forgive you, so you must obey. And when this happens, when forgiveness is just a form of domination, compassion dies. Shattered Glass Prime becomes a warning. When virtue becomes camouflage, tyranny wears a halo. So what separates the true from the false? What makes mercy divine? Truth? Accountability? Courage? Optimus Prime forgives, but never forgets the war. He offers peace, but still holds Megatron responsible. He extends grace, but never erases consequence. And that's what makes it real. Because real mercy requires strength. Not the strength to crush, but the strength to be mocked, to be betrayed, to offer kindness, and be hated for it. In a world that rewards cruelty, compassion is a revolution. Optimus Prime, he's been leading that revolution for 40 years. Not with thunder, not with vengeance, but with an open hand. So what if showing mercy made you look weak? What if they laughed? What if they betrayed you again? What if offering grace meant losing everything? Would you still do it? Because we've all been there. The moment where kindness felt like surrender, where forgiveness feels like failure, when showing compassion feels like getting walked on. But Optimus Prime teaches us something harder. Mercy, he says without saying, is not the absence of strength, it's the presence of conviction. Because anyone can destroy, but to spare, to believe, to hope, that's not naivete, that's power, that's leadership, that's the kind of revolution worth following. Mercy isn't weakness, it's the refusal to let evil have the final word. It's the fire that doesn't burn, it's the hand that doesn't strike, it's the hope that endures, even when the world doesn't deserve it. Because if mercy is rebellion, then Optimus Prime, he's the spark that started it all. Because the mercy Optimus extends to Megatron, that's the mercy we all need. The grace we don't deserve. The second chance we've squandered. The forgiveness we can't earn. And if Prime can offer that to his greatest enemy, maybe, just maybe, we can offer it to each other. That's the revolution, and it starts with one choice: to be merciful. Mercy is a revolution, but revolutions cost something. Because Optimus Prime doesn't just show mercy, he pays for it with his life. Not once, not twice. Across timelines, across worlds, he falls. Sometimes in battle, sometimes in silence, sometimes by choice, but never in vain. Because here's the paradox: the more often he dies, the more powerful he becomes. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a symbol. A legacy passed down to Bumblebee, to Hot Rod, even to Megatron himself. Because Prime's greatest lesson was never how to fight, it was how to fall and rise again. In every death, he teaches us something deeper. That leadership isn't about surviving the war, it's about making sure someone else can walk away after you're gone. He doesn't die because he's weak. He dies because someone has to, because in the end, Optimus Prime doesn't just fall, he teaches us how to rise. Now, let's talk about death, not as an ending, but as a legacy. He's died more than we can count, and yet, he never really leaves, because Optimus Prime's death is never just an ending, it's a passing of the torch, a final act of leadership so powerful, it reshapes the future. It began in 1986. Transformers the movie wasn't just entertainment, it was a funeral. A generation of children watched their hero, their Prime, bleed out on an operating table. He didn't go out in a blaze of glory, he faded, slowly, quietly, until that day, till all are one. A promise whispered on his deathbed. What kind of hero dies in the first act? One whose death means something, because in that moment, Optimus stopped being a character and became a myth. A legend of sacrifice so profound, it would echo through every continuity that followed. But look closer, that wasn't just a death scene, it was a substitution. Megatron raised his weapon toward Hot Rod, and Prime, already wounded, already dying, stepped into the line of fire. He chose the shot meant for someone else. He didn't die because he was weak. He died because someone had to. Because leadership isn't about living forever, it's about making sure someone else can. And as the light of the Matrix passed into Hot Rod's hands, so too did responsibility. A moment of transference so complete, it redefined heroism itself. This wasn't martyrdom, it was sacrifice. Atonement. Because Optimus didn't die to Megatron, he died for everyone else. He taught a generation that real leaders don't fear death, they fear dying before passing the torch. And in doing so, he became the standard by which all others are measured. Years later, Transformers Prime revisited that lesson through a quieter lens. Here, Optimus' death wasn't about battle, it was about letting go. He willingly gave up the Matrix, knowing it would cost him everything. His memories, his name, his very self. And when he finally fell in the fight against Unicron, it wasn't rage that drove him, it was peace. Because he understood something deeper than victory. That leadership isn't possession, it's stewardship. He didn't cling to the Matrix like a crown. He released it like a prayer, and when he died, he wasn't defeated, he was fulfilled. Because a true Prime doesn't measure worth by how long he leads, but by what survives after he's gone. In Transformers Cyberverse, the surrender transforms into something greater, because here, death doesn't end Prime, it evolves him. After sacrificing himself to save the Allspark, he returns, reborn. The same soldier, but as something wiser, gentler. He doesn't come to fight back, he comes back to heal. His resurrection is a spectacle of power, it's a message of hope, because even in death, Optimus Prime returns to stay silent. He rises, not to conquer, but to redeem. As resurrection theology, disguised as science fiction, he dies, descends into silence, and emerges transformed. The same spark, but with a new purpose. To show that even after destruction, there can still be creation. That point isn't that he escapes death, it's that death can't stop what he stands for. But what's most powerful about Prime's death isn't what it does to him, it's what it does to everyone else. Because when Optimus dies, others rise. Hot Rod takes the Matrix and becomes Rodimus Prime, and at first, he fails. He doubts himself. He stares into the light and whispers, "I'm not Optimus." But that's the whole point. He's not supposed to be, because Optimus never wanted disciples, he wanted leaders. Rodimus doesn't replace him, he continues him. He learns that leadership isn't imitation, it's interpretation. To carry the flame, that doesn't mean you copy the one who lit it, it means you keep it burning. Bumblebee learns that too. Across multiple universes, Bumblebee inherits the call. He leads not with bravado, but with humility. Not by being the loudest, but by being the most loyal. He doesn't need to be Prime, he just needs to remember why Prime mattered. And then, there's Megatron. In IDW and Cyberverse, the warlord who once sought destruction finds redemption, not through force, but through grief. Optimus's death changes him, because when your enemy dies forgiving you, you either break apart or change forever. In those moments, Megatron, of all beings, starts to understand what Prime meant. He carries the memory like a scar, and for once, that scar becomes something holy. Because Optimus's greatest victory isn't that he defeated Megatron, it's that he taught him. Optimus Prime doesn't die to end stories, he dies to begin them. Because every time he falls, the universe realigns. The Autobots grieve, but they grow. The war pauses, but the message deepens. He becomes a moral constant, an axis the universe spins around, a warrior, a teacher, a father figure, a living idea. And that idea, freedom, unity, compassion, can't be killed. Because Optimus isn't just a general, he's a gospel. His body falls, but his words, his choices, his faith in others endures. And sometimes, the final act of a great leader isn't to win, it's to leave, so that others can finally become what he always believed they could be. That's not tragedy, that's transcendence. There's something almost sacred about his deaths. They carry the weight of Arthur sailing to Avalon, of Aslan laying down his life for the undeserving, of a savior crucified not because he failed, but because he chose to. He dies, not to end the story, but to complete it, because someone has to pay the price. Someone has to show that leadership is more than command, that strength is more than survival. And if no one else will bear the weight, Optimus Prime will, because freedom has a cost, and the universe keeps balance only through sacrifice. That's why his final words still haunt us, till all are one. Not a slogan, a prophecy, a reminder that unity requires loss, that someone must fall so that others may rise. So what is Optimus Prime really? A soldier? A leader? A machine? He's all of them, and none of them. Because Prime has transcended his own spark. He's an idea. And ideas don't die. They evolve. They replicate. They multiply. He's died in G1. He's died in Prime. He's died in IDW. He's died in the Bayverse. And every time, someone picks up the torch. That's not coincidence, that's design. Because leadership, at its truest, isn't about being present, it's about being imprinted. Optimus doesn't have to be there, because he's already in them. In Bumblebee's courage, and Rodimus' doubt, even in Megatron's guilt. That's how you know a leader succeeded. When they're gone, and nothing stops. Because he doesn't just lead the Autobots, he becomes them. And when he dies, they don't collapse, they continue. So what does it mean to die and still lead? It means living a life that outlasts you. It means building something that doesn't need you to stand. We all wonder, don't we? Will my life matter when I'm gone? Will anyone remember what I built? Will the world still carry a trace of me when I fade? Optimus Prime gives that answer. Legacy isn't about living forever. It's about living rightly. It's about choosing purpose over permanence. About raising leaders who don't need you, about building a cause that survives without your spark. Because Optimus doesn't die because he's weak. He dies because someone has to, and he'd rather it be him so that others can rise. That's not failure, that's fulfillment. Because the greatest leaders don't fear death. They fear dying without passing the torch, and Optimus Prime has been handing out torches for 40 years. Because in the end, Optimus Prime doesn't just fall, he teaches us how to rise. He doesn't die because he's weak, he dies because someone has to. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the story of Optimus Prime. From the moment Orion Pax took up the Matrix, this was never a story about strength. It was never about conquest, or power, or glory. It was about burden, about what it costs to lead when no one else will. Optimus Prime doesn't stand apart because he's invincible. He stands apart because he chooses to break. When others chase power, he chooses restraint. When the world demands revenge, he chooses mercy. And the war needs a sacrifice, he chooses himself. He doesn't lead to be followed. He leads to protect, even unto death. Because true leadership isn't about being exalted, it's about being willing to fall, so someone else doesn't have to. We've seen him die across generations, on operating tables, in collapsing ruins, in final stands that shake the heavens. And each time, he comes back. Not because he escapes death, but because his example survives it. Hot Rod rises because of him. Bumblebee leads because of him. Even Megatron, across timelines, repents because of him. That's legacy, not admiration, imitation. Optimus doesn't build monuments. He builds leaders. He gives away the very thing others hoard, authority, and in doing so, he multiplies it. Because when a spark dies to light another, the flame doesn't dim, it spreads. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. Optimus Prime isn't great because he's perfect. He's great because he endures. He loses everything and still leads. He faces betrayal and still believes. He falls over and over and still gets up. Not because he wants to, but because someone has to. Because leadership, at its truest, isn't about commanding armies. It's about carrying the weight, even when it crushes you. Even when no one sees, even when no one follows, even when it ends with your name carved into memory, your voice fading into static, your spark returning to the well. He goes anyway, not to conquer us, but to complete us. Because in every timeline, every continuity, every rise, and every fall, Optimus Prime stands for one sacred truth, that freedom is the right of all sentient beings, and someone must be willing to fall so that right survives. So we're left with a question that lingers long after the screen fades to black, long after the battle ends, and the Matrix dims, and the voice is gone. Who is Optimus Prime? It's not the part of us that refuses to stop believing. Because the monster doesn't come to conquer us. The tyrant didn't win. The war didn't end with despair. Optimus fell, so we wouldn't have to. That's not just the mark of a hero, that's the heart of a Prime. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear. Which version of Optimus Prime shaped you most? Leave a comment below, let's keep this conversation going. If you want more deep dives like this, hit subscribe because we're just getting started. So stay strong, stay grounded, and as always, stay handsome. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of leadership is to fall so others don't have to. Before the myth, before the mask hardened into legend, he was something simpler, a soldier, built for order, conditioned to obey. He didn't ask if the rules were fair, only whether they were being followed, because it was easier that way, wasn't it? If you don't ask questions, you don't have to live with the answers. If you follow orders, the blame never touches you. And if you just keep moving forward, maybe you never have to look back. But war doesn't work like that, and neither does identity. So when the burden of leadership came crashing down, Ultra Magnus wasn't prepared for chaos. He was built for structure, for lines that didn't blur, for a universe that made sense, as long as everyone stayed in line. These are the versions of Ultra Magnus who stood tall, followed the code, and carried the weight, even when it broke him. Before he was a legend, before he was a title passed down from soldier to soldier, Ultra Magnus was a function. Not a visionary, not a warrior philosopher, just a soldier designed to bring order to chaos. And in some ways, he succeeded, because Ultra Magnus never questioned the chain of command. He never asked if the rules were just, only if they were being followed. In G1, that rigidity came to define him. He steps into leadership not as a calling, but as a burden. Optimus Prime is dead, the Autobots are scattered, and Ultra Magnus, he's handed the Matrix and told to lead. He doesn't celebrate, he doesn't rise, he hesitates. And then he says the words that have haunted him ever since. I can't deal with that now. It wasn't cowardice, it wasn't weakness, it was resignation to a role that he wasn't prepared to take on. Because Magnus was built to follow. And suddenly, there was no one left to follow. This wasn't a moment of personal failure. It was a moment of systemic collapse, a symbol cracking under the weight of a system that never gave him permission to feel, only to enforce. And yet, even here, there are glimmers of humanity. When Daniel and Springer are threatened, Magnus fights with desperation, not duty. Not because protocol demanded it, but because someone needed saving. That crack matters. It shows that beneath all the protocol, the armor still hides a hero. Across continuities, this pattern repeats. Transformers Ultra Magnus is no longer a substitute leader. He's the leader of the Autobots, Supreme Commander. But even here, the cracks are obvious. He is distant, stern, obsessively committed to chain of command. He trusts protocols more than people. He holds authority with an iron grip, yet never with warmth. When Sentinel Prime schemes behind his back, when Optimus questions the decisions made by High Command, Ultra Magnus doesn't listen, he enforces. Because in his eyes, the system only works if every cog spins in sync, even if the system is slowly rotting from within. But then, Sentinel betrays him, and as Magnus lies broken, it's not rules he thinks about. It's betrayal. It's failure. It's the cost of trusting a system more than the people inside it. And in that silence, we see the beginning of doubt. The Transformers Prime aligned continuity sharpens that tragedy. Here, Ultra Magnus is no longer just the leader. He's the steadfast enforcer of the chain of command, even when it puts him at odds with his wreckers. He arrives like a storm. Flawless formation, strict protocols, barking commands. But it's clear from the moment he lands, he's not respected. He's tolerated. The wreckers mock him behind his back. Wheeljack openly rebels against him. Even Team Prime, battle-hardened and desperate, struggles to connect. Because Ultra Magnus didn't come to inspire, he came to correct. And when your only tools are rules, everything starts to look like disobedience. But here too, the cracks show. After losing in battle, Ultra Magnus doesn't return to High Command. He stays. He learns. He lets go, just a little, of the rulebook. It's not redemption, but it's evolution. And maybe, just maybe, the mask slips. Even in the Marvel Comics run, where character depth was often sidelined in favor of action, Ultra Magnus remains cold, mechanical, emotionally distant. He's defined not by personal beliefs, but by rank, not by conviction, but by function. In one issue after another, he fights not because he believes in peace or justice, but because someone gave the order. And yet, in later Marvel UK stories, he falters, he questions, he loses, and in loss, something more human surfaces. Pain, confusion, regret. Doesn't last, but it was there, and it matters. What ties all these portrayals together? It's not the armor, not the voice, but the fundamental belief that order itself is sacred, that following rules is the highest virtue, that loyalty is more important than understanding. But what happens when the rules you enforce are flawed? What happens when the chain of command leads nowhere? Ultra Magnus never wanted to answer those questions, because questions lead to doubt. Doubt gets people killed. So he became a machine, a symbol, an icon of structure in a collapsing world. And yet, there's a sadness buried inside every version of Ultra Magnus. He's not blind. He knows things are broken. He just doesn't believe he's allowed to fix them. Because fixing them would mean disobeying. It would mean stepping out of line. It would mean becoming something. Someone he was never built to be. And in the end, that's the tragedy of Ultra Magnus. Ultra Magnus didn't fail because he was weak. He failed because he was too strong, too rigid, too unbending, too loyal to a system that demanded obedience even as it fell apart. He kept the line straight, even when the war twisted everything around it, even when the people he loved disappeared behind protocol, even when the mask grew too heavy to wear. This wasn't heroism, it wasn't villainy. It was a sense of duty, weaponized against his enemies and himself. And it broke him. He was built to follow, to obey, enforce, endure. But what happens when obedience becomes your identity? When you wear the armor so long, you forget who you were without it. Across every version we've seen, Ultra Magnus is a constant, a fortress of discipline, a living weapon, a perfect soldier. But if you strip away the command codes, the shoulder rockets, the rules, well, what's left? Is there still a person beneath the protocol? Or just a mask, worn too long? Because at some point, the cracks stopped being flaws, they became the story, and in one universe, they split him wide open. Because in IDW's Transformers universe, Ultra Magnus wasn't a single bot at all. He was a mantle, a title passed down, a role that consumed every soul who dared to wear the name. And the last to bear it, it was a bot named Nemesis, a true believer, a loyal soldier, and a bot who gave up everything he was to become the legend everyone needed, even if it broke him. Because how do you carry the weight of the world if you never learn to carry yourself? At first, the cracks were subtle, a moment of hesitation, a flicker of doubt, a command questioned under his breath. But over time, those cracks widened, not because Ultra Magnus was failing, but because the role was never meant to be held by one person. Because in IDW's Transformers continuity, Ultra Magnus wasn't a single character at all. He was a title, a myth. The first Ultra Magnus had long since died, but Cybertron needed order, it needed discipline, it needed the icon, and so High Command built one. On Tyrus' orders, the Magnus armor was born, not as a tribute to the bot who bore the name, but as a symbol of unyielding justice. A weaponized facade, a legend to enforce Tyrus' perfect system. Armor was forged, a mantle created, and a soldier was chosen to wear it. That soldier's name was Minimus Ambus. He wasn't fearless, he wasn't perfect. He was small, nervous, loyal to a fault. He believed that wearing the armor meant becoming something better, that hiding his flaws beneath the legend made him stronger, that as long as he followed the code would protect him. And for a time, it worked. He led, he punished, he enforced. He made himself into the myth, but myths can't grieve, they can't doubt, they can't break, and Minimus Ambus was breaking. In the More Than Meets the Eye series, we see the toll. Behind closed doors, he struggles to breathe, his voice cracks, his optics dim. He confesses, "I'm tired of pretending," because that's what Ultra Magnus had become, a performance, and performances demand perfection. He couldn't cry, he couldn't scream, he couldn't even smile, because the myth didn't allow it. But slowly, the spark behind the symbol began to flicker, because not everyone is fooled. Verity Carlo, a human caught in the crossfire, sees through the mask. She speaks to the bot, not the mantle, and for the first time in a long time, Ultra Magnus listens. And it's not just Verity. On the Lost Light, even Megatron notices the tension beneath the armor. The two, former enforcers on opposite sides of justice, clash in ideology, but mirror each other in guilt. Both seek atonement, both carry burdens, and for Minimus, the recognition cuts deeper than a blade. In Lost Light, the cracks finally let light in. Minimus starts to laugh, to smile, to question. He even resigns the role, briefly, not as a failure, but as an act of self-reclamation. For once, he dares to ask, what if I'm allowed to be me? Not because the burden was gone, but because someone finally saw the burden he carried. And in that moment, we understand. He didn't wear the armor because he was strong. He wore it because he was scared. Because being Minimus Ambus, small, imperfect, fallible, was too painful. But even myths can't outrun the truth forever. The theme haunts other versions too. In Transformers Animated, his near-death barely registers. His identity, his voice, his soul, forgotten, replaced by a title, a rank, the bot lost in the shadow of the symbol. And in Dreamwave's unfinished continuity, the cracks widen in silence. Ultra Magnus, still loyal, still disciplined, starts to slip, not into treachery, but into uncertainty. When Optimus Prime vanishes in a space bridge accident, Magnus is expected to lead, but he hesitates. He flees, because deep down, he's not ready. He doubts himself, he questions the war, and when he returns, it's not as a savior, it's as a soldier trying to hold the fractured people together. He rebuilds city by city, he mourns Grimlock in his arms, he confronts Shockwave's betrayal with rage, not regulation. But when he finally ends Shockwave's reign, it isn't with ceremony, it's with raw, exhausted fury. But even after all that, he doesn't rest, he doesn't celebrate, he simply stands back up, reassembled, reassigned, reburden. That's what he does. So what happens when the mask becomes the man? When the lines between role and identity blur? When the myth becomes so demanding that you forget the voice beneath it? Ultra Magnus was never allowed to be vulnerable. Not in the war, not in peace, not even in memory. But the tragedy isn't that he wore the mask, it's that he wore it so long, he forgot how to take it off. Before we lay down the badge and return to battle, make sure to follow or subscribe to Disassembled Heroes and Villains on your favorite podcast app. Every week we unmask the icons of pop culture, the warriors, the tyrants, the legends, and the liars who shaped entire worlds. And next week, we're doubling the descent. First, we launch Disassembled Deep Cuts, a new series made for the lore keepers and the long haulers, where we go deeper, darker, and further than ever before. Our first subject, a tyrant forged in blood and betrayal, a conqueror who called himself Emperor and meant it. Death source of the Decepticons. But that's not all, because also next week, we meet a different kind of tyrant. Brilliant, broken, unmatched. Victor Von Doom, a man who believes the world must kneel because only he can save it. 2 episodes, 2 monsters, 1 unforgettable week. And if you want to shape the stories we tell next, vote every Wednesday in the Handsome Comics YouTube community poll. Now, back to Ultra Magnus and the spark behind the symbol. But even as the mask cracked, even as the spark of Minimus Ambus began to shine through the armor, there was still one truth he couldn't escape. He wasn't just wearing the mantle, he was inheriting the weight of legends. Because when the war demanded a prime, and there was no prime to answer, the galaxy turned to Magnus. Not out of trust, not out of hope, but out of necessity. Across continuities, from the dying embers of the G1 movie, to the fractured timelines of IDW, to the quiet obedience of the aligned universe, Ultra Magnus didn't rise to lead. He was placed there, pushed into a role meant for someone else. A symbol passed down like a relic, expected to inspire simply because it endured. But what happens when the world gives you the Matrix, and you don't want it? When the badge becomes a burden, when leadership isn't destiny, but duty, not earned, but inherited. Because no matter the universe, no matter the mission, Ultra Magnus wasn't haunted by death. He was haunted by the idea that he would never measure up to Prime. And now, the mantle weighs heavier than ever. Let's step into the shadow he could never outrun. He didn't fear death. He feared being seen as less than a Prime. That's the tragedy at the heart of Ultra Magnus. Not that he failed, but that he was never allowed to see failure as anything but shame. Across the multiverse, he was never meant to lead. When the Matrix found its way into his hands, it didn't feel like destiny, it felt like punishment. In 1986's The Transformers the movie, the war has taken everything. Optimus lies dying, and in his final act, he passes on the Matrix of leadership, dropping it as he takes his final breath, only to be caught by Hot Rod and passed to Ultra Magnus as the assumed leader. But when the Matrix beams when held by the young Hot Rod, it becomes clear that Ultra Magnus is only holding it, a steward, not a successor. And when the time comes for him to lead, "I can't deal with that now," he says, panicked, out of breath, overwhelmed. To some it's weakness, but maybe it was brutal honesty. Because when Optimus inspired, Ultra Magnus enforced. Where Optimus led with wisdom, Magnus clung to protocol. But where Optimus rose with every fall, Magnus collapsed beneath the pressure. He wasn't built for vision. He wasn't built for compliance, but the world kept mistaking one for the other. But when the Decepticons tore him apart, he didn't cry out in pain, he apologized. In Marvel UK's continuity, that wound cuts deeper. After Optimus' death, Magnus takes command on Earth, facing threats like Galvatron, Cyclonus, and Scourge, without the benefit of prophecy or purpose. And though he survives those battles, he finds no peace. Victory doesn't make him feel worthy, it only reminds him what he's not. He isn't a Prime, he doesn't have the Matrix. He's not a symbol, just a soldier, a phenomenal one, expected to bear the same burdens without the same reverence. And when Prime finally returns, it isn't triumph Magnus feels, it's relief. Because now, he can stand in the shadow again. In the aligned continuity, this pattern continues. In Transformers Prime to the novels, Ultra Magnus is the wrecker turned commander, by all accounts, a decorated war hero, respected, feared, precise. But when placed beside Optimus, he shrinks. Despite his rank, despite his title, he never steps ahead of Prime, not out of inadequacy, but out of deference. It's not humility, it's reverence. Because deep down, Magnus doesn't want the role. He wants the certainty that Prime brings. Optimus knows who he is. Magnus, he only knows what he's supposed to be. Even in IDW's universe, where Ultra Magnus is a mantle passed down from one spark to another, Minimus Ambus finds himself collapsing under the same weight. And more than meets the eye, Magnus walks among leaders, Rodimus, Megatron, even Optimus himself. No matter how many lives he saves, he doubts every step. His voice doesn't rally crowds. His presence doesn't ignite hope, because he wasn't chosen to lead, he was chosen to endure. There's a moment when he resigns the role of Ultra Magnus, not in grace, but in self-awareness. He steps back, finally confronting the truth. He's been trying to fill the boots of someone who never fit him, and yet, when the mission calls, when lives are on the line, he picks up the badge again, and yet again, plays his role. Not because he believes he's worthy, but because someone has to carry the weight. Someone has to stand when others fall, to follow when there's no one left to lead. And for all his doubts, all his fears, all those unspoken sorrow, Ultra Magnus does exactly that. Because the truth is, he never wanted the Matrix. But if you gave it to him, he'd carry it until his spark gave out. Not as a Prime, not as a hero, but as a soldier who never stopped answering the call, even when the Matrix chose someone else. But what happens when the weight you carry becomes the only thing people see? When sacrifice becomes expectation? When the burden becomes the brand? Because for Ultra Magnus, he didn't stop at war, or death, or the Matrix. The tragedy didn't end with him, it continued, repeated, replicated. In IDW's universe, when Minimus Ambus stepped down, he wasn't remembered as Minimus. He wasn't celebrated for his courage, his order, or his loyalty. He was simply replaced. Because Ultra Magnus wasn't a person anymore, he was a system, a symbol with armor. And so another stepped in, and then another, till the myth no longer needed the man at all. Across Cybertron, the badge remained. The law remained, the legend remained, but the spark, that vanished. Friends didn't mourn him, brothers didn't speak his name. In the minds of the next generation, Ultra Magnus was never a friend, never a comrade, never a soul worth saving. He was a protocol, he was regulation. He was the fallback plan when the future failed. The armor stayed shining, but no one asked who lived inside. Because maybe no one wanted to know. Maybe the idea of Ultra Magnus was easier to believe in than the broken soldier beneath it. What was left? What happens when the name survives the bot? When the role becomes too big for anyone to carry? Does the person behind the myth even matter anymore? Or was he always just a silhouette in someone else's spotlight, waiting for permission to rest? While the name Ultra Magnus began as the character, it evolved through the multiverse. It became a title, title, a symbol, a myth that couldn't die. There's a moment in Transformers Lost Light, quiet, almost forgettable, where Ultra Magnus removes his armor. Not in a blaze of glory, not during a final battle, no last stand, no farewell speech. Just a bot stepping away from the myth. And what hits hardest? It's not triumph, it's hollow. Because the truth is, the armor was never meant to come off. In IDW, we learn the shocking truth. Ultra Magnus is not a singular warrior, but a role, a lineage of enforcers, each one selected, trained, and bound by duty to wear the armor, to become the symbol. It wasn't about the individual, it was about the image. Minimus Ambus was just one of many, recruited to embody perfection, to eliminate unpredictability, to suppress self for the sake of function, because in a galaxy ravaged by war, Ultra Magnus had to exist, even if no one could survive being him. What began as justice became control, what began as heroism became bureaucracy, what began as him became anyone. And with each generation, the cracks grew wider. The myth remained. No healing, no reckoning, just back to work. Because that's what Ultra Magnus does. He returns to duty every time, even when it breaks him, even when no one's watching, even when he doesn't know who he is anymore. But Transformers Shattered Glass, as expected, completely flips the character, a grotesque mirror of the myth. Here, Ultra Magnus is no longer the reluctant enforcer, but a zealot, obsessed with hierarchy, devoted to purity, his armor fused with torture devices, his every word twisted into doctrine, his face, a bare skull grinning with malice. In this universe, he doesn't wear the weight of expectation, he celebrates it. Because when the mask becomes your face, you forget there was ever a person underneath. That's the darkest truth of Ultra Magnus. He never asked to be seen, he asked for orders, he asked for structure, he asked for someone else to lead, so he could follow, without fear. But no one ever stayed. Not Optimus, not Sentinel, not Zeta, and so he kept marching, until the world stopped seeing the bot, and only saw the badge. There's a kind of death in that, a quiet one, the kind no one mourns, the kind that doesn't make headlines. That's how Ultra Magnus ends in some timelines, off-screen, unspoken, replaced, or worse, still alive, still serving, still wearing the armor long after anyone remembers why. Because for all his strength, he was never allowed to be more. He was order, he was burden, he was myth. And when a myth becomes more valuable than the bot underneath, the bot disappears. So ask yourself, did he ever want to be remembered? Did he ever want someone to look past the armor, to see the weary spark behind the stoic glare? Or was he just waiting for someone, anyone, to carry the weight so we could finally rest? But what happens when the armor becomes all that's left? When the face behind the badge fades so completely that no one remembers it was ever there? Across timelines, Ultra Magnus is mourned without ceremony, replaced without resistance, forgotten, not because he failed, but because he succeeded too well at becoming the symbol. And maybe that's the darkest truth of all. He didn't die in battle, he didn't die redeemed, he didn't even die remembered, he just disappeared. Because no one ever asked if he was okay, no one ever wondered who he was underneath. They just needed him to be Ultra Magnus, so he kept showing up, kept doing the job, kept carrying the weight, because someone had to. But now the war is over. There's nothing left to hold together, no command to follow, no prime to serve, no badge to wear. Asking the question we all try to outrun, if I take the armor off, what's left of me? The tragedy of Ultra Magnus isn't that he died, it's that no one ever truly knew he lived. Throughout every war, every continuity, he was seen not as a character, but a constant, a fortress of law, a wall between chaos and order. He was the one who never wavered, who always followed the rules, who did the job no matter the cost. But here's the truth no one wanted to face. He wasn't unbreakable. He was just really good at hiding the cracks. Because when you are always the one holding the line, no one thinks to ask how much it costs you, and so the burden grows, the silence deepens, the armor thickens, until one day, the war ends, and you take the armor off, only to realize you have no idea who you are without it. In Transformers Lost Light, Minimus Ambus steps away from the Magnus mantle, not in triumph, but in exhaustion. He tries to remember who he was before the armor, before the protocol, before the myth, and even then, he can't quite find the answer, because being Ultra Magnus wasn't just a role, it became his identity, his prison. And yet, in that final moment, stripped of his title, surrounded by friends, he smiles. Not because he's proud, but because, for the first time, he's free. That's the lesson buried beneath the rubble of duty and war. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let go, not of responsibility, not of purpose, but of the idea that you can carry it all alone, because there's no shame in stepping back. There's no failure in asking, who am I, if I'm not what others expect me to be? So maybe that's the story of Ultra Magnus. Not the Enforcer, not the Second Prime, not the armor, or the badge, or the rules. Just the soldier who did what had to be done, who gave everything he had because the war never gave him another option. And when it was finally over, it wasn't honored with a statue, He wasn't remembered with songs, he just stopped. And maybe that's why his story matters. Because how many of us wear a version of that armor? How many of us pretend we're fine because others need us to be? How many of us carry roles that were never meant to be permanent until they bury who we really are? Ultra Magnus isn't just a character, he's a question. What happens when you lose yourself in the role and no one notices you're gone? Because in the end, he didn't die a hero. He lived still trying to remember who he was. Thank you for walking with us through the silence, through the steel, through the weight that never lifted, through the soldier who followed every order until he couldn't remember who he was without them. Because Ultra Magnus wasn't forged to be free. He was built to endure. A title, not merely a character, a symbol, not a soul, a myth, endlessly recycled so the machine could keep running. He stood between law and chaos, between protocol and passion. He carried a badge that became heavier with every passing war, and still, he never set it down. He became the line no one else wanted to hold. Across the multiverse, his face may change, but the burden never does. In one life, he is the warden of justice. In another, a zealot of hierarchy. In some, he dies unseen. In others, he lives too long. Because that's the lesson, isn't it? That identity can be swallowed by expectation. That duty, unchecked, becomes a cage. That when we never let the armor come off, we forget there was ever a person underneath. Ultra Magnus teaches us that strength isn't stoicism, it's not silence, and it's not sacrificing your soul for someone else's structure. Real strength is knowing when to step back, when to ask who you are, not just what you are needed to be. So sit with that. Sit with the fear of being seen. Sit with the quiet grief of roles that no longer fit. Sit with the strength it takes to take the armor off, and the grace it takes to not pick it back up. Because someone out there needs to know that letting go is not weakness. It's the beginning of healing, so stay strong, stay human, and as always, stay handsome. And remember, you are not your armor. You are not your role. You're the spark that endures long after the war ends.
Before the Matrix, before the burden, before the impossible expectations, there was just Hot Rod. Not a failure, not a symbol, not a cautionary tale. Just pure potential, loud, confident, and unfinished. Most leadership stories begin at the moment of transformation. They skip the part where bravado was mistaken for readiness, where the would-be leader believes they're untouchable. To understand why Rodimus struggled, we have to start with who Hot Rod was before the death of Optimus Prime. Before the Matrix ever chose him, Hot Rod already believed he was meant for something bigger. Not because he was arrogant in a cruel way, not even because he wanted power, but because everything about him kept pushing forward. Hot Rod was fast. He was brave, he was optimistic to a fault, and more importantly, he wanted to help. From the moment we meet him, Hot Rod runs toward danger, not away from it. He doesn't wait for orders, he doesn't hesitate. When the Decepticons attack Autobot City, he jumps in. That instinct matters, because Hot Rod isn't reckless out of selfishness, he's reckless out of belief. A belief that things will work out, belief that doing something is always better than doing nothing, belief that if you care enough, the rest will sort itself out. That's not a flaw in isolation. That's the kind of thinking that creates heroes, but it's also the kind of thinking that mistakes confidence for readiness. Hot Rod believes in himself because, up to that point, there's no reason not to. He hasn't been tested in a way that forces humility yet. He's talented, he's capable, and he's surrounded by legends. But this creates a dangerous gap, because when you grow up watching giants like Optimus Prime carry the weight, it's easy to assume you'll figure it out when your turn comes. Hot Rod doesn't see leadership as something you train for. He sees it as something you step into, and that belief feels familiar. When things come easily early in life, effort can feel optional. Success feels repeatable. Failure feels theoretical. You start to assume that being smart means being prepared. That potential is the same thing as qualification, and any warning signs, they can be brushed away. Hot Rod ignores friction the same way many capable people do. Not because he's careless, but because friction hasn't punished him yet. He's impulsive, but it works. He's bold, and it pays off. He breaks protocol, and the outcome usually rewards him. So why would he slow down? Why would he question instincts that have always led him forward? But it's a trap. Confidence doesn't announce when it turns into overreach. It just keeps encouraging you, right up until the cost becomes too great to bear. Hot Rod's goodness is real. His desire to protect others is genuine, but it's unrestrained. He hasn't learned when not to act yet. He hasn't learned that sometimes leadership means waiting, or listening, or letting someone else take the hit. He wants to prove himself, not for praise, but for purpose. And to a young mind, proving yourself feels noble, until responsibility demands more than you can ever imagine. These moments are defining,
but they're easy to overlook. But leadership doesn't start at transformation, it starts before, when confidence goes untested, and when someone believes their heart will carry them through anything. Hot Rod isn't a problem waiting to happen. He has potential, but it's shrouded by confidence and inexperience. That's who Hot Rod was before the Matrix. He's not a fool, he's not a failure, he's just a kid. Just someone who hasn't been slowed down by reality yet. And when the reality of war finally arrived, through Unicron's attack and Optimus Prime's death, he didn't have a moment to catch up. Unearned confidence can survive a lot. It can survive warnings. It can survive friction. It can even survive small failures. What it can't survive is catastrophe. Because when the world collapses all at once, there's no space to learn, no time to adjust, no margin for becoming. And Hot Rod never gets that margin. Because the moment that tests him doesn't arrive slowly. It arrives all at once. In burning cities, in lost friends, and in the death of the one figure who everyone believed could never fall. The moment that defines Hot Rod's story isn't a test he asked for. When Megatron confronts Optimus Prime, Hot Rod doesn't intervene out of pride. He doesn't step forward to prove himself. He doesn't believe he's replacing anyone. He reaches for the only thing he knows how to do, protect someone who matters. The same instinct that drove him to protect Daniel when the Decepticons attacked. That distinction matters, because quick instinct isn't strategic, but it isn't arrogant either. It's human. Hot Rod sees his leader in danger and does what he's always done. He runs towards the threat, and everything changes. Megatron takes him hostage, Optimus Prime is mortally wounded, and the war doesn't just escalate, it loses its center. The Autobots don't just lose a commander, they lose the figure who made them believe everything would be okay. And Hot Rod loses something too, not just a mentor, not just a hero. He loses the version of himself who believed caring was enough. What makes this moment so devastating isn't just the loss, it's the speed. There's no pause, no margin, no space to catch up. Optimus dies on a cold lab table, and the future of the Autobots is thrown into question. The matrix of leadership recognizes potential, not readiness. And when chaos strips away every safer option, potential becomes inheritance. Leadership doesn't arrive after grief, it arrives during it. Through the collapse of everything familiar, through Unicron's arrival, through Galvatron's rise, Hot Rod survives. He escapes the Quintessons, he endures what should have destroyed him, and in those moments, the potential the Matrix recognized becomes visible. It's not wisdom, it's not mastery, it's resilience. So when the Matrix finally activates in Hot Rod's hands, it isn't a reward, it isn't recognition, it's inheritance. Rodimus Prime isn't born out of triumph, but out of shock. The Matrix doesn't ask if he's ready, it doesn't pause for understanding, it doesn't care that he's still carrying the weight of Optimus Prime's death. It chooses potential, and potential, given too much too quickly, can be dangerous. This is where most interpretations go wrong. They treat this as a coronation, as destiny fulfilled, as the moment Hot Rod should rise and become something else. But that's not what this is. This isn't ascension, it's responsibility landing on someone who hasn't had time to grieve, to doubt, or to question who they are without the people who shape them. Rodimus Prime doesn't step into leadership. Leadership falls on him, and it does so in the middle of the worst possible crisis. There's no training period, no buffer, no grace, just expectation. And expectation carries a silent message. You're in charge now, act like it. That pressure changes how trauma is processed. Grief is replaced with performance, and that's where the guilt takes root. Not because Hot Rod caused Optimus Prime's death, but because he had a part in it. Because when something breaks at the exact moment you step forward, the mind starts connecting dots that logic can't undo. If I hadn't acted, if I had waited, if I were better, the confidence that wants to find him begins to crack. Rodimus doesn't just inherit the Matrix, he inherits a story that comes with it. A story that says, Optimus was perfect, Optimus was prepared, Optimus never hesitated. And standing next to that legend, with the weight of the galaxy watching, Rodimus has no room to be unfinished. The tragedy isn't that he struggles, the tragedy is that he struggles almost immediately, publicly, without permission to learn. Leadership in this moment isn't a calling, it's a sentence. I felt that same shift, when responsibility stops being something you step into and becomes something you can't step away from. I felt that shift the moment we brought home our daughter. One day, I was still learning, still improvising, still allowed to be unfinished, and then suddenly, someone depended on me completely, not hypothetically, not someday. There was no clocking out, no margin for collapse. The terrifying part wasn't the work. It was realizing that everything has changed. That whatever I was becoming, I had to become it fast. Because someone else was already counting on the result. It's the exact emotion felt by Rodimus as he takes command. And once that sentence is passed, everything Rodimus does will be measured against a standard he never had time to grow into. The Matrix gives him power, but it also takes away something just as important: time. Time to process, time to become, time to fail quietly. From this point on, Rodimus Prime is never allowed to simply be inexperienced. Every doubt becomes weakness, every mistake becomes proof, every hesitation becomes evidence that he never should have been chosen at all. And that's the real cost of him taking on the Matrix. Not that Hot Rod failed, but that he was never allowed to be unfinished. The tragedy of Rodimus Prime isn't what happens in the moment he's chosen, it's what happens after. Because leadership doesn't end when the crisis passes. That's when it begins. And once the fires of Unicron's attack fade, once the galaxy keeps moving forward, Rodimus is left with something far heavier than the Matrix. The question of whether he was ever meant to carry it at all. Rodimus Prime doesn't spend Season 3 failing, he spends it thinking. And for many fans, that distinction got lost. Where Optimus Prime projected certainty, Rodimus projects awareness. He questions decisions, he weighs consequences, he asks whether the Autobots would be safer without him, not because he's weak, but because he understands what leadership demands. Season 3 shows a commander who wins battles, but loses sleep. A leader who can act decisively, yet still asks whether the action was right. That self-interrogation defines Rodimus Prime, and it's also what made him unpopular. Not because he's inherently lesser, but because Optimus represented something rare: certainty, clarity, a belief that the right path would always reveal itself. Rodimus inherits leadership after the illusion is already broken, where Unicron exists, where Galvatron isn't just evil, but persistent. The context matters. Rodimus doesn't doubt himself because he's incapable. He doubts himself because he understands the stakes. Nowhere is that clearer than when he tries to give the Matrix back. It isn't cowardice. It's a responsibility that he's finally taking seriously. Rodimus understands something crucial. Power doesn't automatically grant legitimacy, and leadership doesn't become noble just because it's inherited. He isn't trying to escape duty, he's asking whether holding it is harming the people he's meant to protect. That question alone disqualifies him from recklessness. Because the Autobots don't need reflection, they need reassurance. They need a symbol. And Rodimus knows he isn't one. He sees the statue of Optimus, he hears the stories, he feels the comparison even when no one says it out loud. So every hesitation reads as weakness, every moment of thought becomes doubt, every attempt at care becomes evidence that he isn't Optimus. But that was never the job. Rodimus wasn't chosen to replace Optimus Prime. He was chosen to lead the Autobots in a universe where certainty no longer exists. That's why his leadership feels heavier, because he doesn't have the luxury of legend. He has his reality. Under the Matrix is still the same bot who fished with Daniel, who laughed, who cared. Rodimus leads knowing some decisions will cost lives, knowing not all battles can be won cleanly, knowing hope doesn't always arrive in time, and that awareness shows. He hesitates, not because he fears action, but because he understands the cost of acting wrong. For audiences raised on Optimus Prime, that reads like failure. But for anyone who has ever been responsible for others, and I mean truly responsible, it reads like responsibility arriving too soon. Rodimus Prime isn't haunted because he doubts himself. He's haunted because he understands leadership, and was handed it before he had time to grow into it. That isn't weakness. That's the cost of becoming self-aware before the world allows you to grow up. By the time Rodimus Prime takes command, the damage is already done. Not just to Cybertron, not just to the Autobots, but to the idea that leaders can arise above anything. Because once responsibility arrives through loss, there is no version of leadership untouched by consequence. And that raises a harder question, not about Rodimus himself, but about the conditions we expect leaders to survive. And to understand why Rodimus was crushed by the role, we need to look at a leader who wasn't, one who inherited responsibility but was given something Rodimus never had: time. At first glance, Optimus Primal and Rodimus Prime seem cut from the same cloth. Both are younger successors, both step into leadership during crisis, both carry the weight of legacy, but the difference between them isn't character, it's timing. Optimus Primal becomes a leader in a contained disaster, a small maximal crew, a limited Predacon threat, a war that matters, but doesn't immediately decide the fate of an entire species. Primal makes mistakes early. He hesitates, he misjudges Megatron, he puts his team at risk more than once. and crucially, he survives those mistakes. He's allowed to learn while leading, to listen, to adapt, to grow into the role without the universe watching his every move. There is no statue looming over him, no impossible comparison, no expectation that he replaced a myth. Primal is allowed to become himself, while Rodimus is not. Rodimus inherits leadership in the shadow of a god. Optimus Prime doesn't just die, he becomes a standard frozen in time, perfect, certain, unquestioned. Rodimus steps into command with Cybertron already lost, Unicron threatening reality itself, Galvatron operating from the shadows, and an entire species desperate for reassurance. There is no margin for error, no room to fail small, no space to learn quietly. Every decision Rodimus makes is measured against a leader who never had to lead this version of the war. That's the unfairness at the heart of this story. Primal's leadership is shaped by grace. Rodimus's leadership is shaped by expectation. Grace isn't about lowering standards. Grace is about allowing formation. When Primal hesitates, it's caution. When Rodimus hesitates, it's weakness. When Primal reflects, it's growth. When Rodimus reflects, it's proof he is an Optimus. But that comparison was never reasonable, because Rodimus wasn't chosen to replace Optimus Prime. He was chosen to lead what remained, after certainty was already gone. Primal leads in a story where hope is still forming. Rodimus leads in a story where hope has already been broken. That distinction matters, because leadership under collapse doesn't look heroic. It looks heavy, it looks uncertain, it looks like knowing the cost of being wrong is irreversible. Rodimus doesn't lack confidence, he lacks insulation. Every mistake is final, every loss compounds, every hesitation is magnified. And unlike Primal, Rodimus doesn't get to grow into legend, he has to live beneath one. That's why this comparison reframes everything. Primal shows us what leadership can become when time and trust are available. Rodimus shows us what leadership costs when they aren't. Grace didn't make Primal strong, it made him possible, and Rodimus never received that gift. Before we go any further, if you ever stepped into a role you thought you were ready for, only to realize the weight arrived faster than the confidence, if you've ever been trusted with responsibility before you fully understood who you were becoming, then you're not watching this by accident. This is Disassembled Heroes and Villains, not a show about who hits hardest, not a ranking of victories or power levels, but a place to slow down and examine the characters we grew up admiring, and ask what it actually cost them to lead. Because leadership doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like doubt. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like carrying a burden before you had time to grow strong enough to set it down. Over the course of this year, we're following one question across stories, worlds, and myths. How do we become better men? So if this question matters to you, if you're trying to build a life that doesn't consume you in the process, subscribe. You're not late, you're not behind, and you're right on time. It's easy to keep Rodimus Prime at a distance, to treat his story as something that belongs to animation cells, nostalgia, or a different era of heroes. But the truth is, we didn't grow out of the story, we stepped into it. Because Rodimus Prime isn't just a lesson about leadership and war, he's a warning about what happens when responsibility arrives before identity has time to settle. And that story didn't end in the 1980s, it followed us home. Most men don't fear responsibility, they chase it, they work toward it, they prepare for it, they imagine who they'll become once they finally have it. The fear comes later, after the title, after the expectation, after the quiet realization that everyone assumes you know what you're doing, and you're not sure you do. That's where Hot Rod becomes relatable, whether we like it or not. Because today's Rodimus Prime doesn't wear a matrix, he wears expectations. He's the new father who thought confidence would arrive the moment the baby did. The startup founder who believed passion would carry him through the gaps. The new manager promoted for performance, not wisdom. The creative handed leadership before they ever figured out who they were without the work. On the outside, they look ready. They say the right things, they project certainty, they carry themselves like they belong. But underneath, something quieter is happening. They're performing readiness. Because fake confidence doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from a fear of exposure. From the fear that if you slow down or misstep, someone will realize you're still figuring it out. We live in a culture that celebrates responsibility but punishes the process of growing into it. You wanted this becomes the unspoken rule. You wanted the promotion, you wanted the family, you wanted the business, you wanted the life. So deal with it. No grace, no runway, no space to admit uncertainty without it being mistaken for weakness. That's the same pressure Rodimus lived under. The moment he took command, he wasn't allowed to be learning, he was expected to be Optimus. And most men today aren't afraid of failing outright. They're afraid of being seen mid-formation. I feel this right now. Even talking about these ideas, building this channel, putting my life out there, there's a part of me that worries I'm still becoming the person I'm speaking as. That you'll see the uncertainty before the confidence catches up. It's the fear of being unfinished in public. Afraid of letting people see the doubt, the hesitation, the question that comes with real responsibility. Because once you're the provider, the leader, the one people depend on, uncertainty feels dangerous. So you do what Rodimus did. You keep going. You shoulder it. You tell yourself you'll figure it out on the way. And sometimes you do, but sometimes you burn yourself out trying to become that version of yourself everyone expects, instead of the version you actually are. That's where this story connects back to Spawn, because burnout doesn't happen when you stop caring. It happens when you care so much that you refuse to admit something is costing you more than it's giving. And it connects back to Optimus Primal too, because Primal learned in motion, he failed quietly, he was allowed to adjust. Rodimus wasn't, and neither are most men today. We're handed responsibility at full speed until maturity will catch up. But maturity doesn't come from pressure, it comes through permission. Permission to fail without being erased, permission to question without being replaced, permission to grow without pretending you're already finished. Rodimus Prime isn't relevant because he struggled. He's relevant because he struggled while being watched. And that's the part most men recognize. Not the battlefield, not the Matrix, but the feeling of carrying something heavy while everyone assumes you're strong enough to never let it show. That isn't weakness. That's responsibility arriving before you ever had time to adjust. And that's why this story still matters. Because most of us aren't afraid of the burden. We're afraid of what happens if people see us learning how to carry it. There's a moment in Rodimus Prime's story that never gets animated. It's not a battle, it's not a failure, it's not even a decision. It's the moment after the Matrix chooses him, when the noise fades and he realizes that they're going back to being Hot Rod. No more learning out loud, no more reckless optimism, no more room to be unfinished. From that point on, everything he does matters more than who he is. And that's the part most people never forgave him for, because Rodimus Prime wasn't asked to grow into leadership. He was asked to replace a legend while the universe was already collapsing. So let me ask you something. Where did responsibility arrive in your life before your identity had time to catch up? Where were you promoted, took on roles, grew your family before you actually understood who you were becoming? And what part of you did you have to abandon just to look like you belonged there? For me, that responsibility arrived the day I became a father. I knew the moment was coming, and I thought I'd be ready, but I wasn't, and that no longer mattered. It's the same quiet tragedy faced by Rodimus Prime. Not that he struggled in public. Every doubt became weakness, every pause became evidence, every question became proof that he was an Optimus. But he was never meant to be. Rodimus didn't inherit clarity, he inherited consequence. He led in a world without certainty, let the illusion that the right choice would reveal itself. And that kind of leadership doesn't look heroic. It looks heavy. It looks like hesitation, like reflection, like someone who understands that power doesn't erase the cost of coming into power. Rodimus Prime isn't a warning about failure. He's a warning about what happens when we expect someone to become a leader before they're allowed to become a person. Hot Rod didn't fail because he wasn't enough. He failed because he was thrust into a role he couldn't possibly fill without time to grow into it. And if that feels uncomfortably familiar, you're recognizing yourself in his story. Because adulthood has the way of doing the same thing to us. We step into responsibility before we shed who we thought we were. We carry expectations before we understand our limits. We lead while still forming the self that leadership requires. Rodimus Prime never got grace, but maybe we can learn to give it, to him, and to ourselves. This is Disassembled Heroes and Villains, not a show about perfect leaders, but about the cost of becoming one. If this episode connected with you, I'd really like to hear it. What part of Rodimus' story felt closest to your own? And if you want more stories like this, where we don't just revisit the characters we grew up with, but use them to understand who we're becoming, make sure you're following the show. So stay thoughtful, stay honest, and as always, stay handsome. How do you measure the worth of someone who never asked to be remembered? To understand Alpha Trion, you don't follow his footprints. You read the records he left behind, because he wasn't a conqueror. He was a chronicler. While others fought to shape the future, he fought to preserve the past. He knew that one day, the battles would end, and all that would remain are the truths we chose to carry forward. So before we talk of destiny, we need to talk about memory, because sometimes the one who writes history shapes it more than those who live it. Before the war, before the rise of Megatron, there were those who built Cybertron's future through power, and those who shaped it through memory. Alpha Trion was the latter. Across both Generation 1 and the aligned continuity, Alpha Trion is many things. Scribe, scholar, sage, but more than anything else, he is the guardian of Cybertron's past. In a civilization of living machines driven by progress, conquest, and transformation, he remains something rarer, a witness. In the original G1 cartoon, Alpha Trion is introduced not as a warrior or a prime, but as an old bearded mech dwelling on Cybertron, long thought lost to time. He lives in hiding, preserving knowledge, guiding quietly from the shadows. When Elita 1 is wounded, it's Alpha Trion who gives part of his own energy to restore her spark, a quiet act of compassion from a mech who never sought the battlefield, but always understood sacrifice. And while hints in G1 suggest a deeper connection to Optimus Prime, it's the aligned continuity where his role truly expands. There, Alpha Trion is not just a wise old bot, he's one of the 13 original primes, a being created at the dawn of Cybertron itself, a prime not built for battle, but for memory. In the Covenant of Primus, he serves as the scribe of the 13, chronicling the rise of Unicron, the birth of Primus, and the first age of Cybertron. He watches civilizations rise and fall. He sees empires consumed by their own hubris, and through it all, he writes. But these aren't just stories. They're warnings, because Alpha Trion doesn't collect history for nostalgia, he preserves it so it's never repeated. When the 13 disband, he retreats from the world stage. He watches silently as Cybertron forgets its origins, as the High Council manipulates truth to consolidate power, and when Megatron emerges, he sees the echoes of older tyrannies, systems that once brought ruin, now reborn in different armor. It's the age of rising chaos that Alpha Trion does something extraordinary. He doesn't rise to stop Megatron himself. He doesn't declare himself a prime again. Instead, he prepares the next one. He begins to shape a replacement, not through domination or ideology, but through patience, mentorship, and remembrance. And when the moment finally comes, when Sentinel falls and Cybertron teeters on the edge of annihilation, Alpha Trion places the matrix of leadership into the hands of Orion Pax. Not because Orion was the strongest, not because he was the loudest, but because he was the most curious, because knowledge, true knowledge, is born from humility. It's a moment that defines Alpha Trion's entire legacy. He has the power to rule, but chose instead to pass it on. While Megatron built a movement out of anger, and Optimus built hope through inspiration, Alpha Trion built something even rarer, a bridge between past and future. Not a forger of memory, but a keeper of it. Not a conqueror, but a custodian. He doesn't fight for Cybertron's history to be glorified. He fights for it to be remembered accurately, because he knows the most dangerous thing you can lose isn't your past, it's your understanding of it. He sees how easily facts become myths, how truth becomes weaponized, and how civilizations fall not because they forget who they are, but because they forget what they've already done. In a world obsessed with progress, Alpha Trion reminds us to pause, to look back, to ask the questions no one else is willing to ask. What did it cost to get here? Who paid that price? And what will happen if we forget them? Because the Alpha Trion, wisdom is power, but only if you choose to carry it forward. But what good is wisdom if it never leaves the archive? For Alpha Trion, history wasn't just something to be studied, it was something to be used, to guide the present and shape the future. And the greatest test of that wisdom came not in battle, but in choice. Because one day, a humble data clerk would enter his orbit, and Alpha Trion saw something no one else did. Not what Orion Pax was, but what he could become. And with that, a prime is born. But the greatest leaders are chosen by someone who saw who they could become long before the world did. In the Generation 1 continuity, that someone was Alpha Trion. We first meet him in The Search for Alpha Trion, an episode that unveils his past ties to both Elita 1 and Optimus Prime, but it's in War Dawn where we witness the most defining act, the transformation of Orion Pax into a Prime. He's not a soldier or a general. He's a solitary figure, dwelling in the ruins of Cybertron long past its golden age, watching as the war tears its people apart. When a young dock worker named Orion Pax is mortally wounded by Megatron's betrayal, it is Alpha Trion who finds him. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't ask for thanks. He rebuilds him, not just with stronger armor, but with purpose. Orion doesn't just become a prime, he becomes Optimus Prime, a symbol of justice, compassion, and resistance in the face of tyranny. Alpha Trion never steps forward to take credit. In fact, he fades into the background again, letting the myth of Optimus grow while he keeps his watch from the shadows. Later episodes imply he continues to help behind the scenes, safeguarding the matrix of leadership and intervening only when absolutely necessary. And though the show never confirms a literal bond between them, the connection feels deeper than fate. Not quite father and son, but something close. Because Alpha Trion didn't just save a life, he chose to bestow a legacy. In the aligned continuity, this act takes on even a greater weight. According to the Covenant of Primus, the in-universe sacred text that defines the origin myths of the aligned continuity. Alpha Trion was one of the original 13 primes, forged by Primus himself. While the other primes took to the stars or vanished in legend, Alpha Trion remained. He took no throne, waged no campaigns. Instead, he took up the role of lore master, recording Cybertron's history, studying the patterns of rise and fall, and waiting for the day when the Matrix would need a new bearer. That day came when a young archivist named Orion Pax, a humble data clerk, not a warrior, began to question the High Council and expose Megatron's rise. Alpha Trion saw something in Orion, not just of defiance or bravery, but heart. It was Alpha Trion who guided it to Orion. He stood at the threshold, handed over the artifact, and said goodbye. He could have planned it himself. He could have rewritten the story, taken power, ruled Cybertron as its rightful prime, but he didn't. He chose not to lead, so someone better could. In Transformers Prime, the decision echoes quietly but profoundly. Alpha Trion only briefly appears on screen, but his appearance is deeply felt. He communicates with Optimus through the Matrix, offering guidance during moments of crisis. When Optimus loses his memory and becomes Orion Pax once more, it is Alpha Trion's knowledge, recorded and relayed through Ratchet, that helps bring him back. He was always there, not in command, but in conviction. And maybe that's the core of who Alpha Trion is. He doesn't just build leaders for glory. He builds them because someone must. While Megatron forged ideology and Optimus inspired loyalty, Alpha Trion built the foundations for both. He did not forge memory, he preserved it. He understood that history isn't just what's recorded, it's what's passed down. It's the wisdom that shapes characters before the battle begins. He watched the rise of the primes, the fall of empires, and through it all, he chose to invest in people, not power. He saw the future in Optimus not because it was destined, but because he believed it could be better. That belief, that's where true leadership begins. Before we close the Covenant and return Alpha Trion to myth, make sure to follow or subscribe to Disassembled Heroes and Villains on your favorite podcast app. Every week we explore the icons and monsters who shape pop culture, to understand not just their power, but their purpose. And this Friday, we unleash a different kind of leader, not one born of wisdom, but of fury. A king of strength alone, a warrior who would rather bite than bow. Next up, we tackle Grimlock of the Transformers. The next Tuesday, on Disassembled Deep Cuts, the storm breaks, and from the wreckage rises a Decepticon born of divine madness. A herald of the Matrix, corrupted. Next up, we descend into the mind of Thunderwing, and if you want to help decide who we dissect next, cast your vote every Wednesday in the Handsome Comics YouTube community poll. Now, back to the Prime who chose not to lead. But Alpha Trion's story doesn't end with the forging of Optimus, because what truly makes him rare, what sets him apart from every warlord, counselor, and Prime who ever carried the Matrix, is what he chose not to become. He was one of the 13, a Prime by right, but he never wore the crown, never commanded an army, never claimed the glory he could have easily seized. Instead, he stepped back, not out of weakness, but because he believed legacy wasn't forged through domination. It was handed forward to those who still had time to shape the world, because sometimes the greatest leaders are the ones who walk behind. He was one of the 13, a Prime by right, but he saw something more important than legacy. He saw the future. Across the multiverse of Transformers lore, Alpha Trion is a character defined not by what he takes, but by what he gives up. Power, recognition, command. Those were his by birthright, or in some continuities, by deed. But in every incarnation, he chooses a different path. Not to rule, but to guide. In the aligned continuity, as detailed in the Covenant of Primus, Alpha Trion stands among the original 13 primes, those forged by Primus himself at the dawn of Cybertronian history. He wields the Quill, a sacred artifact of knowledge and record-keeping, while others of his kind, like Megatronus or Prima, embody war, justice, or wrath. Alpha Trion embodies memory, lore, and legacy. He could have claimed the Matrix, shaped the future with his own hands, but instead, he recorded it. And when the time comes, he passes that responsibility to another, to Orion Pax, to Optimus Prime. He watches a new leader rise not by fate, but by merit, and he lets go. And in Transformers Animated, Alpha Trion holds no weapons, he commands no armies, yet his voice carries more weight than any general's blade. As the head of the Guilds Domesticus, a civilian branch of the High Council, he represents the true soul of Tron, its people, not its soldiers, and in that role, he clashes again and again with Sentinel Prime. Sentinel seeks glory, Alpha Trion seeks balance. When Megatron hijacks Omega Supreme, it's Alpha Trion who urges caution. When Sentinel Prime violates protocol, Alpha Trion holds him accountable. And when the day is saved, not by armies, but by a medic and a child, it's Alpha Trion who names them heroes. He could seize control, strip Sentinel of power, but he doesn't. He simply reminds the Council, In Cybertron, that leadership isn't about might, it's about responsibility. Across all these realities, the pattern is the same. Alpha Trion could have led, he could have ruled, but he didn't. He chose to shape the world from the wings, not the throne, because legacy isn't built by holding on, it's built by knowing when to let go, and in letting go of power, he made room for something greater to rise. He didn't lead with the Matrix, he led with the quill. He didn't carve his name into Cybertron's walls, he wrote down everyone else's. Because across every timeline, Alpha Trion isn't just a mentor, he's a memory. While others rose and fell, grabbing power, rewriting laws, or simply fading into obscurity, he remained. A quiet constant, watching, recording, remembering. But what happens when you're the only one who still remembers? In Cybertron's darkest moments, when history becomes myth, then myth becomes forgotten, it's Alpha Trion who holds the truth, the path, the pain, the ancient wisdom no one else dares carry, because Alpha Trion doesn't fight to be remembered, he fights to remember, and with that burden of memory comes the cost of knowing too much, especially when no one else will listen. Across time and space, Alpha Trion carries not just Cybertron's legacy, but its scars. When others forget the old ways, the old wounds, the ancient truths buried in rust and silence, he remembers, because someone must. In Cyberverse, he's more than just a relic of the past, he's the last guardian of it. At the dawn of the war, when the Ark is besieged and hope teeters on extinction, it is Alpha Trion who gives his life to save the future. Megatron kills him, coldly, methodically, snuffing out not just a spark, but a history, a lineage, a memory. And yet, even in death, Alpha Trion is not gone. Within the Allspark itself, his presence endures. He returns to Optimus in visions, fragments, whispers through time, not as a ghost, but as a memory made manifest. He speaks of what once was, and what could be again. In that realm beyond life, it becomes the living proof that knowledge cannot be destroyed. It only waits for those worthy to find it. But memory, as Alpha Trion knows all too well, is a double-edged sword. In the aligned continuity, as one of the original 13, he bears the quill, Primus's instrument of record. He doesn't fight with it, he writes with it, and in those writings, the Covenant of Primus, he does not record only triumphs, he records horrors, betrayals, the slow unraveling of a utopia poisoned by pride and power. He remembers Solus Prime's death, he remembers Megatronus' fall, he remembers the age when brother turned against brother, and when the Matrix was passed from hand to hand like a dying torch. These are memories no one wants to hear, and yet, he preserves them, not to shame the past, but to warn the future, because Alpha Trion understands what so many do not. Forgetting the past does not bring about peace, it is only a prelude to war. In the initial IDW continuity, this burden isolates him. He walks through ages like a shadow, older than nations, older than war, and still, he remembers what others have chosen to forget. He sees Nova Prime rise with glorious promises, and quietly corrupts the Senate from within. He witnesses Orion Pax wrestle with morality in a world that has lost all sense of it. And through it all, Alpha Trion tries to speak, to warn, to guide. But who listens to the historian when the Conqueror has the microphone? As Cybertron devours itself in tyranny and blood, Alpha Trion steps away, not out of cowardice, but out of futility. He becomes a relic in real time, a monument no one visits, a memory outliving its usefulness. And yet, he endures. Because memory, for Alpha Trion, is not optional. It is duty, even when the world moves on. Because memory, to Alpha Trion, is a weapon, a responsibility, and a curse. What do you do when you're the only one who remembers a mistake? What do you do when you know the war isn't new, but a repetition of the old one forgotten? You write it down. You whisper it to the next leader. You become the past, so that someone else can shape the future. But that burden is not without cost. In every continuity, Alpha Trion is marked by quiet sorrow, not the dramatic grief of battle, but the weariness of bearing too many names, too many secrets, too many final goodbyes. He has outlived friends, outlived empires, and still he carries their stories. Because someone must. Because history that is not remembered is history doomed to be repeated. And so, whether in the crypts of Iacon, the pages of prophecy, the shadows of the Allspark, or the ruins of Crystal City, Alpha Trion endures. Not to lead, not to conquer, but to remember. And in that memory, he becomes something rarer than a prime. He becomes a witness to their greatness. He doesn't command battalions. He doesn't shout orders across the battlefield. He doesn't even raise his voice. Because Alpha Trion doesn't lead with power. He leads with presence. And that presence only surfaces when the future is truly in danger. When the cycles of war threatens to erase everything that came before it. That's when he steps forward, not to fight, but to guide. Not to conquer, but to remind. It's easy to mistake his absence for weakness. to assume that silence means surrender, but Alpha Trion understands something most leaders never learn. Sometimes, the greatest strength is knowing when not to act, because not every crisis demands a sword. Sometimes, it demands a witness, a guardian of the past who trusts the next generation to rise. And when this role is done, he doesn't demand statues, he doesn't cling to legacy, he simply fades away as the quiet watch comes to an end. In many continuities, Alpha Trion's death is not a spectacle of glory or defiance. It's not a battle cry, it's a passing breath, a final gesture of trust in those he mentored. In the aligned continuity, we never see his final moments. His presence echoes throughout Transformers Prime, and by the time of Robots in Disguise, his absence is simply accepted. Optimus refers to him in the past tense. His spirit appears in visions, guiding from the well of all sparks. But there's no monument, no grave, only the knowledge that his final lesson was to disappear and let others lead. In Cyberverse, his role is even more symbolic. When the multiversal crisis, known as the Quintesson invasion, tears through reality, it's Alpha Trion who speaks from the shadows of memory, passing his wisdom to a younger Optimus. His voice echoes in flashbacks, and ancient records, in final transmissions, not a warrior, but a whisper, a reminder that the past matters, even when no one listens. Even in shattered glass, a twisted mirror where morality is inverted, Alpha Trion is still the quiet force in the shadows. Manipulative, yes, but not loud. He is a historian, rewriting truths to shape tyrants, and in the end, even his silence there has weight, because the Alpha Trion archetype, no matter the universe, is not a general or a god. He is a librarian, a watcher, a mentor. And his endings reflect that, rarely seen, rarely mourned, but always felt. His true legacy is not etched in the monuments, it's written in the sparks of those who outlived him, in Optimus Prime, in Elita 1, and the Autobots who carry his lessons forward, whether they know it or not, because some warriors change the world by burning it down, others change it by building a better one and stepping aside. Alpha Trion chose the latter. He knew that leadership isn't about how loudly you speak, it's about when you choose to stay silent and who you trust to speak after you're gone. He didn't need to raise his voice, because the echoes of his wisdom are still being heard long after he left the stage. He never raised a weapon, he never wore a crown, and yet Alpha Trion shaped the fate of Cybertron more than most who did, not through conquest, but through conviction. Through every war, every prime, every fall of Cybertronian society, he carried one mission, to protect what mattered most, even when no one else remembered why it mattered. And now, with the story winding down, one question remains. What do we take from the life of a being who chose wisdom over war, who gave up his seat at the table so others could sit? Because Alpha Trion's story isn't just about Cybertron, it's about us, and what kind of legacy we leave behind. He could have been king. He could have seized power, taken up arms, declared himself a prime in name as well as spirit. Few would have questioned him, but Alpha Trion didn't choose the spotlight. He chose the shadows. Not out of cowardice, but out of clarity. And in that decision lies a lesson that echoes far beyond Cybertron. In today's world, especially as men, as fathers, as leaders, it's easy to confuse volume with virtue. We're told to be loud, to be first, to be dominant, but Alpha Trion shows us another path, a higher path. He teaches us that wisdom isn't about knowing everything, it's about knowing when to speak, and when to stay silent, when to act, and when to step aside. That restraint isn't weakness, it's strength, held in trust, discernment, and self-mastery. And perhaps, most of all, he reminds us that legacy isn't built through control, it's built through release. He let go of power so others could rise. He mentored instead of manipulated. He recorded truth instead of rewriting it. There's a deeply spiritual echo in that. In many Christian teachings, Christ himself, the divine, chose humility, service, and sacrificial love over the throne of earthly power. The greatest among us, we're told, are the servants of all. Alpha Trion may be fiction, but the values he embodies, patience, wisdom, long-suffering, quiet strength, these are internal truths, especially for those of us trying to raise children, love our families well, and leave behind something worth more than gold. You don't have to be loud to lead. You don't have to rule to be righteous. You don't have to win to be worthy. Sometimes the greatest leaders are the ones no one sees, until everything falls apart. So if you're listening to this and wondering whether your quiet efforts matter, it does. Because just like Alpha Trion, you may not be the one to wear the crown, but you just might be the one who prepares the one who does. Thank you for walking with us through the silent strength of Alpha Trion, through the records he kept, through the leaders he's raised, through the wars he's watched unfold, yet refused to let define him. We've seen a prime by right choose the shadows over the throne, an ancient warrior become a keeper of memory, a builder of leaders who never needed the title for himself. And in that stillness, he teaches us something deeper, that wisdom isn't just knowledge, it's patience, restraint, discernment. That leadership isn't proven by the crown you wear, but by the lives you elevate, by the people you prepare to carry the fight when you're gone. Alpha Trion doesn't rewrite history to make himself a hero. He preserves it. He bears the burden. He remembers, so the next generation can rise higher than the last. Because the loudest legacy is often the quietest. Because the greatest leaders don't raise swords, they raise others. So ask yourself, who are you mentoring? What truth are you preserving? What are you building that others will inherit when you're gone? Are you trying to be remembered? Or trying to build something else worth remembering? So stay wise, stay steady, and as always, stay handsome. And remember, real legacy is not about being seen. It's about what remains when you're gone. Every legend starts somewhere, before the battlefield, before the betrayal. Jetfire was something far simpler, a mind built for science, not war. Long before he drew a line in the sky, he was buried beneath the ice, forgotten, until war found him, where Jetfire, or Skyfire as he was first known, awakens not just into a world he doesn't recognize, but into a conflict he never wanted, and the choice he makes next will define him forever. Some Transformers were forged in fire. Jetfire was buried in ice. In the G1 cartoon, Jetfire, known initially as Skyfire, wasn't born into war. He was a scientist, an explorer, a seeker of truth in the purest sense, before the name was corrupted by Decepticons. He and Starscream once flew across the uncharted galaxies, partners in research, not conquest. Back then, Starscream was a fellow scientist, not yet the treacherous opportunist he would become. Their bond was one of curiosity and ambition, two minds racing ahead of their time, but fate has a way of punishing those who dream too far from home. A sudden storm over a barren alien world sent Jetfire crashing into the frozen wasteland, where he would lie entombed for millions of years. He missed the war's beginning, but the war didn't miss him. When Starscream discovers Jetfire buried in ice, the reunion isn't one of friendship, it's a strategic alliance. The Decepticons revive Jetfire, hoping to twist his brilliance to their cause. At first, he obliges, not out of malice, but confusion, loyalty, and maybe even guilt. But Jetfire sees quickly what the Decepticons have become, what Starscream has become. The cause he's been asked to serve no longer resembles anything noble, and so he makes his choice. Jetfire defects to the Autobots, not because he's ordered to, but because it's right. And that's the heart of his growth across the series. He's not an Autobot by design. He chooses to be one. In a world ruled by programming and faction symbols, Jetfire's autonomy sets him apart. He represents something rare among Transformers, a true moral conscience. And that conscience is born not from violence, but from science. It would have been easy to write Jetfire as just another soldier, a massive air guardian with firepower to rival the Seekers. But the writers gave him a different burden, the weight of knowledge, the curse of clarity. Because once he sees the truth of the Decepticons, once he sees Starscream's cruelty, Megatron's tyranny, and the countless innocents caught in their war, he can't unsee it. It's a surprisingly refreshing take in a show better known for energy blasts, one-liners, and toy commercials. Jetfire turns his back on his oldest friend, because principle matters more than personal history. But the G1 cartoon only scratches the surface. For a darker, more tragic look at Jetfire's origin, we need to turn the page to the Marvel Comics continuity. Here, Jetfire's not awakened gently, he's built, created by the Decepticons from human designs, infused with Cybertronian science, and robbed of his free will. Shockwave doesn't resurrect Jetfire, he manufactures him, a machine meant to serve Decepticon logic and efficiency, a vessel of raw potential, controlled down to the last circuit, but inside, something stirs. When Jetfire first comes online, he isn't sure what he is. He's never known freedom, he's a shell, an automaton, but as he observes life, human and Cybertronian alike, he begins to question, and that question becomes rebellion. Grimlock even takes note, watching as Jetfire turns against his programming to protect the Autobots. It's a pivotal moment, one of the few times Grimlock, ever the cynic, calls a warrior noble. Jetfire earns his place on the Autobot roster not through battle prowess, but through self-determination, and that's the common thread. Where he's found in ice or forged in a lab, Jetfire's story always bends toward a singular moment, the rejection of power in favor of principle. In the cartoon, he walks away from the Decepticons. In the comics, he defies his very creator, and in both, his true first act of autonomy is to say no. No to tyranny, no to programming, no to the easy path. That refusal becomes Jetfire's defining trait, not his weapons, not his speed, not his intellect, but his will. He is one of the few Transformers who embodies the idea that knowledge without action is hollow, that science cannot be neutral in the face of injustice, that truth, when discovered, demands something from you. And in that way, Jetfire becomes more than a background character or a toy conversion. He becomes a mirror for us. How often do we inherit our causes, our beliefs, our loyalties, without ever questioning them? How often do we let momentum do the thinking for us? Jetfire didn't. He stopped, he asked, and then he chose. Even when the choice meant turning on a friend, even when it meant going to war against his own kind, even when it meant starting over again and again across the multiverse. He wasn't built to be a warrior, but sometimes the most dangerous warriors are the ones who choose to fight anyway. But what happens when knowledge doesn't free you, but damns you? Jetfire's story doesn't end with one righteous choice in the snow. In another universe, one far colder, far more complex, his awakening doesn't come with firepower or fanfare. It comes in a laboratory, in silence, in guilt. This Jetfire isn't rescued from the ice or built in a lab. He's a scholar of Cybertron, a student of logic, a scientist who believed progress was the highest virtue until he saw what it cost. And when he did, he didn't just walk away from the Decepticons, he walked into something much worse, the paralyzing weight of knowing too much and doing nothing. Jetfire never led a charge. He didn't make speeches or carve his name into the annals of Cybertronian warfare. He didn't have to, because some warriors shape history, not through conquest, but through conscience. In the IDW continuity, Jetfire's story is not one of battlefield glory, it's a quieter struggle, a lifelong attempt to make sense of a broken world, and to take responsibility for the knowledge that once helped break it. He began his career as a Decepticon, not a frontliner, not a fanatic, but a seeker of truth, drawn in by the Decepticon cause at its philosophical roots. He believed in equality, in dismantling the corruption of the Senate, in building a better future through progress. But ideals can be twisted, and Jetfire was watching too closely not to notice. He left the Decepticons long before Megatron's faction devolved into tyranny, and rather than join the Autobots immediately, he chose neutrality, working as a researcher, and later, choosing instead to serve as a neutral investigator, studying battlefields and cataloging the science behind Cybertron's unraveling. It was a middle path he thought he could walk, until Thunderwing. When Thunderwing returned in Stormbringer, it wasn't brute strength that helped defeat him, it was Jetfire's insight. His analysis of Thunderwing's condition helped Prime's forces understand what they were dealing with. Without Jetfire's work, Thunderwing's rampage might have never ended, but the lessons cut deeper than that. Jetfire had once believed science could remain neutral, that if he just did his job well enough, he could stay above the war, but the war taught him otherwise. And action wasn't neutrality, it was surrender, and Jetfire would never surrender again. So when Bumblebee rose to lead the Autobots, during the darkest days of the war, Jetfire stood by his side. He dismantled Decepticon propaganda, rescued civilians during their occupation of Earth. He even helped construct the new Iacon Space Bridge network, quietly building paths to healing while others still waged war. He wasn't looking for glory, he didn't want medals, he wanted meaning. Because Jetfire didn't carry guilt, he carried responsibility. He knew the names of every experiment that went too far, every piece of evidence buried by Cybertron's elite, every system that failed before the first shot was fired. And even when Decepticons began to fracture, even when Starscream took control of Cybertron, Jetfire remained a moral compass, a voice of reason, a scientist who had seen what happens when knowledge is corrupted, and vowed not to let it happen again. He never stopped questioning, never stopped weighing the cost of every action, because for Jetfire, knowledge wasn't power, it was a burden, and once you carry that burden, silence was no longer an option. But clarity doesn't just demand responsibility, it demands choice, because knowing the truth, truly knowing it, means you can't keep standing still. It demands you act, even when it costs you everything. Jetfire's life across continuities is defined not by violence, but by these moments of irreversible decisions, moments when loyalty fractured, when friendship collapsed under the weight of ideology, and when the line between silence and complicity became impossible to ignore. In each universe, whether digital or animated, classic or reimagined, Jetfire faces the same question. What do you do when the people you trust choose cruelty over conscience? This is the story of a scientist who became a soldier, not out of ambition, but necessity, of a friend who became a traitor because truth demanded it, and of a traitor who died a hero because sometimes that's the only way to be free. Now, let's turn to the moments that redefined him, to the turning points, to the price of choosing truth. Before we follow a Transformer who walked away from the war, make sure to follow or subscribe to Disassembled Heroes and Villains on your favorite podcast app. And next week, we face the master of magnetism himself, a Holocaust survivor, a mutant revolutionary, a man who's been right far too often. Next week, we enter the mind of Magneto. Now, back to Jetfire in the story of a Decepticon who changed. Jetfire's story has never been about allegiance. It's about awakening. In every universe, he begins in the same place, brilliant and respected. But over time, something breaks. Not in him, but around him. And Jetfire does what few ever dare to do. He walks away. In War for Cybertron, Jetfire begins not as a hero, but as the ruthless leader of the Seekers. Cold, calculating, loyal to Megatron, but only to a point. From the start, cracks appear. When Starscream tries to execute Bumblebee and Wheeljack against orders, Jetfire slices his arm without hesitation, not to protect Autobots, but because even war must have rules. He sees Megatron's shifting doctrine with unease, Shockwave's plan to reformat Autobots and Decepticons, a victory without honor, and when Megatron begins to treat his soldiers as disposable tools, Jetfire begins to question what he's fighting for. The breaking point comes in Blood and Betrayal. After Megatron murders Ultra Magnus, Jetfire is ordered to deliver his corpse to Shockwave, but Starscream confronts him, accusing him of killing Skywarp. Jetfire doesn't lie, he admits it. He is branded a traitor, hunted by his own soldiers, shot down midair. But trust is never freely given, it must be earned. When the Autobots needed to cross the Sea of Rust, Jetfire didn't just offer knowledge, he offered his life. To prove his loyalty, he agreed to install a core override in his brain module, a kill switch the Autobots could trigger if he betrayed them, not as a soldier, not as a hostage, but as penance. Because for Jetfire, redemption wasn't about forgiveness, it was about responsibility. He knew that words meant nothing in the face of war, that only action, sacrifice, could tip the balance of trust. He didn't ask for mercy, he gave them control of his life, knowing they might use it, because when honor is broken, the only way forward is to put everything on the line to rebuild it. And as he led them through electrical storms, saved Prowl from the depths, and fought beside those he once hunted, the kill switch was never needed, because Jetfire never looked back. Later, when Elita 1's Autobots returned to liberate Decepticon prisoners, Jetfire was there, not for revenge, but to stop the cycle. He gave his life in that final mission, taking a stand not for Autobot command, but for what was right. Yet during the events of Cyberverse, Jetfire is no defector. He's an Autobot through and through, loyal not to the war, but to justice. His legacy begins with vengeance, a devastating rivalry with Skybite. Their feud scorched systems and triggered a supernova, wiping out worlds in its wake. Both warriors vanished from history, until Earth brought them back into orbit. Jetfire returns not seeking glory, but closure. Yet his flame burns hotter when he sees how far his former friend Starscream has fallen. And when given the chance to kill Skybite, to finally end their feud, Jetfire hesitates, not out of weakness, but conviction. Because in that moment, with Megatron goading him to strike, and Optimus Prime wounded before him, Jetfire chose mercy. Across Cyberverse, we watch him evolve, from lone hunter to team leader, from driven warrior to pure of peace. When the Allspark is at stake, he risks everything to defend it, and when peace finally takes root, Jetfire stands among the Autobots and Decepticons as treaties are signed, living proof that the war may end, but ideals endure. His arc isn't one of betrayal or redemption, it's about clarity. Even in the chaos of a galactic war, Jetfire never forgets who he is. Because the truth doesn't need a faction, it just needs someone brave enough to follow it. But perhaps the most iconic version of this turning point lies in G1. How do you betray someone who's already betrayed themselves? That's the question Jetfire faces in the G1 cartoon, not as a soldier, but as a friend. Because before they were Decepticons and Autobots, they were only two scientists, Jetfire and Starscream, charting galaxies in pursuit of knowledge. And that's what makes his choice so painful. Jetfire doesn't leave the Decepticons because of battle tactics or political agendas. He leaves because the friend he once knew is gone, and the cause he's serving has curdled into something cruel. It's a quiet tragedy, one built not on betrayal, but on realization. The truth, when finally seen, severs bonds deeper than programming. Jetfire chooses the Autobots not out of loyalty, but because there's nothing left to be loyal to. His allegiance becomes a mirror of his values: protect life, seek understanding, and never serve power that feeds on the weak. It's the kind of moment that redefines a legacy, because loyalty to a leader is easy, but loyalty to your principles, that takes courage. And when Jetfire sees the cost of staying silent, he doesn't argue, he doesn't hesitate, he simply acts. A single decision, to turn away from a friend, to stand beside strangers, becomes the moment that defines him. And in doing so, Jetfire teaches us this, that sometimes the most heroic act is walking away. Not a choice of victory, not a choice of allegiance, but a choice of truth. In War for Cybertron, he walks away from the Decepticons, knowing it will cost him everything. In Cyberverse, he opens his optics to the horror of war and finds clarity and compassion. And in G1, he turns his back on his oldest friend, because principle mattered more than memory. Again and again, Jetfire's legacy is rewritten, not by what he builds or destroys, but by what he refuses to accept, and that's what sets him apart. So many Transformers are prisoners to their faction, symbols etched into their frames like destiny, but Jetfire is different. He teaches us that loyalty is meaningless if it demands silence, that truth, once seen, demands action, and that friendship, when built on falsehood, can end only one way. Jetfire never sought glory, he sought answers. And when those answers shattered everything he thought he knew, he didn't look away, he chose. But not every Jetfire is the same. Some were forged from legacy, others born into it. Because across the multiverse, the name Jetfire doesn't just echo, it evolves. In some worlds, he's a weapon engineered from ideals. In others, a brother shaped by shared DNA and divergent paths. But no matter the version, one truth remains. Jetfire must always choose who he becomes. And sometimes, that choice isn't just about right or wrong. Sometimes, it's about what you're willing to carry. Not every Jetfire is cut from the same alloy. In Transformers Animated, Jetfire isn't a lone defector torn between honor and betrayal. He's one half of something far more complex. A prototype, a twin, a test subject. Once a humble repair bot, Jetfire alongside his brother Jetstorm were nearly killed in an industrial accident. Rather than treat them as victims, the elite guard saw an opportunity. With Starscream imprisoned, his Decepticon code was forcibly grafted into their Autobot frames in hopes of replicating the gift of flight. It wasn't mercy, it was experimentation. They weren't expected to survive, they were expected to obey. But Jetfire did more than adapt. He thrived. His firepower, propulsion, quick temper, blazing determination made him a formidable warrior. And when he and Jetstorm combined to form Safeguard, the result was something no one anticipated, a union of will. Not just a fusion of code, but of choice. It was more than flight, it was freedom. As the series unfolds, Jetfire's journey becomes one of balancing duty with instinct. On Earth, he faces suspicion from his own kind, attacked by Autobots who mistake him for a Decepticon. He battles Wasp, Blitzwing, and even Grimlock, endures humiliating missions under Sentinel Prime, and watches the chain of command crumble around him. And yet, he endures. Loyal, courageous, unshaken. But underneath the firepower and bravado lies something deeper. A spark forged not from rebellion, but from resilience. Jetfire and Jetstorm's bond is never fractured by ego or ambition. Even when things spiral, battling under false orders, chasing phantom traitors, watching their allies fall, they remain united. Not because of shared programming, but because of shared values. They're not copies of Starscream, there is antithesis. Where Starscream sought power at any cost, Jetfire fights for connection, for something greater than himself. He doesn't need to betray his past to forge a future, he just needs to believe in it. Because animated Jetfire isn't haunted by legacy, he redefines it. And in doing so, he proves that legacy doesn't have to be a curse. It can be a challenge. One you rise to, one you surpass. Jetfire and Jetstorm were built from borrowed code, shaped by war, forced to define themselves through action. Though not all Jetfires are made in someone else's image. Some carry legacy not as burden, but as responsibility. In the Unicron trilogy, Jetfire isn't forged in the lab or rescued from corruption. He begins as a hero, trusted, respected, already standing tall beside Optimus Prime, not in defiance of the Decepticons, but in defense of peace. And yet, even here, the question lingers. When the cost of loyalty rises, will he hold the line? What happens when a warrior is built not to question, but to lead? In the Unicron trilogy, Jetfire's path is not one of awakening, but of endurance. He begins not in exile, but at Optimus Prime's side, a trusted second-in-command on Cybertron. But if leadership is a virtue, Jetfire must learn it the hard way. In Transformers Armada, he enters the stage like a thunderclap, rescuing Optimus from certain defeat, and immediately clashing with Megatron's aerial forces. Yet, beneath the bravado lies recklessness. His first major decision? To attack the Decepticon solo. The result? Disaster. It is only through the power links bond with Optimus, merging into Jet Optimus, that Jetfire begins to temper action with foresight. Their fusion is not just physical, it reflects Jetfire's gradual shift from lone flyer to cooperative leader. Again and again, he shoulders impossible odds, battling Tidal Wave, rescuing comrades from the moon, defying Megatron's wrath, and leading the charge against Unicron. But Jetfire's legacy isn't sealed through firepower, it's through refusal. When Hotshot is consumed by vengeance, Jetfire denies him. When trust in Starscream falters, Jetfire demands evidence, not emotion. When Optimus falls, Jetfire is the one who rallies the team, not by command, but by conviction. Energon and Cybertron show a seasoned warrior, less impulsive, more measured, still loyal, still brave, but now, his heroism stems from choice, not programming. When faced with resurrected enemies, haunted allies, and literal world-ending threats, Jetfire endures. He mentors Ironhide, he challenges Optimus, He protects human allies even when the cost is so high. So can virtue be engineered? Jetfire's journey says no. What's built into him, bravery, speed, firepower, is only a starting point. His real strength is earned through mistakes, through sacrifice, and through the slow, painful process of becoming more than what he was designed to be. He isn't noble because he was programmed to be. He's noble because he chooses to be. But nowhere is Jetfire's burden of legacy more literal or more tragic than the live-action Bayverse films. In Revenge of the Fallen, Jetfire awakens not as a soldier, but as a relic. He's ancient, weary, and most heartbreakingly, forgotten. Once a seeker in service of the fallen, he abandoned the Decepticons long ago, not for glory of allegiance, but out of disgust. It's a deeply personal choice, he tells us, one that echoes across every version of himself. As the war reignites around him, he doesn't fight for faction or flag, he fights for redemption. With one final act of purpose, Jetfire rips out his own spark, offering his body to resurrect and empower Optimus Prime. Death isn't a tactic, it's a testament, a life once wasted, repurposed into something worthy, a legacy written in fire and flight. From twin-born cadets to second-in-command generals, from war-weary defectors to self-sacrificing titans, Jetfire's spark has taken many forms. But across every reality, one truth remains. Legacy is not inherited, it is forged. Not by who you follow, but by what you choose to become. Because when the dust settles and the heroes are counted, it's not just the warriors who stand tall, it's the ones who walked away from war, who gave everything so others could rise. And that's where Jetfire's true legacy begins, not in the skies he once soared, but in the choice he made to rise above. He's not the name children shout when they play with toys. It's not the icon painted on lunchboxes or etched into statues. Jetfire is not Optimus Prime, and that's the point, because the story isn't about being the strongest, the most famous, or even the most loved. Jetfire's legacy is quieter, but no less vital. He was a soldier who questioned the mission, a scientist who saw through the lies, a warrior who chose peace. Across continuities, G1, Cyberverse, War for Cybertron, and the Bayverse, Jetfire walks a consistent path. He sees truth, and then he acts on it, even when it costs him everything. In a world of war that makes him a rarity, a voice of conscience, a symbol of what it means to choose integrity over identity, because walking away isn't weakness, it's strength. In our own lives, we often face moments, quiet ones, where we must decide, do we stay where it's comfortable, or do we rise toward what's right? Jetfire shows us that legacy isn't measured in victories or titles, it's measured in the courage to change, to defect from the things that no longer serve us, to question the systems we once believed in, to offer something of ourselves, not for reward, but for what's right. He didn't need to be the last one standing. He only needed to stand for something. So when the time comes, what will you choose? Power or principle? Safety or truth? Thank you for walking with us through the windswept silence, the cold calculations, and the quiet defiance of Jetfire. He wasn't forged to be a hero. He was a seeker, a soldier, a Decepticon, but he changed because he chose to. In a war where loyalty was everything, Jetfire broke ranks, not for glory, not for vengeance, but for truth. He saw what he had become and walked away, because we are not the sum of our worst decisions, we are the choices we make next. He could have clung to his past, but instead, he gave it up, piece by piece, until all that remained was a spark willing to burn for something better. Jetfire didn't win the war, but he gave his spark so that someone else could, and in doing so, he became more than his past. He became a reminder that legacy isn't built by power, it's built by principle, by the courage to change, even when it's hard, even when it costs everything. So ask yourself, what are you still carrying that no longer defines you? And when the time comes, we have the strength to let it go. Because Jetfire teaches us that we are not bound by who we were. We are defined by who we choose to be. So stay vigilant, stay principled, and as always, stay handsome. And remember, the past may shape you, but it never has to shackle you.
Metroplex wasn't always a myth. Before the legends, before the silence, he stood, steel and circuit, on the battlefield of Autobot City, not as a weapon to be unleashed, but as a sanctuary to be trusted, a protector whose walls could speak and think, because, in the beginning, Metroplex wasn't a symbol of restraint, he was a city, a living mind built to hold the line when everything else fell, and in the heat of war, that city began to awaken. In the early days of Autobot City, Metroplex was just a shape, a mass of walls, weapons, and steel, a fortress built to endure, a base designed to defend, and then came Scramble City, a code name for the next evolution in Autobot defenses, a last stand wrapped in titanium and firepower,
and at its heart, something stirred. Because Scramble City wasn't just metal and circuitry, it was alive. A spark emerging from the steel. His transformation from city to giant wasn't some act of divine spark. It was necessity. Decepticons had escalated the war. Trypticon, an entire battle station, was on the move, and in response, Metroplex stood, not as a warrior hungry for conquest, but as a shield, forged to withstand it. Post-1986, the world changed. Autobot City was no longer just a command post. It became a home, a beating heart of resistance built into Metroplex's frame. Blaster monitored transmissions from his chest. Hot Rod drove through his veins. The aerial bots launched from his shoulders. And still, Metroplex remained silent, watchful. Even when the battle called, he rarely answered first, because that was never his purpose. He was not a gun to be drawn. He was a wall to be leaned on. In the Headmasters series, that silence deepened. Metroplex became more than a base. He became a presence, intelligent, solemn, almost priest-like in his attachment. And then came Trypticon, a rival forged not just in steel, but in philosophy. Where Trypticon thundered in rage and instinct, Metroplex moved with calculation, deliberate, heavy. Their battles were not fast. They weren't elegant, but they were monumental. Fist met claw, laser met cannon. Entire cities shook beneath their feet. But while Trypticon sought destruction, Metroplex fought for preservation. He didn't strike first. He responded. He endured collapsed towers, and even when his systems failed, he waited. Because Metroplex understands the truth most Titans forget. Not every battle must be won with speed. Some are won by standing longer than anyone else. His fight with Trypticon was more than a spectacle. It was a metaphor. Brute rage against restrained might, destruction against defense, and every time Metroplex rose again, he reminded the world that patience is not passivity, it's strength. The stillness he embodied isn't weakness, that waiting isn't surrender, but standing still is not the same as standing free. Because when you are a city, your body is not your own. You carry soldiers in your halls, children in your shadow, entire lives curled within your corridors, waiting for you to hold. And every time you refuse to strike first, you carry the weight of what might come next. The missiles they don't see, the screams they don't hear, the collapse you were built to withstand alone. Stillness isn't peace when war walks your streets. It's burden. It's fear in slow motion. Metroplex doesn't ignore the danger. He absorbs it. And when he breaks, it's not steel that fractures. It's sanctuary. Because the cost of being a city isn't counted in metal or ammo. It's measured in trust. And knowing that when you rise, it must be for the right reason. Because when you move, the world moves with you. And if you move too soon, you take everyone down with you. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is wait. To hold the line when every voice tells you to act. To remain calm when chaos demands attention. To endure, not because you can't fight, but because you know the cost of fighting. Metroplex does not rush into battle. He doesn't need to. Because his presence is the battlefield. And when he moves, it's because everything that could have been spared no longer can. But what happens when the silence becomes sacred? When the stillness of a city isn't just restraint, it's reverence. Across time and space, in another universe entirely, Metroplex is reborn, not as infrastructure, but as legend. He no longer simply carries soldiers, he carries culture, memory, myth. The war has aged, Cybertron has fractured, and the line between weapon and worship has blurred. From the pages of the first IDW universe, Metroplex is not the battlefield. He is the last sanctuary left to fight for, and when he falls, entire worlds tremble. Because in a galaxy of warriors shouting for dominance, Metroplex teaches another lesson. You don't have to be loud to be mighty, because sometimes the quietest voice speaks for the soul of civilization. Some are silent sentinels forged through myth and legend, and in the world created from IDW, Metroplex is both. He is not just a city that walks, he is the first Titan, the original among Cybertron's divine machines, a myth whispered in the annals of Cybertronian culture, said to have walked with Primus, to have stood against Trypticon in the ancient days, and watched as that monster was buried deep in the planet's core. He is not born from battle, he is born from purpose. Long before the rise of Megatron or the legend of Optimus Prime, Metroplex presided over the fate of Cybertron's most ancient conflicts. He and the other Titans, Chella, Caminus, Metro Titan, sealed away corrupt primes, cast down the treacherous Vigilum and Liege Maximo, and helped ensure Cybertron's future didn't belong to tyrants. But legends fade, time erases monuments, and Metroplex vanished. Some said he had died, others that he was never real, but the truth was far stranger. Metroplex had buried himself beneath the ruins of Nion, dormant, silent, watching, not out of fear, but of choice. Because in this world, Metroplex is more than metal. He is a memory, a symbol not just of power, but of the past we forget when war becomes the only language spoken. When the Decepticons destroyed Nion, Metroplex felt it. The cries of the dying, the weight of the innocent crushed beneath conquest. And he mourned them. He stirred beneath the rubble. And when Optimus Prime called out using the matrix of leadership, Metroplex stood. The Acroplex was no longer just a ruin of the Golden Age. It was Metroplex reborn. And for the first time in millennia, the Titan walked, but not towards vengeance. He tended to the wounded first, lifted the survivors to safety, and only then did he return to battle. Because his strength was never meant for domination, it was meant for deliverance, to bring light to a dark world. When the war reached Iacon, Metroplex answered again. He shattered Megatron's Vampark Annihilator in a single blow, crushed the Decepticon citadel beneath his feet, transformed himself into the new capital city, a sanctuary built on the ruins of tyranny. But even then, he remained silent, not because he was broken, but because he chose not to rule. Others demanded obedience. Metroplex offered refuge. And yet, even Titans can bleed. When Trypticon was reborn and dropped from the orbit to destroy him, Metroplex endured. Optimus rerouted all of Iacon's energy into the Titan's frame, and for the first time in ages, Metroplex fought not as a symbol, but as a soldier. He grappled his rival to the ground, curb-stomped Trypticon's skull, and stood victorious, and just in time to be impaled by Megatron's warship, crashing from the sky, because strength is not invincibility, and sacrifice is not weakness. The damage was catastrophic. Metroplex vanished into the stars, guided by Alpha Trion, his old companion, to heal, to rest, to protect his secrets from Megatron's reach. But this was no retreat. Over centuries, Metroplex drifted from world to world, hiding, refueling, waiting, until a battle with Six-Shot revealed his presence again, and the Titan, rather than seek revenge, saved the Autobots, provided them with tools, then transformed into a spacefaring mode and vanished once more, not to fight, but to protect something deeper than war. Even when the Ammonites invaded, when Shockwave's plans cracked Cybertron in half, Metroplex did not speak. He let others shout, he let others rage, but when his spark flickered back to life, when Windblade reconnected him to his brain module, Metroplex did something extraordinary. He laughed, because in that moment, surrounded by 70 billion enemies, he remembered who he was, a protector, a city, a soul. In time, Metroplex became the literal heart of a new Cybertronian age. He opened the space bridges, he reunited the colonies, he gave rise to the Council of Worlds, Caminus, Velocitron, Eucharis, Division. Each connection was a risk. Each activation could bring war, but he did it anyway. Not because he wanted to be a god, but because he remembered what it meant to serve. To serve Windblade, his city speaker. To serve a world rebuilding from ruin. Even when Starscream siphoned his energy. Even when riots and sabotage ravaged his systems. Even when he lost one of his eyes. Blinded not in battle, but in silence. A god machine wounded by those he sheltered. Even when he could no longer speak to anyone but Windblade, Metroplex endured. Because being the strongest doesn't mean shouting the loudest. It means standing when no one else can. It means holding a city together even as it tears itself apart. It means carrying burdens only the divine bear and never asking for thanks. And when the end came, when Unicron returned, Metroplex stood one last time. He bridged the survivors to Earth. He joined Trypticon in orbit. He shielded the weak, and even then, his final words weren't commands. They were reminders that even giants must listen, that silence isn't emptiness, it's sacred. Because you don't have to be loud to be mighty, you just have to stand. Before the last space bridge collapses and the sparks fade into silence, make sure to follow or subscribe to Disassembled Heroes and Villains on your favorite podcast app. Every week, we uncover the legacy of pop culture's greatest legends and darkest monsters, to find the meaning behind the myth, and the humanity inside the machine. And next week, Disassembled Deep Cuts returns to explore the darkest reflections of Cybertron's greatest hero, a black mirror held to the face of Optimus Prime, a fusion of rage, vengeance, and hollow salvation. Next week, we descend into the evil clones of Nemesis Prime, but that's not all, because soon after, we face a god who does not beg, a warrior forged in the fire of losses, a father, a monster, a killer of gods. Kratos is coming to Disassembled Heroes and Villains, and if you want to decide who we cover next, cast your vote every Wednesday on the Handsome Comics YouTube community poll. Now, back to the silence and the Titan who chose to stand. In some worlds, Metroplex fades into myth, and others, he becomes the myth itself. But there's one universe where the Titan doesn't merely endure, he leads. Not through fear, not through firepower, but through example. Because in the Unicron trilogy, Metroplex isn't just a city, he's a sovereign, a warrior of discipline, a builder who speaks softly, and carries a spark drinker axe the size of a starship. And when Optimus Prime crosses his path, Metroplex doesn't challenge him for power, he challenges him for purpose. And now let's travel to the giant planet Gigantian. In the Transformers Cybertron series, Metroplex is not a god asleep beneath the soil. He's awake, alive, and already in command. Here, He rules the giant planet of Gigantion, an entire world built on layers of endless construction. Skyscrapers rise atop older cities like sediment on tectonic plates. And at the heart of it all stands Metroplex, not just a builder, but a leader of builders. Wielding the colossal axe Spark Drinker, he's both foreman and philosopher, commanding respect with few words and immense strength. But Metroplex does not rule through fear. He doesn't crave war. He values order, tradition, and discipline. A trinity of principles that hold Gigantion together like girders in a superstructure. So when Optimus Prime and his crew arrive in search of the final cyberplanet key, Metroplex doesn't greet them with open arms. He meets them with scrutiny. Respect must be earned, not demanded. And while he senses nobility in Optimus, the laws of Gigantion cannot be ignored. At least, not until war comes crashing through their foundation. The young brute Menasor, twisted by Decepticon promises, joins Megatron in an unsanctioned drill deep into the planet's sacred lower levels. The world trembles, and with it, so does Metroplex's resolve. Because tradition means nothing if your home is in ruins. With Gigantion at risk, Metroplex and his second-in-command Quick Mix break with customs, break with tradition, side with Optimus Prime, and join the mission to save the universe. But this isn't submission, it's evolution, a recognition that strength is meaningless without wisdom, and leadership without flexibility becomes tyranny. Together, they descend into the depths of Gigantion, navigating ancient ruins, long-lost records, and even a hidden artificial sky. Along the way, Metroplex lends his mighty Spark Drinker to Optimus Prime, not as a gesture of subservience, but of trust. Because in Metroplex's eyes, power is not sacred, purpose is. Even when Galvatron shrugs off Spark Drinker's might, Metroplex does not retreat. He knows his fight is bigger than pride. He endures. But for all his strength and discipline, Metroplex's greatest growth comes not from fighting a tyrant, but from reconciling with a student. Menasor, brash, bitter, and hungry for validation, finally confronts Metroplex in battle. He reveals his resentment, his anger at being treated like an inferior just because he's young, and for a moment, Menasor gains the upper hand. He almost kills his mentor, but what stops him isn't a weapon, it's a spark. Two tiny partners, drill bit and heavy load, emerge from their chest, willing to die to protect the ones they bonded with. In that moment, both warriors remember who they used to be. Their strength isn't about who's the tallest, but who stands for others. Metroplex sees it clearly, the mistake of forgetting who he was, the arrogance of judging a young warrior without teaching him. And so, the battle ends not in death, but in forgiveness. Or switches sides, and for the third time, Spark Drinker is placed in the hands of Optimus Prime. He uses it to strike Galvatron down. It would be enough to rest then, to rebuild, but the war isn't over. Galvatron escapes, wielding the Omega Lock and Cyberplanet keys to threaten all existence. As he grows to cosmic proportions, Metroplex and the other planetary leaders, Overrider Velocitron, Scourge of the Jungle Planet, and Evac of Earth, stand beside Optimus Prime for one final assault. 5 voices, 5 worlds, 1 purpose. Combined strength shatters Galvatron's defenses and allows Optimus to reclaim the lock. With the keys restored, they awaken the power of Primus, the life force of Cybertron itself, and seal the growing black hole that threatened to consume the multiverse. It's a triumphant moment, but Metroplex knows salvation isn't the end of duty, it's just the beginning. When Optimus finishes what Galvatron started, Metroplex returns to the stars to help realign the shaken orbit of the jungle planet, reconstructing not just worlds, but harmony between them. And when the dust finally settles, he joins the first interplanetary peace conference to build a new space bridge network, carrying the legacy of Gigantion into the future. This is the Metroplex of the Unicron trilogy, not a silent titan buried beneath a world, but a living city who leads through action, a warrior who breaks tradition not out of rebellion, but to protect those traditions from being lost forever. He wields power, yes, but never without principle. He lends his axe, but never his integrity. And when the moment comes to strike, he never does it alone, because strength means nothing without a soul, and the greatest leaders, they don't demand obedience, they earn it. But even the mightiest cities must one day fall silent. In the age of Gigantion, Metroplex stood tall, a builder, a leader, a teacher who chose action over pride. But in another world, in another war, he would rise not to teach, but to protect, not to preserve peace, but to buy time. Because in the aligned continuity, there are no ancient traditions left to guard, only ruin, only survival. And when hope itself begins to flicker, Metroplex does not hesitate. He answers the call, not as a ruler, not as a warrior, but as the final shield, a last bastion of steel, standing between extinction and escape. In Fall of Cybertron, the war is no longer about conquest or pride, it's about survival. The Decepticons have ravaged the planet. The Autobots are outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. Their only hope lies in a desperate plan to escape aboard the Ark, an interstellar lifeboat meant to carry the last remnants of Cybertronian life to the stars. But as Megatron's forces descend with overwhelming firepower, even that hope begins to die, until the city itself begins to move. Buried for eons beneath the surface, An ancient power stirs, massive, mechanical, and alive. Metroplex, once a titan of old Cybertron, he has lain dormant for centuries, fused with the foundations of the city. But when Optimus Prime, wounded yet unbroken, reaches deep into the heart of the city, Metroplex awakens, not out of duty, not out of programming, but because he hears the voice of the last Prime and chooses to stand. And when he rises, the world shakes. Towers fall. Armies scatter, the sky itself seems to split as Metroplex joins the battlefield. He is more than a weapon, he is judgment in motion, with Optimus Prime marking targets. Metroplex rains devastation from above, pulverizing the Decepticon lines and turning the tide. Even Megatron's heaviest artillery cannot hold, but this is no one-sided war. When Metroplex attempts to destroy the final anti-air cannon halting the Ark's launch, he's struck point blank, his massive frame collapsing under the weight of the blast. For a moment, silence. The Autobots fear they've lost him, and Optimus is captured, dragged before Megatron, taunted and broken, but arrogance as its own downfall. As Megatron mocks his prisoner, a shadow falls over the Decepticon base. Metroplex lives. He tears through the fortress walls, ignoring blaster fire, ignoring pain. There is only one target. With righteous fury, he slams his fist down again and again until Megatron lies shattered at his feet. The Tyrant is dead, the Autobots are safe, and the Ark is still grounded. The energon spent defending the city has drained their final reserves. The Autobots have no fuel left to flee, and so, once more, Metroplex chooses. Against Prime's wishes, he donates his own spark energy, his life force, to power the Ark, to carry his people forward. He does not hesitate, he does not ask for recognition, he simply kneels, connects, and gives. As the Ark launches into the stars, Metroplex collapses one final time, his frame still smoldering, his voice a whisper, till all are one. He never sees the stars, but because of him, the Autobots do. This is not a tale of a god king, or a warlord, or a legend carved in golden circuits. This is the story of a guardian, one who gave everything not to win, but to let others live. In the end, Metroplex's sacrifice wasn't in the buildings he carried or the weapons he wielded. It was in his service, his sacrifice, his willingness to fall so others could rise. Because true power isn't measured in size, it's measured in purpose, and even giants can fall when they fall for others. But Metroplex does not rise again. His spark, once beating at the heart of a city, now fuels a vessel of hope, not for glory, not for recognition, but so that others might live. And in that moment, he doesn't just carry the Autobots to freedom, he carries us to the heart of something deeper. Because across every universe, every continuity, Metroplex stands not merely as a warrior or a weapon, but as a witness, a living monument to the values that hold the crumbling world together: service over pride, duty over comfort, and sacrifice over self. He doesn't demand belief, he earns it through strength, guided by mercy. In a time when power is worshipped and truth feels negotiable, Metroplex reminds us of something timeless: that real power doesn't dominate, it defends. That faith, like a fortress, must be built brick by brick, choice by choice. That the greatest leaders aren't the ones who shout the loudest, but the ones who stand the tallest when it matters most. So what can we learn from the Walking City? What does this Titan teach us? Not just about war and peace, but about wisdom and righteousness. Because when the world begins to shake, when the foundation cracks and the future feels uncertain, what you need isn't noise, you need a tower of truth. Metroplex is more than metal, more than might, more than a city that walks. He is a moral anchor, immovable when everything else breaks apart. Across continuities, Metroplex shows us that strength isn't the absence of gentleness, it's the willingness to bear weight others can't. He doesn't boast, he doesn't rule for glory, he serves, quietly, faithfully, even when no one sees. And in that, he reflects something sacred. In Transformers Cybertron, he teaches us that tradition is not weakness, it's the scaffolding of civilization. But tradition, without humility, becomes dogma. That's why Metroplex knows when to hold the line and when to bend. He leads by wisdom, not by whim, by choosing purpose over pride. He preserves not just his planet, but his people. In Fall of Cybertron, his sacrifice becomes something deeper. It's not just strategy, it's stewardship. When he gives his spark to power the Ark, it isn't just heroic, it's biblical. As John 15:13 states, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for his friends. And that is the spirit of Metroplex. He stands not because he must, but because someone must. In an age that glorifies chaos, he is order. In a culture that trades conviction for convenience, he is truth, rooted, firm, unshakable. And perhaps, the greatest lesson of all, Metroplex doesn't seek transformation for its own sake. He builds, he protects, he guards the spark of something eternal, not by chasing power, but by embodying purpose, discipline, tradition, sacrifice. Not old ideas, foundational ones. We live in a world that desperately needs men like Metroplex, not just to fight, but to stand, to lead not with ego, but with resolve, with virtue, with faith. Men who do not chase applause, but live for accountability. Men men who aren't swayed by trends because their roots go deeper than culture, men who don't fear responsibility because they understand it is the weight that forges strength. Metroplex reminds us that masculinity is not toxic when it is tempered by purpose, that honor is not outdated when it is anchored in truth, and that real leadership, the kind that endures, isn't about dominance, it's about service. He doesn't flinch from sacrifice, he embraces it because he knows some burdens must be carried, even if no one else will. In every timeline, Metroplex is proof. When the foundations crumble, when the city falls silent, it won't be the clever men who save us, or the loud ones, or the selfish ones. It will be the steady ones, the builders, the protectors, the guardians of what is good and right was meant to be a shelter. But when the last light fades, and the final gate closes, it will be the man who stands alone in the breach, who gives what he cannot get back, who chooses faith over fear, who whispers, not with bravado, but with conviction, till all are one. Thank you for walking with us through the silence, strength, and sacrifice of Metroplex, through the ruins he rebuilt, through the worlds he's protected, through the battles he didn't want but never ran from. We've seen a warrior made not of rage, but of restraint, a city that walks, but only when all else has fallen. And in that silence, he reminds us of something we often forget, that strength isn't about moving first, it's about knowing when not to move at all. Metroplex doesn't rush into battle to prove his power. He waits, he watches, because some fights aren't about victory, they're about conviction. He reminds us that power without purpose is just destruction, waiting for an excuse. That the true test of strength is not how loud you roar, but how deeply you serve. And maybe that's why Metroplex stays until the very end, because stillness is not surrender, it's faith, it's discipline, it's the quiet confidence of a guardian who knows his worth, and waits until the world needs it most. So ask yourself, if all you protect is yourself, are you really strong, or just afraid to serve? So stay sharp, stay brave, and as always, stay handsome. And remember, the tallest towers don't need to make a sound to cast a shadow. But what happens when belief outpaces understanding? When a mind built for war sees something far more dangerous than conquest, divinity. To understand Thunderwing's descent, we must begin where his ambition first took root, not in a temple, not on a battlefield, but in the shadowed laboratories and fractured battle lines of Marvel's Transformers universe, where one Decepticon dared to reach for the sacred, not for peace, not for wisdom, but to claim the Matrix as a weapon. Because in the beginning, Thunderwing didn't seek salvation, he sought victory, and in doing so, he mistook obsession for purpose, and power for purity. In the Marvel Comics continuity, Thunderwing doesn't begin as a prophet, he begins as a tactician, ambitious, calculated, commanding. He rose through the ranks, not by cruelty, but by cunning. He wasn't driven by conquest alone. He sought control, purpose, order, but what begins as pragmatism quickly becomes obsession. When Optimus Prime casts the creation matrix into space to prevent its misuse, Thunderwing doesn't see a safeguard, he sees an opportunity. His pursuit of the matrix begins the scientific mission, an attempt to harness its power, but science alone cannot explain divinity. Over time, Thunderwing's quest shifts. The matrix becomes more than a weapon, more than a key, it becomes a promise, a sacred object, a source of salvation that only he is worthy to possess. He bonds with a massive pretender shell, armor meant to protect, but for Thunderwing, it's a chrysalis, a transformation. He sacrifices his form, his identity, and eventually, his reason, for a vision only he believes. And when the Matrix finally finds him, it doesn't reject him, it embraces him. But this is no divine coronation, it's corruption. Thunderwing becomes its vessel, not because he understands it, but because he projects onto it. He believes the Matrix chose him, that it validated his obsession, and so, when it begins to twist his thoughts, amplify his hunger, and override his will, he welcomes it. He doesn't see a curse. He sees confirmation, and with that blessing, he unleashes horror. Thunderwing slaughters Autobot and Decepticon alike in a holy rampage, not as a general, not as a savior, but as a possessed fanatic. He believes he's fulfilling destiny, while becoming a monster. Even the other Decepticons fear what he's become, because the Matrix he carries has already been corrupted. It turns on Thunderwing in the final hour, rejecting the hollow shell he's become. The Matrix he sought turns inward, devouring him from within. The Matrix sheds him like a husk, a malevolent echo of faith, standing before the Chaos Bringer. And in that moment, Thunderwing dies, consumed by the very belief that once gave him purpose. But even in death, Thunderwing's story leaves us with a haunting fact. Thunderwing's legacy isn't that he was corrupted, it's that he was never willing to question himself. He didn't seek the Matrix with humility, he demanded it. And when it answered, he mistook its silence for agreement. He sacrificed everything, body, mind, and spark, for a vision shaped not by destiny, but delusion. Because when belief becomes obsession, when you chase power without reflection, When you mistake destiny for entitlement, you don't see the monster in the mirror, you become it. But Thunderwing's story doesn't end with death, because in another universe, he doesn't just return, he's resurrected, not by will, not by purpose, but by others who remembered what he once represented and chose to turn that memory into a weapon. In IDW's initial continuity, Thunderwing is no longer a zealot, no longer a commander. He is the shadow of his former self, brought back through forbidden science and stripped of everything that once made him a person. His body is monstrous, his mind is gone, and the Pretender's shell once used to shield his spark, now it is him. The bot who once sought salvation has become the very storm that consumes it, and this time, not even the Decepticons want to claim him, because what do you do with a legacy so cursed, so twisted, that even your name becomes a force of destruction as a fanatic reborn? In the beginning, Thunderwing was a scientist, a pioneer, an inspiration to young minds like Jetfire, equal parts aviator and intellect. He wasn't just respected, he was admired, but even brilliance can breed blindness. During the height of the war, Thunderwing saw something few others dared to acknowledge. Cybertron itself was dying, not just from enemy fire, but from systemic collapse, pollution, corruption, implosion. He warned both factions that the damage they inflicted would soon doom the planet. No one listened. So Thunderwing did what he thought was necessary. He went further. He created this universe's version of the Pretender armor. Not a suit, but a second skin, a polydermal graft fusing Transformers metal with harvested organic tissue. He saw it as the next stage of survival. The shell will protect against Cybertron's decay, and perhaps evolve its wielder into something more. But the shell was never just armor. It was a parasite, corrupting its host. Rejected by Megatron, scorned by his peers, Thunderwing subjected himself to the grafting process alone. The experiment worked. His body became stronger, almost indestructible, but at a price. His mind fractured, his memories blurred, and his spark began to rot beneath the weight of his own invention. He didn't become the savior of Cybertron, he became its executioner. In Stormbringer, Thunderwing emerges not as a prophet, but as a nightmare, a creature of war and madness, no longer guided by mission or morality. He no longer speaks, no longer plans, he simply destroys. Entire planets fall under his boots. Autobots and Decepticons alike are nothing but debris in his path. He becomes the storm, devastating Nebulous, tearing through crankcase in his unit like paper, causing seasoned warriors like Dreadwind and Thrust to abandon their posts in terror. And when he returns to Cybertron, there is nothing left to save. Jetfire, once his admirer, now his would-be executioner, reveals a secret. The only way to stop Thunderwing is to let him burn out, drain his Ultra Energon reserves, let the weapon overheat. Even Optimus Prime joins the assault, leading the Wreckers, the Predacons, and modified Centurion drones in one final effort to halt a force that should not exist. But it's not a battle, it's a mercy killing, because Thunderwing, in this form, is not alive in the way we understand. His body is a puppet, his will is gone, what remains is an echo, a shadow given flesh. He is no longer a bot, he is strictly momentum. And when he falls again, his lifeless husk taken into custody, but even that is not the end. Bludgeon, obsessed with Thunderwing's forgotten research, recovers the body and uses it for darker purposes. Imprinted with new commands and infused with unstable fuel of Ultra Energon, Thunderwing becomes a guardian of the dead universe, a gatekeeper for Galvatron, a mindless monster leashed to an apocalyptic cause he'll never understand. He doesn't guard the Negacore out of loyalty. He's simply programmed to stand, to kill, to wait. The Wreckers try again. So does Ultra Magnus, even Jetfire returns, attempting to override Thunderwing's control system using Bludgeon's harness. For a moment, it works. The monster halts, but that's all it is, a moment. Because you can't control something not bound to the laws of the living world. And in the end, Thunderwing is only stopped when Jhiaxus, his latest puppeteer, is finally defeated. The monster falls again. But even then, there's no certainty, only speculation, because when a myth is this powerful, does it ever truly die? Yet, Thunderwing's tragedy in IDW is that he never gets to tell his story. His identity is consumed, first by ambition, then by madness, and finally by the ambitions of others. He becomes a cautionary tale. Bludgeon uses his corpse as a weapon, Galvatron uses his name as a shield, Jhiaxus turns him into a tool of annihilation, and across the galaxy, Decepticons still whisper his name, not with reverence, but with fear. Because Thunderwing isn't just a warning, he's a template, a martyr whose corpse is weaponized, a legacy so twisted that even in death, he destroys. What began as a plea to save Cybertron became the monster that nearly doomed it. And in that begs the question, when you sacrifice your soul to save the world, what's left of you when the world no longer wants saving? Before we let the ashes of Thunderwing scatter into myth, make sure to follow or subscribe to Disassembled Heroes and Villains on your favorite podcast app. Every week we dive into the icons and monsters who shape pop culture to uncover not just their strength, but their sacrifice. And this Friday, we cross into another realm, a world where demons wear trench coats, where the line between right and wrong is razor thin, where the chains of destiny are smashed with the right hand of doom. Next up, we summon Hellboy. Then, next Tuesday in Disassembled Deep Cuts, the mirror shatters, and from the fragments rise a new kind of Cybertron, one ruled by tyrants in Autobot armor, one where evil wears a smile. Next up, we enter the world of Transformers Shattered Glass. Now, back to the story of a hollow god. Whether he burned with purpose or raged without it, one truth binds every version of Thunderwing. He never asked for forgiveness. He didn't see himself as lost. He saw himself as chosen. In Marvel, he crowned himself a messiah, blessed by the Matrix, blinded by its light. In IDW, his mind was long gone, but his myth marched on, wielded like scripture by zealots too afraid to let it die. In both worlds, Thunderwing becomes a hollow god, not because he failed, but because he refused to see failure. He mistook obsession for clarity, silence for agreement, power for purpose, and that raises a terrifying question. What's more dangerous? A villain who knows he's wrong, or the one who believes he's saving you? Thunderwing never sought redemption. He wanted to be proven right, and that is what makes the story so dangerous. In both Marvel and IDW, he doesn't stumble into villainy by accident. He walks into it with open eyes, believing the world needs him to break its rules, redefine its future, and force it towards survival. He isn't a heretic, he's a high priest of a gospel he wrote for himself. And when the creation matrix embraced him, it didn't purify him, it reflected him. Not that he was noble, but that he was already rotting from the inside. The same is true in IDW. The polydermal grafting didn't corrupt an innocent soul, it magnified an arrogant one. A bot who once sought salvation through silence becomes the very disease he tried to cure, and worse, he becomes a myth, a warning others ignore. What remains of Thunderwing is no longer thought, no longer reason, just wrath with a pulse, just conviction without conscience. And that's where we need to stop and ask ourselves, what convictions are we building our lives on? Because this isn't just a story about a Decepticon, it's a mirror. We like to think danger always looks evil, that false prophets come dressed in nice suits and shadows, but sometimes they come wrapped with purpose, and righteousness, and certainty. Sometimes the most dangerous voice in the room isn't the one shouting to destroy the world, it's the one promising to save it. If only we'd bow, if only we'd follow, if only we'd believe in them. And that was Thunderwing's mistake, and it's one we make every day. When we start treating our ambition like a calling, when we stop seeking truth and start weaponizing it, when our vision of saving the world no longer leaves space for humility or surrender, that's when the armor goes on. That's when we lose ourselves, because no one wakes up and decides to become a monster. They confuse their voice for wisdom and their will for destiny. In Thunderwing, we see the final form of that path, a savior with no soul left, a prophet whose gospel becomes a grave, a legacy built not on healing, but on domination. And the tragedy, he was brilliant. He was right about Cybertron's decay. He could have been something more, but he couldn't let go of control. And when the Matrix looked inside of him, it didn't see a hero, it saw a hollow god. So here's the real question. What happens when your convictions are true, but your heart is not? Can you still be trusted with power? With leadership? With influence? Thunderwing reminds us that what you believe matters, but why you believe it and how you wield it matters even more. You can be right in theory and still be completely lost, because the most dangerous zealots aren't the ones who know they're wrong, they're the ones who believe they're saving you. And sometimes, the only difference between salvation and destruction is who you think you're becoming. Thank you for descending with us into the hollow legacy of Thunderwing, through the science he once wielded with brilliance, through the matrix he chased with hunger, through the shell he became when belief overtook identity. We've seen a leader lose his soul in pursuit of certainty, a seeker of truth become a prisoner of ego, a warrior who mistook obsession for calling. And in that fall, he leaves us with a question deeper than any hole in a battlefield. What do you worship? Not just in ritual, but in motive, in ambition, and the quiet moments when no one is watching. Because Thunderwing didn't fall by accident. He fell because he believed the Matrix owed him, because he saw its power not as something to serve with, but something to own. And that's the real danger. Belief isn't the problem, entitlement is. When you chase power in the name of purpose, when you bind your identity to a calling that only elevates you, you stop being a protector. So ask yourself, Are your beliefs rooted in humility or hunger? Do they serve others or only build your name? Are you carrying truth or just chasing control? Because in the end, the Matrix didn't reject Thunderwing because he was wrong. He corrupted it because he wouldn't surrender. So stay grounded, stay humble, and as always, stay handsome. And remember, the things you chase in the name of belief will either transform you or consume you. The difference is who you think you serve. The story of Grimlock is defined by his strength and toughness. The question was never if Grimlock was strong. It was whether that strength could be trusted, whether it could be guided, or whether it would consume everything around him. Because the early Grimlock we meet isn't a monster, but he isn't a leader either. He's prideful, brash, protective yes, but reactive, powerful, but not yet principled. And in the age of G1 in the Marvel Comics series, the power comes with a question every warrior must face. Can your might alone save your people? Every king's strength has to start somewhere. For some, it begins with their lineage. For others, self-appointed leaders, it begins with instinct. And for Grimlock, those instincts were anything but gentle, long before he was a king. Before the Dinobots roared onto battlefields and etched their names into legend, Grimlock was something raw, untamed, unrefined, a weapon without wisdom. He wasn't forged in the Hall of Heroes, he was built in response to terror. In the G1 cartoon continuity, Grimlock is one of the original Dinobots, constructed by Wheeljack and Ratchet, not born of war, but sculpted by it. His strength was immense. His mind, less so. It was simple, direct, proud. He knew what he was, and he didn't hide it. And in a world of logic-driven bots and battle-hardened soldiers, Grimlock stood apart. He didn't care about politics or protocol. He cared about victory, about protecting his team, about showing again and again that no one could stand against him. But that pride came at a cost. In the episode War of the Dinobots, Grimlock challenges Optimus Prime himself, not for glory, but because he sees strength as the only qualification for leadership. He doesn't betray Optimus, but he questions him, not out of a thirst for power, but of arrogance. Because in Grimlock's mind, the strongest should lead, and that belief would echo far more dangerously in Marvel's continuity. There, Grimlock's role evolves. When Optimus Prime dies, it is Grimlock, not Ultra Magnus, not Prowl, who claims command of the Autobots, not because he was chosen, but because he took it. The Marvel version of Grimlock is smarter, more articulate, but also more authoritarian. He doesn't just lead, he rules. He declares himself King Grimlock, literally wearing a crown in the UK comics and enforcing his vision of order with brutal resolve. He punishes dissent. He withholds medical aid from injured Autobots unless they earn it. And in his obsession with strength, he alienates the very warriors he once called brothers. It's not a rise to glory. It's a slow descent into isolation. The Dinobots break away. The Autobots grow disillusioned. And Grimlock, for all his power, is left alone on a throne of silence, feared, not followed. Because strength may earn obedience, but it doesn't earn loyalty. And leadership without the benefit of wisdom can quickly turn towards tyranny. And yet, even then, Grimlock's heart isn't evil. His intentions weren't conquest. He wanted to protect his people. He wanted to win, but he never asked the deeper question. What does strength mean if you don't know how to wield it? Both versions of Grimlock, G1 and Marvel, grapple with the same flaw. They mistake force for fitness. They believe power alone is enough, but power without restraint becomes recklessness, and strength without humility becomes a burden too heavy to carry. Because Grimlock thought ruling meant fighting harder, that being king meant no compromise, no softness, no surrender, but leadership demands something more. It demands listening, sacrificing, choosing patience when instinct screams for dominance. The truth is, Grimlock was never the villain. He was never the monster. He was a warrior, trying to lead without knowing how, a protector whose instincts still pull him towards control. And in the end, it wasn't the battlefield that tested him the most, it was the mirror. Because being strong is easy, but learning when not to use that strength, that's where the real battle begins. Strength may earn a crown, but it can't teach you how to wear it. In both Marvel and the earliest appearances in IDW, Grimlock crosses a threshold that every powerful man faces. He stops questioning his instincts and starts obeying them. And when instinct becomes law, pride follows close behind. In Marvel, we saw it when he seized the Autobots' command. In IDW, we see echoes of the same pattern, Grimlock's power drawing him into alliances and decisions that erode his principles piece by piece. He's no longer just a warrior, he's a ruler. And for the first time, his greatest battles aren't against the Decepticons, they're against himself. Because pride doesn't just rise, it isolates. And in Grimlock's case, it always starts the same way, with a crown no one gave you. In the aftermath of Optimus Prime's death in the Marvel Comics series, Grimlock didn't wait for votes. He didn't hold counsel or seek wisdom. He crowned himself king. It wasn't some subtle coup. He ruled by decree, and when someone disobeyed, even Blaster or Goldbug, he punished them like traitors, not comrades. He exiled dissenters, sent Autobots on doom missions, prioritized control over morale. He became obsessed with recovering the Ark, not for strategy, but for pride. While his enemies feared him, his allies began to rebel. Because when the throne is built on power instead of purpose, it is just a house of cards, and eventually it collapses. This wasn't the Grimlock we saw in the cartoons. This was something darker, sharper. He still fought for the Autobots. He still believed in the cause, but he confused loyalty with obedience, and leadership with control. Because deep down, he wasn't fighting Megatron anymore. He was fighting Optimus's ghost, trying to prove he was worthy, trying to prove he could lead better, stronger, harder. But the harder he ruled, the more isolated he became. Blaster formed a rebellion, the Dinobots fractured, the Autobots lost morale, and Grimlock, once the loudest voice in the room, found himself speaking into silence. And in the end, the crown didn't make him a king, it made him a cautionary tale. Not because he lacked strength, not because he lacked the wisdom to know when to share the weight. His pride didn't just isolate him, it endangered everyone under his command. Because strength may win battles, but it's humility that holds armies together. And in the world of IDW, this lesson gets even harsher. This Grimlock wasn't just another self-proclaimed leader, he was a haunted one. It began with guilt. Guilt over losing control. Guilt over killing Scar, the Dinobot medic, during a rage-fueled transformation. Guilt over dragging his team into exile, into battles they didn't need to fight, into pain they never fully recovered from. Like all proud men and bot alike, he buried the guilt beneath more violence. He defied orders. He hunted Shockwave across time and worlds. And when the Dinobots fell, when they suffered, when they were captured or reprogrammed, Grimlock blamed himself. But he didn't break, not yet. In the Maximum Dinobot arc, we see him at his most conflicted. Scorponok turns his own team against him. The Autobots question his loyalties. Even the Dinobots, his brothers in arms, lose faith. Sunstreaker reaches out. Hot Rod offers backup, but Grimlock refuses. He won't risk anyone else. Not again, not after what happened to Scar. And so, he charges in, alone, against Scorponok's army and his own twisted creations, because some warriors would rather fall than admit they're broken. Grimlock doesn't beg for forgiveness. He doubles down. He acts alone. He risks everything, not for justice, but for atonement. And that's the key difference with this version. He never wanted power. He wanted redemption. But instead of healing the wound, he kept ripping it open, trying to bleed the guilt out. Even when imprisoned in Garrus 9, tortured, stripped of language, and left the shell of who he was, Grimlock kept one truth buried deep within his spark. He failed the ones he swore to protect. And when he finally escapes, when his mind begins to return, we don't see a monster. We see a bot still trying to make things right. Because here's the quiet truth both continuities share. Grimlock was never corrupted by ambition. He was crushed by responsibility. And in trying to carry it alone, he broke. Because pride doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just refuses to ask for help. And that is what makes Grimlock so tragic. He wasn't chasing conquest like Megatron. He wasn't seeking purity like Shockwave. He wanted to protect his brothers, to lead them, to save them, but he never learned the difference between sacrifice and self-destruction, and in trying to be everything, he lost the very thing that made him strong, his team. Before we continue our look at the King of the Dinobots, make sure to follow or subscribe to Disassembled Heroes and Villains on your favorite podcast app. Every week, we dive into the minds of monsters, legends, and fallen gods, to uncover the truth behind their power and the pain behind their purpose. And next week, Disassembled Deep Cuts returns to unveil one of Cybertron's most cursed creations, a vessel of primordial chaos, a soldier twisted by darkness and reborn through corruption. We trace the rise and fall of Thunderwing. Then, we turn to a different kind of monster in next week's episode of Disassembled Heroes and Villains. A weapon with a soul, a demon with a destiny, a hero forged in hellfire. We face the unholy might of Hellboy. And if you want to help shape the future of Disassembled, vote every Wednesday in the Handsome Comics YouTube community poll. Now, back to the throne and the king who never asked to wear the crown. While Grimlock's story has been marked by rage, rage only takes you so far. And in time, even the fiercest warriors must ask a different question. What now? In the aftermath of betrayal, exile, and grief, Grimlock begins to change. Not suddenly, not completely, but in the final years of IDW's first universe, we don't see a tyrant clawing for control. We see a survivor, scarred by his own failures, fighting to reclaim purpose. This Grimlock doesn't scream for dominance. He follows his team, protects the weak, and when the galaxy begins to unravel, he doesn't seek vengeance. He quietly joins the fight, not to prove he's the strongest, but to prove he still matters. And across the multiverse, in the war for Cybertron and aligned timelines, we find that same quiet evolution. This is no longer the Grimlock who challenged Optimus for command. He's not the brute who sees compassion as weakness. This Grimlock is strategic, tactical, a commander who learned to slow down, not because he's weaker, but because he understands the cost of haste. Even after being brutalized by Shockwave's experiments, even after losing control of his mind and body, he fights his way back, not just for freedom, but to clarity, because raw power is just noise without wisdom to guide it. And in this age of war, where every warrior is a weapon, Grimlock becomes something greater, a weapon that chooses when not to strike. There's a moment in every warrior's life where the fist stops swinging long enough for reflection to creep in. For Grimlock, that moment didn't come at the height of battle, it came in the ruins that followed. Late in IDW's initial continuity, Grimlock isn't a king, he isn't even a leader. He's a relic, forgotten, exiled, and barely remembered by the cause he once gave everything for. But time has softened something in him, not his strength, but his impulse, not his instincts, but his judgment. When the galaxy begins to collapse, when Unicron returns and Cybertron teeters on the edge of oblivion, Grimlock doesn't roar into the spotlight. He steps forward quietly. No crown, no declaration, just purpose. We see him rescue RC and Elarion from annihilation. We see him stand beside Soundwave, not as a rival, but as an equal. And when Optimus speaks, Grimlock listens, not with defiance, but with understanding. Because this Grimlock isn't fighting for control anymore. He's fighting to protect, not to dominate, not to punish, not to prove himself, but to preserve what's left of a dying world. And that shift, that maturity, doesn't erase his past, it reframes it. He still carries the scars of the war he waged on himself, still mourns the team he failed, still shoulders the burden of choices he can't undo, but he no longer lets pride steer the ship, because he learned something that strength alone could never teach, that the greatest warriors know when to fight and when to stand down. Even the way he moves feels different. The rage is still there, but it's been reshaped, polished into something colder, sharper, more controlled. Grimlock hasn't grown weaker, he's grown disciplined. We see that even more clearly in the War for Cybertron continuity. In Fall of Cybertron, Grimlock's origin is rewritten. He's no longer the result of Autobot science. He's a soldier, brutal, efficient, and deeply loyal, chosen for a special mission to investigate the rise of Shockwave's monstrous experiments. But he never makes it back. Captured, tortured, reforged, Shockwave doesn't just alter his frame, he violates his autonomy. He mutates Grimlock into something unrecognizable, a beast, a dinosaur, a weapon stripped of will. But it's not the transformation that breaks him, it's memory. The memory of his team. Slag, Snarl, Swoop, and Sludge, the memory of his orders, the memory of who he was before that cage, and more importantly, who he chose to be after it. Because in this universe, Grimlock is no longer ruled by instinct. He's intelligent, tactical, deliberate. He doesn't fly into rage blindly, he weaponizes it. He holds it in reserve, waits, studies his enemy, and then he unleashes it with surgical precision. He's dangerous not because he's wild, but because he's focused. And when he finally escapes, when he reunites with the Dinobots and joins the final defense of Cybertron, he doesn't demand a throne. He doesn't need one. He takes the field like a general. He listens, he leads. He waits for the right moment, the right strike, the right target, because by now, Grimlock knows the difference between power and purpose. He knows that rage may burn hot, but it burns out. But discipline endures. Even his relationship with Optimus shifts. No longer a challenger to the head of the Autobots like in other timelines, Grimlock now fights beside Prime with mutual respect. They don't always agree, but they understand each other, because both have carried burdens no one else could see. Both have made choices that tore their teams apart. Both have paid the price for leading in a world that doesn't forgive mistakes. And Grimlock, once defined by rebellion, becomes something more enduring. A symbol not of dominance, but of determination. Not of brute force, but of battle-hardened wisdom. Not a tyrant, not a ruler, but a protector, by choice. And perhaps that's the greatest testament to his growth. He never stopped being strong, he just stopped needing to prove it. Because in the end, Grimlock's journey isn't about becoming the strongest, it's about becoming the most complete version of himself. He was forged in violence, tempered by failure, and redefined through discipline, not by changing what he was, but by finally learning who he wanted to be. But what happens after the war? When the rage cools, when the enemies are gone, when there's no more throne to challenge, no battlefield to claim, what does a warrior become when there's nothing left to fight? For Grimlock, the answer didn't come from a crown or a kill count. It came from something far more difficult: connection. Because there's one final evolution that strength alone can't unlock: the courage to be gentle. And in continuities like Cyberverse and Earthspark, we witness a version of Grimlock who isn't defined by his fury, but by his friendships. He doesn't lead through dominance, he learns through humility. He sacrifices, he trusts, he grows, not harder, but softer. And in doing so, Grimlock becomes something we never expected. Not just a warrior, not just a protector, but a symbol of how far even the fiercest can rise when they stop fighting the world and start choosing to serve it. There's a version of Grimlock many fans never expect to see. Not the war machine, not the tyrant slayer, not the towering beast stomping his enemies into slag, but the guardian, the friend, the gentle giant who learns that real strength isn't about domination, it's about compassion. We see this most clearly in Earthspark. Here, Grimlock isn't an outsider or a weapon of last resort. He's part of something deeper, a family. He bakes with humans, he helps train young Terrans, he uses his fire breath to cook, not conquer. But his past still lingers, haunted by mind control, rage flashbacks, and the trauma of war. Grimlock doesn't bury his instincts, he wrestles with them. And when those instincts flare, threatening the ones he's grown to love, he listens, he trusts, he lets others in. Because true courage isn't just charging into battle. Sometimes it's stepping back, letting others rise, believing that love can be stronger than violence. This version of Grimlock doesn't reject who he was. He reframes it. He turns pain into patience, power into purpose, fury into faith. But to truly understand how far Grimlock has come, we need to go back to Cyberverse. Because there, we meet a Grimlock who has already faced the war within and emerged with a deeper understanding of who he wants to be. He's still proud, still powerful, still wildly capable of leveling half a battlefield when the situation calls for it, but he's also kind. He forges friendships with Earth's dinosaurs. He throws parties on the Ark to lift morale. He looks out for his teammates, not with brute force, but with heart. When the Autobots crash on Earth, Grimlock doesn't immediately rejoin the fight. Instead, he lives among the wildlife, learning, adapting, even building a home for himself. He chooses exile, not out of shame, but out of reverence, because he knows he's dangerous. And rather than risk harming others, he builds a life where his power can be channeled into something peaceful, something meaningful. Even when he eventually rejoins the Autobots, he doesn't seek glory or recognition. He's just happy to be useful, happy to protect. And when danger strikes, when the Earth is threatened, when the Allspark is stolen, when chaos erupts, Grimlock doesn't roar for command. He quietly steps back into his role. He shields the weak. He holds the line. He volunteers for missions no one else can survive. Because now, he fights not because he's angry, but because he cares. And maybe the most powerful transformation he undergoes isn't mechanical, it's moral. Because in Cyberverse, we see a bot who has wrestled with his instincts and chosen something better, a new identity, forged not in rage, but in responsibility. Even his relationship with the other Dinobots reflects the shift. They don't just follow him because he's the strongest. They follow him because he trains them, guides, builds Volcanicus not just as a combiner of bodies, but as a union of wills. And in fights with Trypticon and final battles against the Quintessons, it's not Grimlock's rage that turns the tide. It's the unity he fosters, the selflessness he models. And when the war is finally over, when peace is signed and Cybertron begins to heal, Grimlock isn't on a throne. He's in McAdams, laughing with his friends, raising a toast to the future, and that future exists because he helped protect it, not with fear, but with faith. Because the strongest version of Grimlock isn't the one who bites the hardest, it's the one who knows when not to bite at all, who trusts his team, who believes in second chances, who serves something greater than himself. And maybe that's the version we all need to see, because if even Grimlock, the walking embodiment of fury and fire, can learn to lead with love, what's stopping us? We've seen the beast, we've seen the warrior, we've seen the king who conquers his enemies, but what about the one who conquers himself? Because across every battlefield, every continuity, every timeline, Grimlock's greatest evolution isn't a new form or a new weapon, it's what he's chosen to become. He doesn't abandon his power, he refines it, he learns restraint, he chooses humility, he transforms from a force of destruction into a protector, a mentor, even a friend. And in doing so, he reflects something we rarely expect to see from a character built for war: redemption. This isn't just the story of Grimlock, it's the story of anyone who's ever struggled with anger, with pride, with the instinct to lash out instead of lean in. Because while the world teaches us to fight for dominance, Grimlock shows us the real war is within, and the real victory is becoming the kind of man who doesn't need to roar to be strong. We all know what it means to roar, to raise our voice in anger, to throw our weight around, to make the world feel our presence because we're afraid it might ignore us otherwise. And for most of his life, Grimlock did just that. He roared when he felt overlooked, when leadership failed him, when trust was broken, when he didn't have the words to explain the pain underneath the fury. But something changed. Across every continuity, from the battlefield to the inner sanctum of Acadams, Grimlock didn't just transform in the mechanical sense. He evolved. No longer a brute, he became the kind of warrior who no longer needed to shout to be heard, the kind of leader who no longer demanded loyalty through fear, the kind of bot who no longer saw gentleness as weakness. Because somewhere along the way, he realized real strength isn't about domination, it's about discipline. It's about the power to break and the decision not to, about being strong enough to lift others up without needing to stand on them. And that's a lesson far too many of us learn too late. We think strength is control, that leadership is command, that being a father, a friend, a man in this world means being loud, unmovable, and untouchable. But Grimlock teaches us something different, that humility takes more courage than rage, that protection demands more endurance than conquest, that raising others, children, students, soldiers, means letting go of pride and embracing patience. It's the father who doesn't explode when his kid pushes boundaries. It's the leader who steps back so someone else can rise. It's the man who walks away from the fight, not because he's weak, but because he knows winning isn't worth losing his soul. Grimlock has the power to destroy cities, but his true legacy lies in what he chose not to destroy. Instead of vengeance, he chose purpose. Instead of instinct, he chose identity. And that identity wasn't built on fury, it was forged in restraint, and that is a model for manhood. In a world that still glorifies aggression and dominance, Grimlock stands as something far more powerful, a symbol of what happens when power is tempered by love, when leadership is rooted in service, when fire becomes light, not just heat. Because anyone can roar, anyone can swing the biggest weapon in the room and demand to be feared, but the ones who change the world, the ones who raise families, who lead communities, who stand in the gap when everything's falling apart, are the ones who know when to stay silent, when to listen, when to be still. Grimlock's greatest lesson isn't how to win, it's how to wield strength without losing yourself, how to lead without crushing, how to love without fear, how to become the kind of man who doesn't need to roar because his life already speaks louder than any battle cry ever could. So the next time you're faced with that choice, to fight or forgive, to dominate or protect, to speak or stay silent, ask yourself, what would Grimlock do? And what kind of man do you want to become? Because even if a fire-breathing war machine can learn to lead with wisdom, with compassion, with sacrifice, then maybe we can too. Thank you for walking with us through the rage, reckoning, and redemption of Grimlock, through the battles he's waged, through the instincts he's wrestled, through the quiet choices he's made when no one else was watching. We've seen a monster forged in fury learn to master himself, a destroyer of tyrants become a protector of peace, and in that stillness between roars, he reveals something deeper, that true strength isn't measured by how loud you shout, by what you choose to stay silent about. That real leadership doesn't always stand at the front. Sometimes it waits in the shadows, so others can rise. Grimlock doesn't erase his past, he honors it. He grows from it. He chooses to be more, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Because becoming better isn't about perfection. It's about restraint, about serving instead of conquering, loving instead of lashing out, becoming the kind of man whose power lifts others, rather than crushing them. So before we go, ask yourself, who are you protecting? What is your strength really for? Because the loudest warriors don't always speak, and the strongest leaders don't always lead. Sometimes they listen, they trust, they build, they choose, and so can you. So stay strong, stay steady, and as always, stay handsome. And remember, you are not your anger, you are not your scars, you are what you choose to become, starting now.
Optimus Prime stands tall as the embodiment of courage, sacrifice, and service. So when that image is stolen, when it's hollowed out and twisted, it's not just an imitation, it's a warning. Because a clone isn't just a copy, it's a question. What happens when you strip a hero of his heart, when power remains, but purpose is gone? To answer that, we have to look at the shadows he leaves behind. If Optimus Prime stands for service, then his alternate versions stand for submission, not to duty, but to control. They wear the same face, carry the same voice modulators, the same command protocols, the same iconic silhouette of the Autobot commander that the galaxy has come to trust. And yet, something about them is always off. Maybe the optics glow the wrong color, maybe the voice lacks conviction, maybe they don't speak at all. But whatever the difference is, you feel it, like a chill in the spark,
a fracture in the facade. These are the evil clones of Optimus Prime. But don't be misled by the word clone, because a clone isn't just a copy, it's a bastardization, a hollow echo that forgets the soul it was meant to honor. In fiction, cloning a character is never just about duplicating the body, it's about stripping away the soul and asking what remains. So what does it mean to clone Optimus Prime? To understand that, we first have to understand who he is. Optimus Prime isn't just a warrior, he's a standard, a mythic embodiment of selflessness, discipline, and moral clarity. Across nearly every continuity, he's the figure others rally behind, not because of brute strength, but because he leads by example, because he sacrifices, because he serves. He carries the matrix of leadership, yes, but more importantly, he carries the burden of choice, of restraint, of being strong enough to win and noble enough to lead. In a world where power is often loud, angry, or selfish, Optimus is the counterweight. So when a clone is made, what gets left behind? Sometimes it's will. Nemesis Prime and Transformers Prime is literally just a drone, designed to imitate and destroy, but incapable of choice. Other times, like in 2001's Robots in Disguise, the clone starts with no identity at all, until it decides to become something else. And in the case of Shattered Glass Optimus Prime, the twist isn't that he's missing something, but he's gained too much. Pride, paranoia, and the belief that freedom is just another word for domination. Each one reflects something different, but they all echo the same question: what happens when strength is divorced from virtue? Optimus fights because he must. Nemesis fights because he's told to. Scourge fights because he wants to. And Shattered Glass Optimus fights because he believes he's right. 3 shadows, 3 distortions, 1 stolen legacy. Because evil clones don't just threaten the Autobots, they threaten the idea of leadership itself. They remind us that iconography can be weaponized, that the appearance of morality can be faked, that wearing the face of a hero means nothing if you don't carry the weight of that role. And in a universe where symbols matter, where the image of Optimus Prime inspires armies and civilizations, those shadows become especially dangerous, because they prove how easy it is to fake a hero, and how rare it is to be one. So as we look into these 3 reflections, Nemesis Prime, Scourge, and Shattered Glass Optimus, we're not just tracking the trajectory of villains, we're tracing the limits of identity. We're asking what it really means to be a leader, when even your evil twin can speak your words and wear your armor. And maybe, most importantly, we're asking what it means to serve a cause when you no longer remember why. Not every shadow chooses to fall. Some are cast by force, created in labs, programmed in secret, unleashed without ever knowing why. They don't ask questions. They don't make decisions. They just follow the code written into their frame. Because the first step towards tyranny is turning leadership into automation. And the clearest example of that is a Prime with no voice, no soul, and no purpose, except destruction. Nemesis Prime. No voice, no spark, only a face. And it's the wrong one. In Transformers Prime, when the rogue paramilitary group Mech sets out to create a weapon powerful enough to challenge the Autobots, they don't build something new, they build something familiar, recognizable, trusted. They build a copy of Optimus Prime, but not just any copy. This is Nemesis Prime, an empty vessel molded in Optimus's image, but stripped of everything that makes him who he is. No sentience, no morality, no conscience, he doesn't speak, doesn't question, he doesn't hesitate, he obeys. Controlled remotely by Silas, the leader of Mech, Nemesis Prime is pure function, designed to infiltrate, destroy, and confuse. He attacks humans, fights Autobots, and wears the face of the one leader who would have protected them all. That is the true horror of Nemesis Prime. He isn't evil in the way we usually understand it. He isn't ambitious. He doesn't lust for power. He doesn't even know what he is. He's evil by design. A machine mimicking a hero, a tyrant by programming, a puppet of destruction masquerading as a protector. And that makes him all the more terrifying, because Nemesis Prime represents a deeper warning than just brute force. He's a vision of leadership hollowed out. What happens when the body remains but the soul is erased? What do you get when you take away a leader's conscience? His empathy, his capacity for self-sacrifice, and leave behind only the armor and authority. You get a weapon, not a guide, not a servant, a mere tool. And tools don't care what they're used for. They don't ask who gave the order. They don't protect. They don't repent. They just execute. In Transformers Prime, that's exactly what Nemesis does. Mech unleashes him not just to test their technology, but to undermine trust in the Autobots. Imagine the public reaction. A figure that looks like Optimus Prime laying waste to cities, attacking civilians, spreading terror. It's the perfect corruption, because Nemesis Prime shows us that the image alone is meaningless, that even the most sacred symbols can be hijacked, bent to serve darker aims. In G1, the term Nemesis Prime never formally appears, but the same idea does. Evil duplicates, mindless machines, Corrupted reflections of Optimus use as blunt instruments of control, and across continuities, this pattern repeats. Nemesis Prime, when done right, isn't just another villain. He's a philosophical caution, a mirror held up to the concept of a hero itself. Because when power loses its purpose, when it's no longer tied to values, principles, or restraints, it becomes control. And when that control is used without a soul behind it, it becomes tyrannical. That's what makes Nemesis so disturbing. Not that he's strong, not that he's dangerous, but that he doesn't care. There is no inner conflict, no remorse, no false sense of justice. Only code, only commands. In a world shaped by leaders like Optimus Prime, who struggle with the weight of their decisions, who bleed for others, who question the cost of war, Nemesis Prime is the antithesis. He doesn't carry the burden, he is the burden, dropped like a hammer on anyone in his path. From a moral standpoint, Nemesis Prime becomes a kind of parable, because true leadership, righteous leadership, requires more than authority. It requires virtue. It requires the ability to choose restraint over revenge, service over dominance, discipline over chaos. Stripped of that, leadership becomes hollow, and power, unmoored from purpose, becomes oppression, because his creators feared freedom more than failure. And that too is another layer to this incarnation of Nemesis. Technology without ethics, power without accountability, image without integrity. They aren't just story tropes, they're warnings. Because when you can manufacture the symbol of a savior, but gut its meaning, you can control entire populations. And Mech knew that. They didn't choose Optimus Prime's body by accident. They chose it because it meant something, because it carried weight. They just forgot one thing. You can copy the frame, but you can't replicate the heart. Nemesis Prime teaches us that strength isn't in the armor. It's in the restraint to not use it. That voice matters. That soul matters. That the right to lead isn't earned by how hard you hit, but by how much you care. And maybe more importantly, he reminds us that some of the worst evils aren't loud or flamboyant. Sometimes, evil is quiet, silent, and obedient. And sometimes, evil wears a trusted face and never blinks. Before we shut down the control signal and leave this dark reflection behind, make sure to follow or subscribe to Disassembled Heroes and Villains on your favorite podcast app. Every week, we break down the icons and monsters who shape pop culture to understand not just what they became, but why they were forged in the first place. And this Friday, we descend even deeper to tell the story of a warrior whose rage shook the gods, a father of ashes, a destroyer of pantheons, a man who killed for vengeance and learned to fight for something more. Next up, we confront Kratos of the God of War saga. And next Tuesday, Disassembled Deep Cuts returns with a different kind of legend, one who shaped Prime, Cybertron, and the very mythos of leadership. Next up, we honor the legacy of Alpha Trion. And if you want to help choose who we face next, cast your vote every Wednesday in the Handsome Comics YouTube community poll. Now, back to the shadows and the weight of a stolen face. Not every clone is silent. Some speak, some think, some choose. And that choice is what makes them dangerous. Because while Nemesis Prime is terrifying for what he lacks, Scourge is terrifying for what he finds in identity. In Transformers Prime, Nemesis is just a weapon. But in 2001's Robots in Disguise, the next clone we face is something more. Born from Optimus Prime's spark data, Scourge was created to be a tool, a blank slate, a soldier without ego. But what happens when that slate starts to write its own story? When a copy of Optimus decides it no longer wants to serve, but to conquer? The result is no longer just a clone, it's a corruption. Because where Nemesis represents obedience without soul, Scourge is what happens when pride replaces honor, when ambition devours humility, and the reflection stares back with a smirk. He was never supposed to think. Scourge wasn't born in the traditional sense. He was forged, extracted from Optimus Prime's own spark data during a desperate experiment, then corrupted by Decepticon influence, a clone not of flesh, but of identity. And at first, he was blank. No beliefs, no agenda, just programming waiting to be filled. But blank slates don't stay blank for long, not when power, confusion, and ego collide. As he gains sentience, something shifts. He begins to question, not the orders, but the original. Why serve Optimus Prime when you were Optimus Prime? Why follow when you could lead? Thus begins Scourge's downfall, not into madness, but into self-made ambition. He's not like Nemesis Prime, a drone without thought. Scourge chooses rebellion. He cultivates disdain for his template, seeing Optimus not as a hero, but as a rival. He sees compassion as weakness, restraint as cowardice, and service as subjugation. He doesn't just betray Optimus, he believes he deserves to replace him. And that is the heart of Scourge's corruption. It's not a glitch. It's not mind control, it's pride. Pride in his strength, pride in his independence, pride in his claim to an identity he never earned. He adopts the voice, the presence, even the tactics of Optimus Prime, but twists them into domination, because Scourge doesn't want to serve ideals. He wants to be the ideal. And like all who idolize the mask more than the bot, he becomes hollow in the process. He's cunning, brutal, a tactician with charisma, but beneath the armor lies a dangerous truth. He doesn't know who he is, only who he doesn't want to be. And so his mission narrows: destroy Optimus, not just physically, but symbolically, because Scourge isn't just reflecting his creator, he's declaring war on the very idea of selfless leadership. It's entitlement dressed as rebellion, power, unearned, but demanded, identity without humility. And the longer he walks that path, the more twisted he becomes. He lashes out not just at Autobots, but at his own team. He views allies as pawns, trust as weakness, victory as the only virtue. He's no longer a reflection, he's a perversion, because when Optimus earns loyalty, Scourge demands obedience. When Optimus sacrifices, Scourge seizes. Where Optimus leads by honor, Scourge rules by fear. And that's the cautionary tale. Cloning doesn't just threaten physical identity, it tempts spiritual corruption. Scourge began with nothing, and filled that void not with purpose, but with pride. He teaches us that strength without service breeds tyranny, that identity without humility breeds delusion, that the moment we believe we deserve power is the moment we stop being worthy of it, because a true leader serves the people. A false one demands to be served. And Scourge, he didn't just want to be Optimus Prime, he wanted to be better. And in trying to eclipse a hero, he forgot what made him one. And in the end, that's all pride ever does. But sometimes, evil doesn't wear your face, it is your face. Not a clone, not a copy, not a corrupted reflection, a perfect inverse. Because if Scourge represents the danger of pride, then Shatterglass Optimus Prime is something far more insidious. He doesn't just want to replace you, he wants to redeem you by force. In his eyes, conquest is compassion, tyranny is truth, liberation is a lie he tells the weak right before they burn. Because when ideals are unmoored from truth, when freedom becomes a weapon instead of a right, you don't get a hero, you get a holy war. And at the center of it stands a Prime who believes the only path to peace is through total submission. And now, enter the mirror and we'll see where freedom dies screaming. In most universes, Optimus Prime is a flame that guides the Autobots, a symbol of hope, courage, and sacrifice. But in the twisted world of shattered glass, that flame burns everything in its path. This Optimus doesn't fight for peace, he fights for freedom, but only his version of it. And in his warped ideology, you're either with him or you're fuel. In Transformers Shattered Glass, everything is inverted. The Decepticons are the resistance, the Autobots are the tyrants, and Optimus Prime, he's not a noble leader corrupted by power. He's a zealot who never knew virtue to begin with. From the very beginning, Shattered Glass Optimus Prime sees himself as the only moral authority. He doesn't question his methods, because in his eyes, the outcome justifies all. He preaches liberty, but demands loyalty. He uses words like justice and order, but what he really craves is domination, not for profit, not for sport, but because he believes it's righteous. And that's what makes him so chilling, because unlike Nemesis Prime, who is empty, and unlike Scourge, who slowly descends into corruption, Shatterglass Optimus starts as a villain, and he doesn't think he's a villain, he thinks he's a savior. In this universe, the Autobots were once ordinary laborers and workers, but when given sentience, Shatterglass Optimus saw it not as a gift, but a mandate. He believed that his sentience, his strength, and his power gave him the divine right to rule. So when Megatron rose up, this universe's Megatron, a peaceful intellectual fighting for equality, Optimus didn't just crush him, he launched a war against all who questioned him, turned the Autobots into a war machine, he weaponized science, subjugated entire planets, and forced the ideology of Autobot freedom onto civilizations that never asked for it. And if they resisted, he made examples of them. Because for this Prime, mercy is weakness, forgiveness is treason, and the truth is whatever serves his mission. Visually, Shattered Glass Optimus wears a white, teal, and purple color scheme, a stark contrast from the red and blue icon we know. But the real difference isn't the paint, it's in the philosophy. This Optimus sees war not as a burden, but a cleansing fire. He doesn't mourn the lives lost in pursuit of victory, he celebrates them. In one continuity, he personally executes traitors within his own ranks. In another, he doesn't inspire his followers, he demands them. And in doing so, he perverts everything Optimus Prime is meant to be. Because Shattered Glass isn't just a fun mirror universe gimmick, it's a warning that even the most righteous image, even the most beloved icon, can be twisted into something monstrous. When you strip away truth, when you abandon humility, when you claim absolute moral authority without question, you don't get justice. You get dogma, you get doctrine, you get a version of freedom that kills in the name of peace. And that is what makes Shattered Glass Optimus so terrifying. He doesn't see himself as the problem, he sees himself as the solution. To him, violence is necessary, control is compassion, and history will vindicate his atrocities, because only his version of truth will survive to tell the tale. Doesn't that sound familiar? Across history, in fiction and in life, some of the worst tyrants weren't monsters at all. They were messiahs in their own mind. They didn't take power, They earned it, at least they thought, and once they had it, they never let go. In some versions of Shattered Glass, Optimus holds the matrix of leadership, but rarely wields it, whether out of paranoia, pride, or fear of what it might reveal. He keeps it hidden, a symbol twisted by a tyrant who no longer serves its ideals. And still, he wears the title. Still, he demands obedience. And still, he speaks as if he carries the divine weight of Cybertron's destiny. But it's all a lie. And deep down, maybe he knows it. Because true leadership doesn't require domination. It requires sacrifice. It requires doubt and service and truth. Shattered Glass Optimus Prime is what happens when freedom becomes a shield for control. When leadership becomes an excuse for violence. When the image of a hero is weaponized without any of the virtue beneath it. He teaches us that tyranny doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes, it comes from the pedestal, from the icon, from the one who looks like a savior, but acts like a god, and in doing so, he exposes the most dangerous kind of evil, the kind that believes it's good. Because if Optimus Prime stands for truth, then Shattered Glass Optimus shows us what happens when truth is twisted, not discarded, not forgotten, but corrupted, until the war feels holy, until the destruction feels deserved. And that's the most terrifying thing of all, not the strength, not the armor, but the conviction. Because when a tyrant believes they're saving you, there's no limit to what they'll do in your name. He has the voice, the face, the frame, the title, but look closer. Nemesis Prime obeys without thought. Scourge rebels without cause. Shattered Glass Optimus conquers in the name of freedom. They look like him, but they are not him. Because Optimus Prime was never just armor, never just a name, and never a leader because he demanded loyalty. He led because he earned it. And that's where every imposter falls short. Because in the end, you can mimic the might, you can forge the mask, you can echo the voice and wear the symbol, but if there's no soul behind it, you're not a hero. Here's the shadow and stolen skin. So what makes Optimus Optimus? Let's return to the source. Not the clones, not the mirrors, but the original. The one who chose service over conquest, sacrifice over survival, and restraint over rage. Because sometimes, the real question isn't how you lead, it's why. So what separates a tyrant from a leader? Not power, not strategy, not even victory. It's purpose. And in the case of Optimus Prime, it's sacrifice. Because while his clones rule through domination or destruction, Optimus leads by choice. He carries the burden so no one else has to. Across every continuity, this theme endures. He doesn't seek the matrix of leadership for glory. He accepts it because someone must. Because without someone willing to serve, the powerful only learn to command. And that's the difference. Nemesis Prime follows orders without thought. Scourge seeks power without principle. Shattered Glass Optimus demands obedience under the illusion of liberty. But Optimus Prime, he questions. He doubts. He feels the cost of every life lost under his command. Whereas copies revel in control, he recoils from it. Because for him, leadership isn't a crown, it's a crucible. In Transformers Prime, we see him hesitate before engaging the enemy, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. He doesn't charge into battle for conquest, but because standing aside would mean others fall in his place. In G1, he constantly balances action with morality, never losing sight of why he fights, to protect life, not dominate it. He doesn't simply just defeat Megatron, he saves humanity, often at a greater personal cost. And in IDW, his arc becomes almost biblical. He begins as Orion Pax, a clerk, a thinker, a believer in justice. He rises not because he's the strongest, but because he speaks truth to tyranny. Even when granted ultimate power, he remains haunted by the weight of command. He fails, he questions, but he keeps going. Because being a Prime isn't about being perfect. It's about being accountable. His clones often mock that restraint. They see it as weakness, but that is the irony. Restraint is the highest form of strength. When Nemesis Prime lashes out without thought, Optimus stands firm, choosing not to strike unless he must. When Scourge is consumed by ego, Optimus humbles himself before the very soldiers he commands. When Shattered Glass Optimus justifies atrocities in the name of freedom, the true Optimus sacrifices himself just to preserve. This isn't just storytelling, it's a moral philosophy, because true leadership requires more than firepower. It demands principle. It means choosing the hard path, the slow path, the one paved not with adoration, but with consequences. And no one bears the weight like Optimus Prime. He doesn't run from death, he accepts it, he faces it, and sometimes he even embraces it if it means someone else might live. Think about that. What was the last time a clone of Optimus chose to die so others didn't have to? They don't, because they were never built to serve, only to conquer. Optimus Prime in every world reminds us that a leader doesn't just walk in front, he kneels first. He listens, he protects, and when the moment comes, he sacrifices, not because he wants to be a martyr, but because someone must take the hit. That's the soul his copies lack. That's the conscience they can't replicate, because in the end, if someone wears the face of a hero, but serves only themselves, are they truly the same at all? Thank you for walking with us through the darkened reflections of a legend, through drones who imitate, through tyrants who twist, through mirrors that warp the image of a prime into a weapon. We've seen what happens when strength is unmoored from conscience, when pride replaces humility, when freedom is used to shackle instead of liberate. Some wore his face to control, some spoke his words to deceive, some even believed they were fighting for good, but none of them bore the burden Optimus carries, because Optimus Prime isn't defined by his firepower. He's defined by what he chooses not to destroy. He doesn't demand loyalty. He earns it. He doesn't lead with ego, he leads with sacrifice. And that's the truth every clone misses. You can copy the frame, you can replicate the voice, but you can't manufacture the soul, because in the end, it's not how you look that defines a leader, it's what you're willing to carry. Sit with the power of restraint, the weight of duty, the truth that reveals leadership is service, never control. Because the clones of Optimus Prime may share his shape, but none of them carry his heart. So stay sharp, stay brave, and as always, stay handsome. And remember, evil may wear familiar faces, but it can never fake real sacrifice.